Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. We are back in Westeros as we see George R.R. Martin's fantastic short The Hedge Knight brought to life in this series. Part of this collection, titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, this was released to collect the stories of Duncan Egg. You can check that out here or in their graphic novel adaptation, and of course in this brand new TV show. Throughout this video we're going to be going through episode 1 and discussing the book and some of the major things in it, and also lots of spoilers on what could be happening. However, as always, I will save the spoilers until the end of the video. Some stuff we just need to touch upon to add context, like who the king is and so on and so forth, but we won't reveal who won the Dance of the Dragons in case you don't know yet.
I'm nice like that.
Now, this episode very much feels like one of two halves, where there being lots of things laid out that you can read on the surface, but then lots of things they don't reveal that have major implications. And yeah, stick around until the end if you've read the books or simply just want to know more. But I thought this was a very solid premiere. After House of the Dragon Season 2, I was worried that the franchise was dead again, but fear not! This is a fun and sentimental look at life outside of King's Landing, and it's a far more grounded story away from the Game of Thrones. But yeah, that's definitely enough of your time wasted. Now let's get into A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms.
I'm only a hedge knight.
Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is the timeline and where the show takes place. The opening sentence of the book says it's roughly 100 years before the events described in Game of Thrones. That was more of just a general way to open things up, but since then we've had more clarity on all the times and dates. This season takes place in the year 209, which is 77 years after House of the Dragon Season 2. This places the show around 89 years before Game of Thrones, and it's kind of a bridge between the two. Now because of this, it's been over 50 years since the last dragon died. The book is filled with illustrations by Gary Gianni, and one of the first we see is the skull of a dragon. However, you may notice 3 eggs around it, and you can kind of figure out what that leads to, but we are very much in a different world from the House of the Dragon days, and this goes beyond just the dragons. Tonally, the show's more like a comedy with lots of stuff played for laughs. The 3 stories in here are much lighter in tone compared to the Song of Ice and Fire books, and they're a more whimsical adventure. Sort of like A Knight's Tale rather than kids getting beheaded in their bed. The show's creators have said this is more like a 14th century England and will not shift perspective to the ones who rule Westeros. Unlike House of the Dragon as well, these stories are actual stories as opposed to Fire and Blood, which was pretty much just an in-universe history book. There's a range of different accounts there, with it being a journey through the Targaryen family tree, and for the show the creators basically picked what they thought was canon and then fleshed it out into episodes. But the Hedge Knight is very clear in its story, and that's what they've adapted for the show, even with lots of added bits. Now season 1 will tell the first story, The Hedge Knight, which focuses on the events of the Ashford Tourney. At present, King Daeron II sits on the Iron Throne, and it's an interesting time as this is the heir of the Great Spring Sickness, which ends up leading to Brynnen Rivers becoming the Hand of the King. Yep, that is the 3-eyed raven who we saw in Game of Thrones and got a brief vision of during House of the Dragon. As for what a hedge knight is, the episode basically touches upon what they are, with them sleeping in the hedges.
It's like a knight, but sadder. It's got to sleep in the hedges because no lord will have it.
However, the book also gives us a bit more of an explanation, with it saying, the only life he knew was the life of a hedge knight, riding from keep to keep, taking service with this lord and that lord, fighting in their battles and eating in their halls until the war was done. There were tourneys from time to time as well, though less often, and he knew that some hedge knights turned robber during lean winters, though the old man never had. It's also important to note that a hedge knight isn't a sellsword or mercenary. Rather, they follow the same code of honor that a knight does and won't lower themselves to be people who don't hit the thumbs up. Now, the show opens just like the book, with Dunk burying the knight that he squires for. This is a man named Sir Arlan, who in the book early on is only referred to as the Old Man. They recaptured the book's opening image perfectly though, and have the 3 horses in tree while Dunk digs the grave. The book also opens with the line, "The spring rains had softened the ground, so Dunk had no trouble digging the grave." Spring is of course a time of new beginnings, so it's fitting that this is where we start the journey at. However, beyond that we also have the idea of death and loss coming in the form of Arlan. I'm guessing that we might get a flashback episode at some point that fills in how the two came to meet, but in case we don't, here's what we learn about Arlan. Arlan originally came from Pennytree, which is a place in the Riverlands. Arlan was a man that was loyal to Highgarden, and he took part in the first Blackfyre rebellion. This was when the bastard son of Princess Daemon Targaryen and King Aegon IV led an uprising against the lands. Some felt that Daemon Blackfyre was the correct successor to Aegon IV, as the king had handed him the sword Blackfyre, which had been passed down from king to king. This originally came from Aegon I, and we saw Viserys bear it before Aegon II got it later. Daemon also legitimized him from a bastard to a true member of the family. Thus, Daemon took the throne. However, after a series of issues, he was seen as weak, and thus his half-brother rebelled. Daemon died in the final battle, and that was that, well, until the second Blackfyre rebellion. Arlan's nephew and Squire then died during this war, and he ended up meeting Dunk in King's Landing around the area of Flea Bottom. The young lad was around 5 or 6, and he took him to be his squire. Dunk's mother isn't really mentioned much in the book, but we do know she died when he was young while they lived in King's Landing. In the book, Dunk is around 16 or 17 at the time of the first story, but Peter Claffrey, who plays the character, is actually 29. But we won't knock it down a point for that. Beyond that, it's very, very faithful to the book, and right off the off, the show sets the tones by cribbing lines directly from the text.
Ought to be a septon here.
That comes directly from it, along with,
You were a true knight. You never beat me when I didn't deserve it.
We can also tell that it's going to be lighter than the previous shows, as we see Dunk getting slapped through different time periods. Now, I couldn't quite make out where these places were, but the pair travelled all around Westeros except the north. Dunk names Maidenpool, where he got blamed for stealing a pie. However, just like the book, he says it wasn't really him.
Except that time in Maidenpool. It was the inn boy ate the widow woman's pie. Not me. I told you. Doesn't matter now.
In the book, we can of course also hear his inner thoughts, and he thinks about how the old man was closer to 60 than 50, and how not many people can say that. He also thinks about how he was generous in his praises, as he didn't have much else to give. Dunk then says,
I'd leave your sword, but it would only rust in the ground.
Which is also a line that comes directly from the book. Beyond that, he also needs a sword to prove that he was knighted. But yeah, touching upon that line before about how some knights turn robber and the old man never did, within Dunk, this has instilled a sense of honour. Arlan essentially raised him, so he's pretty much a lost father, and the life of a squire is all the characters know. However, though Arlan couldn't provide him much, he's given him a rule of codes and principles, and taught him the values and chivalry of being a knight. That includes defending the weak and upholding the law and hitting the thumbs up. Although Arlan was a hedge knight, he was still granted the title of Sir. In real medieval times, they would be similar to a knight on retainer or the second or third sons of lords who wouldn't inherit the lands. As he lies down, Dunk mentions that he could eat like a king for a year if he sold the 3 horses. 2 of these are called Thunder and Old Chestnut, and they all kind of become his travelling companions. The book describes Thunder as an old man's warhorse, which is a line we hear touched upon later.
He's a warhorse, not a boy's pony.
But he obviously feels like he owes it to the old man, doesn't want to chuck them away, and basically like he's caring for them because it's what the old man would have wanted. Deep down, I think he also knows that if he takes this get-rich-quick scheme, then he'll lose it all eventually, and it'll lead to outlawing or beggary. Now in the intro, he also suggests going to a city like Lannisport, which is near Casterly Rock, the home of the Lannisters. The book has this line as well, but they added in Dunk acting it out and telling people to, fuck's sake, I've got to say this because of YouTube. Stop graping people, fuck's sake. As we saw in House of the Dragon, the city's watch wasn't this noble and gallant force that Dunk thinks it to be. He has a naive view of what it means to be a knight and a hero, with him being a lot like Lucy in Fallout. At Ashford, he learns that most of the lords and knights are dickheads and only interested in titles and vanity. The watch is also only just recovered from its second all-time low during Aegon IV's reign. So his only option at the moment is to make money at the Ashford Tourney. He also says how the sword fits his grip as well as it did Sir Arlan's. This shows how Dunk is ready to take up where Arlan left off and become a knight himself. But there is some doubt in his head. In the book, he decides to wear the shield over his back, clearly showing the sigil so that people get the impression he's a knight. Dunk is desperate to live up to Arlan from the off, and there is an omen that he's on the right track. This comes when he spots a robin in an oak tree. This is a direct reference to the line in the book, and it's also something he says later on that was there when he got knighted. Which, did you though? However, it is a very important moment as robins symbolise hope, new beginnings and renewal, and they often herald in the spring. It is thought in some cultures as well that robins also represent visits from deceased loved ones. So having this here as he says goodbye to Arlan and starts off his journey, it's a very great moment. We then get the Game of Thrones theme playing. Obviously, you're expecting an intricate title sequence and getting hyped up to be the new Game of Thrones show. Game of Thrones, boys, we are back. Hot D motherfuckers. I love the cut to him just shitting behind a tree though, and that's also a reference to the season 8 finale.
Best season ever!
Now this takes us to a rather low-key title sequence which basically sums up the whole show. I do like how it basically tells us right from the off though that this isn't your typical Thrones show. It's a very somber affair, even with the death kickstarting the story, and it's here that he heads off with Arlan's shield. It's also important to note that the shield is very, very battered and shows that hedge knights don't have the money that the knights of a keep do. The book describes how ill-fitting everything is and how the old man's belt is meant for skinny hips. But Dunk puts it on to try and live up to his master, which is a fitting metaphor for the series. He thinks about how he has 3 silver coins, which is enough for a good meal and as much ale as he cares to drink. So yeah, that Dunk then rides Sweetfoot and arrives at the inn, which is where he meets a small boy with a shaven head. In the book, the boy's coming out of some water and is just outside the stables. He also first appears naked, and yeah, you can obviously see why they didn't want to do that for the series. This is Egg, who's a very good egg though, and he becomes a big character in the franchise. For now though, he's just a lowly stable boy who starts by smart-mouthing Dunk. Dunk seemingly imitates Arlan and the other adults he saw growing up as he threatens the stable boy with a clout around the ear. All this stuff about Egg saying he could help if he wanted to, and Dunk saying he'll get a clout, that's all stuff that comes directly from the text. As a fan of it, I just loved seeing these words come to life, and they've clearly paid close attention to the novel. Entering the inn though, it's very ominously empty except for one dude passed out drunk and a guy in front of the fire. Dunk's been offered food just like the book, and again the scene, complete with dialogue, is almost one for one with the text.
There's good lamb, roasted with a crust of herbs and some ducks my son shot down. Which will you have?
Both.
And yeah, I love how Dunk just says both. There's no health and safety here either, and no scores on the doors as the lady drinks out of the cup and then she fills it for Dunk. As she mentions, the entire place is empty, as it turns out everyone's headed for the tourney at Ashford. She seems to have contempt for the knights though and says,
"And I never knew a joust to change the price of eggs."
They even touch upon the girl on the steps who we cut to next, and in the book it says she basically giggles at all the knights who ride past. Although the innkeeper says she hasn't known a tourney to change things or the price of eggs, this one does change the future of Westeros and eggs. I'm saving that for the spoiler section, I do promise you that, but the future changing is hinted to in the next shot with his line from a drunken lord.
I dreamed of you.
It's something we will talk about in our big spoiler section as the dream plays a massive part in the story. Visions and dreams go right back to Daenerys the Dreamer, who prophesied that Valyria would fall. Helena Targaryen also had weird cryptic prophecies in House of the Dragon, and we had the Weirwood Tree during Season 2. The drunk then stands up and says nothing, but he does say a bit more in the book. He says he's going to be sick and wanted a whore, but unfortunately there were none. The innkeeper then tells Dunk to ignore the Lord, implying that he's drunk and that there's a weird secret going on. The coin's also placed on the table, which appears to be a clue. There we can spot a Targaryen sigil, which you'll know from its usage on the banners in the kingdom. Can't really touch upon it without ruining most of the plot, but the book does give us an insight into Dunk's thoughts. A sad creature, thought Dunk. But why did he think he knew me? He pondered that a moment over his ale. Like the book, Dunk then enters the stable to find Egg wearing his armour and sitting atop his horse. I think it's clear they used a lot of the illustrations for inspiration, and luckily they appear quite frequently. Almost on pretty much every page, as you can see. Now, there's no promised clout around the ear, and Dunk gets properly roasted.
Your belt's made of rope.
In the book, the way they break this part's up phenomenal as well, and they have the two characters standing on opposite pages. Egg then says that his mum is dead and reveals he isn't actually the innkeeper's son. It's a similar story to Dunk, which is why he almost takes pity on him. A knight took pity on him and lifted him out of Flea Bottom before then making him a squire. This is something he eventually does for Egg, but here he turns down the request. Now in the book, we learn what Dunk's thinking, and he does this because he thinks Egg will have a better life at the inn than he will on the road. He throws him a coin and says he'll scoop it up the minute he's gone, but as we see, little Egg doesn't. And this is a great little detail, and one that shows that he's not interested in money. It then feels like I'm playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 as our lad heads to Ashford. Luckily for him, there's no bandits on the road, but Ashford is surrounded by people trying to earn money while the tournament's going on. Dunk then checks out the Tourney grounds, and we've seen tourneys like this a couple of times in the show, and they're often what kickstarts a series. The Mountain Ormos kill Loras Tyrell in Season 1, and Daemon fought against Criston Cole in the House of the Dragon premiere. We also had Brienne of Tarth fight to become part of Renly's Kingsguard. Now this is a bit spoilery, but they do touch upon it in lots of different things, so you should know by now, you fake fan if you don't know, but Brienne is one of Dunk's ancestors. That's where she got her height from, and you can see shades of her character here in Dunk. Dunk then looks up at the castle, and we can see the Lannister camp below it. Now this is slightly different from the work, as there are towers over everything. At the castle, we can see the House Ashford banners being put up along with the Ashford soldiers. In the book, Arlan had taught Dunk to recognise the banners of every house, despite being unable to read or write. The arrival is pretty much exactly how it plays out in the source material as well, with even the kids fighting with swords in the background. Dunk then rides past some of the grounds and sees the joust's preparation. Now, this is where the story starts to deviate from the book in structure, so I don't need to hold it up anymore. It does come back around towards the end though, and when he meets Egg, that's basically where things go from here. The episode covers roughly about the first 20 pages of the book though, with the whole story being 180! In the book, he also tries to sell one of the horses and purchase some armor from a blacksmith named Steely Pate. This is someone who we will likely see later on, as the character has been cast for the show. It's after this though that he goes to visit the Master of Games. Outside we can see his son's sigil, which is the House of Ashford. Arriving at the office, I love how this dude just has his kids playing in his office, which reminds me a lot of me working from home, and it's something I have to put up with a lot of the fucking time. And if the background ever changes mid-video, it's because the kids run in and stole something off it and ran back out. But yeah, Dunk tries to enter by saying that he was knighted, but the Master hasn't heard of the island of Pennytree. Now this is actually a large village in the Riverlands that has constantly exchanged ownership. The Brackens and Blackwoods often fight over it, and we've seen their rivalry throughout the House of the Dragon series. I also love these quick flashback to Dunk's youth. In the present, Dunk tells him that Arlan said he was to be a knight, and we then flash back to the past where he asks him the question and Arlan just ignores him. It almost feels very Monty Python-esque. He appears to remember his time as a squire a bit better than it actually happened, and is clearly trying to show himself as being glorious. Dunk says that he swore to serve the realm with all his might, but there were no witnesses, which reminds me of when J.R.R. Tolkien said I should finish the Game of Thrones series or something, but no one was around. And it was J.R.R. Tolkien, I remember. The Master then reveals that quite a grim punishment awaits if he can find no one to claim that Sir Arlan was indeed real. Well, punishment, depending on who you ask him. A chair and a sword might be nice to your mum, eh? However, it's all a prank, and this is all new for the books. He says this is the Reach though, not the Riverlands, and kind of shows how little they care here. In the books, the Tullys ruled over the Riverlands, and there they put honour above everything. Whereas here, they're kind of grossly hocking phlegm into a jug. I'm not even going to do an impression of it. It grossed me out, that. The Master then mentions that they couldn't have poor farmers chasing down Lionel Baratheon, who's someone we meet a bit later. The book mentions his nickname, the Laughing Storm, and we see him put on a massive party.
Lionel Baratheon, the Laughing Storm they call him.
Now this nickname is because he laughs when fighting in battle or tourneys. I'll discuss his lineage when we get to that scene, but if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll all know Ned will love a bit of the Baratheons. Ned, you bastard! For now though, Dunk needs money. However, Lord Ashford has charged the Master to turn away any landed knight or sellsword looking for a challenge. The tourney in the book is in honour of his daughter's 13th name day, and he's most likely trying to curry favour with the crown. This is something that Lionel also touches on later when Dunk meets him, and the Master says that there's princes about the area. We see these later on, and it's helping with the world building without really diving too heavily into it. The showrunners have stated that without the dragons, the royals need to actually care about the people, as they can't just rule through fear. They have to be present and curry favour, and even be seen at a minor lord's tourney. The land was rocked massively in the Dance of the Dragons, and there's still somewhat a bit of an uneasy peace. However, because royals are attending the events, only the most prestigious knights are allowed to take part. The Master then takes pity on him though, and asks if any true knight here would be able to remember his late master. It's here that Dunk remembers that Arlan served House Dondarrion. This was when Lord Dondarrion, Lord Percy Carnan, raised an army to defeat the Vulture King. That's a title that's been used by a number of different people who try to fight against the rule of the crown from the Red Mountains. Now, you may also recognise the house name, as Beric Dondarrion was in the Game of Thrones show. Duncan says that Manfred will remember him, and if he can get him to speak to the Maester, then he can then enter the tournament. And we will have a show! He doesn't admit that he doesn't have the coin for the ransom in the book, and here he's a little more bumbling as well. Such as when he hits his head and then says 7. The 7 is of course the gods in this world, so it's kind of like saying like, God's sake. I appreciate that attention to detail as well though, and it's something that you probably would say if you smacked your head like the like button. Peter Claffrey, who plays Dunk, is also about 6'3", and he's actually a former rugby player. Naturally as well, medieval buildings were tiny, and I've bumped my head countless times in York. And I'm 6'2", so I'm not that much smaller than him. I'm a giant. But Dunk is off to find someone who can say, yes, I remember your lord, and it's totally legit he'd knight you. Now outside we can see a guy walking on the left, and I actually noticed him in the tent later on when watching the show. I loved seeing the recurring background characters, and it just keeps us feeling like it's a real life marketplace. Behind Dunk we can also see the tent adorned with antlers, which becomes a big location later on. These are the Baratheon pavilions, and we then see the sigil of Tyrell on the left. That is a flower, and we have Dondarrion on the right, which is forked lightning. This is because a messenger from the Storm King, the ancient house of Dondarrion, was ambushed by Dornish men. Luckily, lightning killed the enemies, and he managed to reach the Storm King in time. For his bravery, he was then made Lord Dondarrion, and since then, they've carried the forked lightning sigil. Now, Dunk arrives at the tent and we see our first redhead chomping on some chicken. I believe she plays a dead woman later on, and we meet 2 of the other redhead ladies of the night. Manfred seems to have picked these women because they all have red hair, like him, and the man's clearly got a type. Apparently, it's all part of his ambition to make everyone have red hair, even if he has to bang a dude's wife. For now though, Manfred's just asleep, and thus Dunk has to kind of just wander around the area. One of them also offers to wake him for a stag, which you might think refers to an animal. However, it is a silver coin, which is a step below the gold dragon that we saw at the inn earlier. The Baratheon sigil is of course a stag, and yeah, it's all kind of playing into who rules what. Poor old Dunk though, he's super broke, so he can't even do that. However, luckily for him, our membership program where you get a breakdown a week early is just 99 cents a month, and even he can afford it. Either way, the other woman roasts him for being a hedge knight. I love how bumbling Dunk is though, as he's just constantly talking to his horse and basically just walking about the area resolute in his ambition to earn money and live his dream of being the truest of all knights. And yeah, he's probably the most earnest person here. He then walks past the training grounds and can see 2 Fossaways sparring. It's a brutal fight, and Stefan Fossaway defeats his cousin Raymond. They're from Cider Hall, which is our first of the apple puns. They talk about not being ripe, seeds, branches, and being rotten to the core. And I half expected Raymond to break out the apple dance. On the helmet, you can also see the sigil, which is a very big red apple. Now, they claim to be descended from the legendary Age of Heroes archer who was known as Foss the Archer. He became famous for shooting apples off the heads of women, which is something clearly inspired by William Tell. Stefan then challenges Duncan to a spar. He says that his sword is his by right, and it's so funny when Stefan says that's an odd thing to say, which is not a line in the book. But Duncan is like, yeah, I'm not getting involved in this weird family dispute. The pair, however, will prove to be big players in Duncan's story later on, hence why they're getting so much emphasis here. It's also important to know that an Owen Fossaway was also mentioned during Fire and Blood, and we might see him during Season 3, especially as we're kind of getting a soft introduction here. Dunk then finds a secluded spot near an elm tree and bathes, and it killed me how even he's grossed out by the smell of his own clothes. Now this is where I'd normally do my merch store shout out, but you've had enough adverts, so I'm skipping it. I will spare you this. Missing from this part of the story though is Duncan looking at a dragonfly and wondering why it was called that when it didn't look like a dragon. It's here that he then recalls Arlan telling him about the last time that he saw a real dragon. His grandfather had taken him to King's Landing and saw the last dragon a year before it died. Dunk says it was green and stumpy and perished after being poisoned by Aegon III. In the book, he then went to try and buy some armour, and I do wonder if they're saving that for next time. Duncan then rides into town and learns that Manfred's still napping due to his gouty toes. The woman named Red is also helping sew up a dude's trousers, and the bro's just out there completely Donald ducking. Following her into the tent, we then see a woman who appears to be dead. However, there's no silent sisters to prepare the body. We do see the stones on the eye though, and 'tis all playing on the tradition that the High Sparrow explained during Season 6 of Game of Thrones.
Do you know why we use these stones? To remind us not to fear death. We close our eyes on this world and open them on the next.
Considering these are also ladies of the night, it means that someone has a very, very creepy fetish. The women then compare their profession to his own. They both put their bodies at risk for the pleasure of strangers. He doesn't heed their warning though that jousting's a dangerous profession, as it's the only way to make some money and possibly live in a castle in service of a lord. He's just got to use his god-given gifts, and being so tall has its advantages in jousting. We then get a massive nighttime tour of the town, which leads into a banquet. This scene is new to the show and isn't in the book at all, but it does help to add some colour to Dunk's story. The Hedge Knight story is only like 118 pages long, with illustrations as well, so naturally needed some padding. Maybe a Lady of the Night's spin-off franchise. That has kind of gotten developed via Shay in Game of Thrones and Mysaria in House of the Dragon though, and they've been quite fleshed out in these seasons, with Mysaria not really being that much in the book, and make the Ladies of the Night spin-off show. But yeah, recently George R. R. Martin has said that he's given the showrunner like 10 different ideas. I think he's 10 or 11 ideas for where Dunk and Egg could go that haven't been in the books, and yeah, we're getting more Dunk and Egg content to live out the rest of time. But George, can you please finish the fucking main series?
No. No, I don't think I will.
But yeah, we're getting focused on a lot of different side characters, and the showrunners are aiming to flesh out the world of Westeros beyond the Lord, so it makes sense that they'd want to tell their stories. Both Shay and Mysaria mainly interacted with highborn Lannisters or the Royal Targaryens, so it's a nice change of pace to see them interact with someone who's barely even a knight. If a knight at all. They say farewell and tell him to go look after his body, as it's the only one he's gonna get. Guy's just gonna put himself all on the line though, and it's during this point that he comes across a puppet show. This is similar to the book, however the dragon's much larger here than how it is in the novel. And it even like breathes fire and shit. It's here that we first see Tanzelle, aka Tanzelle Too Tall, who will be a major catalyst for the events of the show moving forward. She's played by Tamsin Crawford, and in the book she's nearly as tall as Dunk himself. He becomes infatuated here and basically loves her across all the Dunk and Egg stories, and you can see why this moment would captivate him. These puppet shows are also something that was in the other series too. We've seen similar shows from Mummers and others, such as the puppet show in House of the Dragon and the play that Arya sees in Bravos. The show itself here is all about Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, who's someone that Dunk thinks about in the book. Serwyn existed in the ancient times of heroes during a time after the Children of the Forest made a pact with the First Men. According to the legends, he saved Princess Daerissa from the Giants and also slew the dragon Urax, which is most likely the dragon that we see here. Or Urax, it might look, the pronunciations are fucked. During this fight though, Serwyn used a polished shield to trick the dragon and speared it through the eye. It's of course inspired by the story of Perseus, who killed Medusa with a mirrored shield. He used it to avoid her gaze and then lop her head off. And it was a similar thing to basically what happened here. Speaking of gazes, right away we can see it's love at first sight, but he has duties to attend to first. Outside, he's then interrupted by Raymond Fossaway, who calls him a half-man. Raymond even says,
Aye, half man, half giant.
Half-man is the same nickname given to Tyrion Lannister, but there it meant because he was short. Raymond sees it as a compliment though, which reminds me of Hodor. Osha theorized that he had giant's blood in him because of his height and his third leg. The second meeting here though is different to the book, as he just watched the day's jousting with Egg. We then get another apple pun.
Though he is the senior branch of the apple tree.
At the moment, Raymond's only a squire, and thus he can't enter the tourney. But he does want to, and we'll talk about him more in the spoiler section. For now though, we've seen he's a good fighter, and Raymond then asks who shield Dunk means to strike. The chivalrous thing is to say none, but the knights usually have scores that they want to settle, or simply prove themselves by fighting the best. He asks if Dunk's hungry, and Dunk says he's hungry all the time, and the pair then head to Sir Lionel's pavilion. He's played by Daniel Ings, who you may recognise from the Gentleman TV show or Sex Education. The Lord tries to make a speech or a profound thought and says that 4,000 years ago, their ancestors fought with sticks, which then invented jousting. Now he might be referring to the coming of the Andals and the subsequent war between them and the First Men. He's far more measured for now though than his descendant Robert Baratheon, who I can slowly feel taking over my body. Ned, you bastard. Oh, Bessie. Oh, get out, Robert, you bastard. Now, I love how awkward Dunk looks as he pours some wine and everyone hangs on the Lord's word. Lionel isn't much of an orator though, and just offers 100 gold to the person, man, beast or god, who sticks him best. Now, maybe he is more like his descendant Robert Baratheon than he is like Renly.
Start the damn joust before I piss myself.
And a far cry from Stannis the Manus. As mentioned, this scene is new for the show though, and Dunk gets to eat as much as he wants while everyone dances. He then sees the chance to speak to Lionel, and it's like a medieval club with him going to the VIP area. Lionel asks him if he's been punched in the face before, and Dunk makes a good impression by just being very earnest. Dunk explains that where he grew up, you learn to go unnoticed. Flea Bottom was a hive of scum in villainy, and being the biggest guy there, Dunk would want to keep a low profile. Which, yeah, obviously, someone would want to make a name for themselves by defeating the tallest guy in town. Lionel says that the 7 above gave him tallness though, so he should be tall. Now this is further hammering home the idea he needs to use what the gods gave him. It's also a bit of jokey banter where he says if he doesn't stand tall, he'll name him a heretic and burn him, drown him, or drop him off a tall something. That something is what would have been done to witches or anyone who is deemed a heretic by the church in the Middle Ages. Lionel is expecting something from Dunk to curry his favour, but he's got nothing but his clothes and horses. Even a lord who can barely pay his ransom and whose people are poor handed over a knife to curry favour with Lionel. This shows the bleak feudalism of the Seven Kingdoms. Even though the lord's people starve in the winter, he still has to hand over a dagger to the lord for help. If sold, it might have fed a few of his people through winter, but he has to give it up to pay respect. Now the lord is also referred to as smug, and it does show that even the minor lords can just be out for themselves. Basically, everyone's jockeying for a higher position in the realm, and yeah, this is usually at the cost of their subjects' well-being. Lionel is clearly paranoid as well, as he thinks if someone doesn't bring a tribute, then they must be there to get him. But yeah, Dunk just says he's there for supper, which Lionel likes and says makes sense. I love how it's a very uneasy first meeting though, and how, it feels like if Dunk puts one foot wrong, then he could end up being killed. Speaking of putting a foot wrong, they then dance and have a macho game of trying to step on each other's feet. In the book, Dunk often thinks about whether he would even be allowed to challenge or joust a highborn lord or even a royal. So this is just an early sign that he'll be able to fight against those of a higher stature than him. That stature and those barriers are broken as we cut to Dunk next wearing the crown. I love this little touch as well, and shows just how much of good sport the lord is and how he doesn't see himself as better than. Lionel then recounts what sounds like a naval battle where he drove his ship into a storm. It wasn't a matter of being afraid, but something he had to do as his ancestors had done it before. Now I did try and find some information on this battle, but I don't recognise the name Aegon, so let us know in the comments below if you do. This is important though, as Lionel's touching upon loyalty and duty here. Doesn't matter if you're scared or don't want to rule, a lord needs to put everything aside and live just as his ancestors did. Baratheons are notably tough and strong, so being weak amongst the family is not an option, you bastard! Ugh! Many lives rest on the lord holding their position as well though, and this is why Robert found it so ironic that he was killed in a simple hunt. Dunk, however, agonises over things while Lionel has 2 centuries of family to be inspired by. Both are big and strong men, but luckily for Lionel, he has the advantage of his upbringing. It's kind of like when Jon Snow joined the Night's Watch and he easily beats up the bullies as he's had a master of arms to train him. Dunk is basically like the kids who joined up, purely because they had no hope in life. Lionel sees his tournament as an honour though, especially in this time of peace. There's no wars to fight, no way to really prove his strength beyond these artificial battles, so he has to embrace this because this is the only opportunity he's going to get to show that he is indeed deserving of his title and his name as well. Now if he loses, he does have the money to pay the ransom back with ease. As for Dunk though, he would be ruined, and as Lionel says, not even a knight, as he's also lost his horse. Dunk then asks him what he should do, and Lionel says,
I don't know.
He does know, because yeah, he's never been in a position like this. However, as much as he's above Dunk in stature, he may be the only lord who will ever actually speak to the character on a human level. Even with that though, the pair are still separated by the status given to them upon birth. Now while the pair are talking, we can also see Lionel use a small hammer as a fork. This is probably a reach, but it might be a reference to his future descendant, Robert. Oh, don't mention his name, he's coming back! You fucking bastard, Ned! Oh, get out! Robert, out! He infamously used a warhammer in battle and used it to kill Prince Rhaegar at the Battle of the Trident. And tridents are fork-shaped, and we did say it would be a reach. Lionel then leaves, and it's at this point in the night when people have coupled off and it's time to head home with a kebab as you haven't pulled. But Dunk then spots Manfred Dondarrion being let out of the tent and he goes to try and speak to him. Manfred is just a massive dickhead though, and he's shocked that Manfred can't remember Sir Alan. We then see a flashback of Arlan having an arrow pulled from his stomach, but Manfred says his father took 800 men into the mountains and it would be impossible to remember every single person. However, don't have to be rude about it. But yeah, that's it for Dunk. All the hopes that were pinned on Manfred remembering Arlan, that's all gone up in smoke now. He arrives back at the camp only to find Egg, who's made a fire and is cooking a fish that he caught, which is just like the book. Egg has proved himself to be a decent squire already though, as he's groomed the horses, washed his clothes and also made a fire. It doesn't stop him from roasting Dunk again though, as he asks where his pavilion is and even mocks his name. Now in the book, Dunk isn't sure where his name came from, and Arlan had just called him pretty much Dunk since they met. And even as an orphan, he'd never thought what it might be short for. Here though, he seems to know, but it could just be bluffing. He then lets a boy squire for him on the condition that he keeps the morals of being a knight. Dunk says he'll be fed and have clothes on his back and not beat him unless he deserves it, which echoes his thoughts on the old man. Egg seems to enjoy this slumming it though, and mentions the shooting star and how it brings luck to those that see it. A falling star brings luck to him who sees it, Dunk thought. But the rest of them are all in their pavilions now, staring up at silk instead of sky, so the luck is mine alone. I think it also speaks to seeing the beauty of the world when that's all you have to look at. The lords are busy in their parties, focused on themselves, whereas Dunk and Egg are looking up at the sky with hope in their hearts. A shooting star above a tree also becomes Duncan's sigil, and yeah, this moment is very, very important. This is a really good omen though, and in the Game of Thrones show and source material, you may remember the Red Comet from Season 2. Different factions across Westeros took it as an omen with various meanings, and some thought it was a good omen for Robb Stark, a return of the dragons, or a good sign for the Lannisters. Daemon even saw it during his vision at Luigi's mansion, Harrenhal. Dunk will spoil it later, but we end the episode with his omen bearing down on the pair and their newly formed union. That ends the episode, and overall I thought this was a fantastic addition to the Game of Thrones live action universe. Early GOT, it did have funny moments, and I think a show that's more hopeful, more earnest will delight a lot of fans, book readers, and people who also haven't read the books and aren't even fans. I also think it nicely juxtaposes House of the Dragon as well. Whereas that's serious and about wars and fighting kids, it's nice to see just some common folk in Westeros. So I really enjoyed it, and it was a fantastic adaptation for the start of the book. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Spoilers are coming, and this episode is filled with some big Easter eggs and a big sausage as well. We are back in Westeros though, and this episode was so endearing I had a grin on my face the whole time. While it doesn't contain the political intrigue or weaving narrative of the other shows, it's a fantastically charming piece of world building. There's also probably the best jousting scene I think I've seen in a long time, and lots of big things to talk about. Big!
Johnson. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can't show Sir Arlan's massive broadsword, but we begin with seeing a big sausage. Over the top of this, we hear Dunk telling his story as he tries to appeal to the knights and lords at the tourney. Carrying on from last week, all Dunk needs is someone to remember the late hedge knight so he can then enter the lists. I just love the juxtaposition between Dunk telling Arlan's story of being a chivalrous knight, and all the while we see him pissing outside after banging a villager. It mirrors the end of the episode when Dunk realizes that Arlan wasn't some great knight, as he whored and never won a tourney. However, as we've seen in the other two shows, he's an absolute saint compared to most of the people in Westeros. I love the way that this and the prior episode though basically start and end the same way, with Dunk remembering his master and then journeying through the day. I feel like every episode might be a day in the life of that begins at daybreak and then ends with the night. It would of course brilliantly play off the word night, and yeah, just set up a nice pace of how these episodes are going to play out. Now Arlan has of course fought in many battles in war, and in this intro we see how he died. We can see a cut on him that he ends up covering up, and he's very clearly a little worse for wear. Now this cut gets infected and over time just simply rots away. Being a lowly hedge knight, he wouldn't have the opportunity to be seen by a maester, and it's also essentially medieval England where they didn't have the medical advancements we have today. So yeah, you're the walking dead, sorry. When it came to his death, the book described him as having a chill, which he ended up dying from. Always read this as him succumbing from the flu or even the common cold. especially as they were often soaked to the bone in the rain. Dunk does describe Arlan as being someone who just gets on with life, even when he was dying. He tried to be a benefit to the people around them and even gave a villager a coin. I did wonder if this was also part of the peasant levies that Dunk described that Arlan fought with. May just be the owner of the place that he stepped in though, who let him have a bed for the night. On the right though, you can see the woman that Arlan spent the night with covering herself up with a blanket. Go on, mate! This is probably someone who he's just met on his last job, and I doubt it was ever anything meaningful. Arlan had no children or lands, and being a hedge knight was a rather lonely existence. They probably just rode about and then stayed somewhere like this, helped out people there, got a bed, and then rode somewhere else. Arlan is in very high spirits so after just getting his end away, and he starts singing while they ride on to serve someone else. Come on, Dunk! Now this song is actually in the book, and this moment's something that Dunk thought about as he buried his former master. As Dunk then presents this flashback, we see how Arlan slowly succumbed to the infection and over time just started to drift away. It's a really great way to show Arlan's story though, and as we see, this is Dunk telling the tale to a lord. He's trying to get him to remember him and recounting all of his great journeys in the best light possible. We then see the pair fighting in a field, which is a lot more like them just having fun. It's vastly different to how the Fossaway sparring was last week and just nowhere near as intricate or skillful. Lad's just smashing the shield like the like button, and we see as Arlan gets weaker and Dunk has to pick him up. Dunk then mentions House Florin, who are from the Reach and loyal to House Tyrell. The Tyrells come from Highgarden, and they've of course appeared a lot throughout the franchise. Now this story in itself is actually from the books. Arlan made a lot of money from serving the house, and at one point even tried to get Dunk laid. Dunk uses this to appeal to Lord Hayford and mentions that Arlan fought at Redgrass with the Lord's brother. This lord specifically was mentioned in the books, with him appearing during the Sworn Sword story. This happened in the time of the Blackfyre rebellion, which tore the Seven Kingdoms apart. In this, Aegon IV knighted his bastard son Daemon and bestowed the Sword of Blackfyre on him. Thus, some saw him as being the true successor to the throne. This is something that they've touched upon in House of the Dragon, and how if you wear the Conqueror's armor, hold the Conqueror's sword, you're basically going to be what people see as being the next in line. During Daeron II's reign, people then became dissatisfied with him, and Daemon grew up to be likened to Aegon the Conqueror. After peace was made with Dawn, the former bastard was then urged to launch a claim for the throne. So, very House of the Dragon-y again. The Battle of Redgrass then happened, which was a decisive battle in the Civil War that ultimately led to its conclusion. This was the battle where Arlan's nephew died at, and this led to Dunk becoming the replacement. The nephew was mentioned in the other Dunk and Egg stories as well, and featured in the Sworn Sword comic. It's a big bloody battle that Arlan just preferred not to talk about, possibly due to his nephew dying, but judging by the trailer, we may be seeing it soon. Now, I don't think that's spoiling, because it's guessing what's coming, but anything that is a spoiler, we will save for the big spoiler section at the end. Fucking hell, these names get worse every week. Anyway, this is Leo Tyrell, who plays a big part in the story of things to come. So far, we're only in the setup stage, but if you want to see what's coming down the line, then definitely go click our breakdown of the Weeks Ahead trailer. Now in the book, he's described as a very strong fighter, and Dunk and Arlan actually served him at Highgarden. Sadly, Leo doesn't recognise the name or them, and thus he continues going to others to beg. Now he watches Dunk and Egg move through the camp and pass the Baratheon banners. Egg says Arlan must have been a shit knight, and to be fair, yeah, he kinda was, mate, but at least he wasn't a twat like Sir Criston Cole. Dunk then tells Egg to go back to the camp, but Egg says that he will not leave his knight. He also says that it isn't right that he has to go and ask the Lord's permission.
This is undignified, sir.
Lad speaks about dignity and is rather posh, which is laying the groundwork for things to come. To Egg though, he's a knight of the realm and should be able to enter the lists without all this grovelling. Dunk also has clearly lived a childish fantasy of how these things work, which was likely an impression given to him by the old man. Egg also seems to know a lot about knights and is wise beyond his years. He tells him that he doesn't need permission and can just ride in and turn his arsehole into a lance hole. He's clearly used to viewing things from a position where he can just do what you want, and yeah, he obviously just joined Dunk without asking for permission. We'll talk about what this means later on, but I love that we're seeing this side with Egg.
Why do you treat these royal lapdogs like they're your betters?
They are my betters.
Dunk knows he has to follow the customs of the land as well, as this is the only way he'll get ahead. It's like his own mini Game of Thrones where you just have to play along with everything to get what you want. Yeah, it's unjust, but that's because the lords were born into houses and thus they get to rule over everyone. They think that the world and everything should bow before them, and ultimately this is what leads to all the wars. They're mean and selfish and take what they want, while Arlan and Dunk are nice and have to beg for scraps and fight and die in their battles. The pair are then interrupted by apparently the most famous family in Westeros. Who are they?
Can't you see the banner, you giant cunt?
Oh, the Targaryens, of course. This moment is right out of the book though, minus the swear word. Egg then sheepishly says he better go back to the camp, which is a bit strange considering he wanted to stay with Dunk before. Anyway, all this following dialogue that was actually said at the camp the night before when Dunk discovered Egg. Basically there, Dunk says that if Egg robs him, he'll chase after him with dogs. And we even get this line from the book where Egg fires back and says he doesn't have any, and Dunk says he'll get some. Now in the book we get insight into Dunk's thoughts here, and he somewhat sees looking after Egg as paying back a debt to Arlan. I'm a great fool to trust the boy so far, but it's no more than the old man did for me, he reflected. The mother must have sent him to me so that I could pay my debt. Now in the book, the Dragon Lord's arrival actually happened just after Dunk tried to enter the list the day before. Dunk was also in the stables there, opposed to the pavilion, but they do somewhat bring that scene back round. Now, though it should have been in episode 1, mate, technically, I think it's smarter holding the Targaryens off until now. Episode 1 introduced us to a hell of a lot of characters, and the Targaryens in the book at that point didn't really advance the plot that much. So yeah, it's just more economic to introduce some characters and then introduce some more here. Now as for the family, we have Baelor, Maester, Baelor and Aerion. They're here for the tourney and we meet Lord Ashford and his daughter. In the book, the tourney was in honour of the daughter's 13th name day, aka 13th birthday. She also does look slightly different how she's described in the text, as that says she's got yellow hair and a pink round face. Now when it comes to the structure of the family, Baelor's the current hand of the king and brother to Maester. The pair's dad is Daeron II, who's the current king of the Seven Kingdoms. He'll be playing a major part in the story moving forward, which is something that we'll talk about in the spoiler section. As we see in the episode, Baelor's probably the most reasonable and down to earth of the Targaryens, especially when you compare it to like House of the Dragon. This isn't a characteristic that all of them share, but it has been done to keep the house popular. You see, back in the day, that they were like regarded as gods that could command dragons out the sky. With the dragons dead though, no one really gives a fuck. We even see later down the line how people will stand up to the Mad King, and then Dany will be left as an outcast. The showrunners have said that because they've lost their dragons now, they need to be seen as caring for the small folk, which is something that Baelor embodies. That's why he's been picked as the next in line, because he's got lots of compassion, will listen to people, and isn't a massive dickhead. At this point in time though, they're just pretty much the same as any other house. Now on the opposite side of Baelor, we have characters like Aerion. His hair's an opposite, his attitude's an opposite, and he definitely doesn't subscribe like Baelor does. In the book, he's got long locks of blonde hair, as you can see here from the artwork. However, I actually think this Billy Idol look is a bit more dickish. The prince basically struts in, acting like he owns the place, confuses Dunk for being a stable boy, and the dialogue here is all right out the book.
I'm not a stable boy, my lord. My lord pardons, I'm no serving man either. I have the honour to be a knight.
Finn Bennett is just excellent as the smug and stuck-up Aerion, and we see how entitled he is when he demands wine and a pretty wench, which is exactly what he says in the book. Even when corrected by Dunk though, he shows no humility and just insults him even further.
Knighthood has fallen on sad days.
The difference between the attire is also stark, with Aerion wearing fine velvet and chainmail. It's something Dunk could only ever dream of affording, and the Hedge Knight really shows his true colours compared to this knobhead prince. Aerion's horse loses it and kicks one of the stable boys, which Aerion isn't even there to care about. He just parked it up and fucked off. Dunk is then left to calm it down, and this shows us that he indeed has this good nature. And the horse bloody loves him as well. I also wonder if there's a comment here on kind of knowing your place and unfortunately defaulting to it when there's a higher up around you. Despite saying he's not a stable boy, he does lead the horse into the stable and then talks to it like an animal lover would. Dunk's then interrupted by the Kingsguard, whom he also meets in the book. However, this takes place after he's left the stables to try and sell a horse. Either way, these are Sir Ronald Crackenhall and Sir Donald of Duskendale. Now this is definitely my favourite Kingsguard armour design, as it appears more like how it was described in the Game of Thrones. Jaime Lannister, in the show looked vastly different, as did Kristen Cole's in House of the Dragon. But here, they've nailed the book accuracy, and it's such a cool Easter egg. Especially with how dragon wing-like it looks. Now in case you don't know, these gods basically consist of 7 knights who are forbidden from holding lands, marrying or fathering children, and basically you're in the job for life. This is why Kristen was so torn up about how he took an oath and then slept with Rhaenyra, and then basically Rhaenyra rejected him and he turned into a snivelling bitch. Now the pair here also look a bit different to how they're depicted in the book's illustrations. In general, long hair just seems to have been omitted from most of the show characters. However, Peter Claffrey did have long hair at the show's premiere and press, so he may have it for season 2. Now Sir Donald here was also mentioned in A Feast for Crows when Jaime Lannister asks Loras Tyrell if he's aware of him. That's the second last book of Song and Ice, and I will say second last because I don't know if we're getting any more, mate. But I'm praying. Roland isn't mentioned elsewhere, but in this he's impressed by Dunk's size. In the book, Dunk considers him to be the best knight in the realm except for Baelor, so I do think they'll add him in a bit more to the series. He then asks if there's anywhere he can dump out. It's implied that he's of higher birth, as Donald says his sworn brother would hold it in as there's no proper place. The Crackles themselves are descended from the First Men, and one of Roland's future family members was the first to discover that Jaime had slain the Mad King. We then get a bit more of a story about Donald in the episode compared to the books. He explains that his family are crabbers, and it makes it sound like he had a humble upbringing. But this isn't necessarily the case. Duskendale is near Blackwater Bay, and we've seen this location lots of times, including when Gunther Darkland was executed in House of the Dragon. Donald's family owns most of the ships as well, which shows just how naive that poor old Dunk is. Now, this moment spurs him on to think he could even go and join the Kingsguard if a lowly crabber managed to join this very prestigious group. Dunk then asks how the son of a crabber had the honour of becoming a knight in the Kingsguard, and Dunk's a bit confused by Donald's response. He implies that he did it by grit, hard work, and maybe a bit of cunning. Naive old Dunk, though, is absolutely clueless. We'll talk about that more in just a bit, but I love the interaction that follows with the stable boy asking if he's Baelor.
Are you Baelor Targaryen?
No.
Then would you move the fuck out of the way?
He's got no clues when it comes to social cues or sarcasm, but we do see some initiative. A worker accidentally leaves the door open and Dunk follows her through the tunnels into Ashford Castle. However, in the book, he just asks to be let in, and lords tend to hate that one simple trick. I do think that this is a lot better for his character though, and it makes sense story-wise. In the source material, he's just somehow in earshot of the next scene, whereas here we kind of see his cunning. The knights just talk to him about seeking opportunity, and he's now doing that exact same thing, so it builds brilliantly off that conversation. Now it turns out that two of Maekor's sons are missing, with this being Daeron and Aegon. Lord Ashford assumes that they might just be delayed, which angers Maester because it's a very serious matter. Baelor reminds his brother not to curse their hosts, and as mentioned before, they need to be on the charm offensive. The showrunners have basically said the public's starting to wonder why they let this weird incestuous family rule when they no longer have dragons. It also means that a character like Lord Ashford can invite the royal family for his tournament. In previous airs, even nice guys like Viserys would have said fuck that bozo, but now they're having to go to all these things. It's kind of like how these days you'll see the royal family like constantly having to go around to events and open up like a new Greg's or something. They've got to play favour with the common folk. Now, though I say the royal family, Daeron the king hasn't gone himself, so Maester's a bit annoyed that his dad forced him to attend this miserable circus. And, mate, Lord Ashford, he's right there, mate, right there. On the whole as well, these tournaments were very expensive and basically like a My Sweet 16 birthday party where the parents throw a massive do and buy the kid a car.
40,000 gold dragons to the champion, 20,000 to the runner-up, 20,000 to the winning archer.
So Ashford's basically spending handsome sums to get mugged off in his own hall by some blonde inbred like yeast motherfucker who don't even have dragons. Balin then says that Daeron has done this before, which is a line right out the book. He also says that Maester should not have made him enter the lists. In the books, Daeron has no interest in fighting, and I believe the line is he'd rather be ride a whore than a horse. At this point, we then cut to Dunk, who's waiting outside, and the show does differ with how we meet Lord Ashford's daughter. She's called Lady Gwyn, and though she isn't named in the text, they do basically have the tournament called Gwyn, and yeah, the rules of it kind of revolve around winning her hand. The fact that they're expanding this out as well is because I think the show is 6 episodes, and yeah, the book isn't really that long, and thus they need to pepper in these characters to kind of add more to the runtime. And she mentions that the prince's sons are missing and probably dead before saying,
Wars have started for less.
This is a great callback to Game of Thrones, and it's actually something Tyrion said in the main series.
Maybe I'll hire this cook of yours.
Wars have been started for less.
It's also a little nod to House of the Dragon, as we know the son for a son thing started the Civil War. On her dress we can also see suns, which is something from the Ashford House coat of arms. As Dunk stares through into the meeting, we can also see these shapes lining the grate that he looks through. She then calls Dunk big and stupid, which is a theme that repeats throughout the episode. People are constantly calling him dumb and saying that he probably watches Screen Crush. However, I do think he's a heavy spoilers fan at heart and will show that a fool can be brave and quieten the haters. They then touch upon the missing kids a bit more, and we hear how Sir Rowland's the one being sent to find the pair. Their disappearance is going to be a central mystery in the story, and yeah, the pieces are starting to fall in place, but if you're paying close attention, you can figure things out. Despite having no dragons, 2 missing princes is a very big deal. Baelor then says that Darren belongs no more on a Tourney field than Aerys or Rhaegal. In the source material, Rhaegal's described as being sickly and meek. On the flip side of this, Aerys was a bookish person who wasn't interested in combat. Maester wants to force his son to change though, which is something that we've seen in the main show. Samuel Tully's father tried to get him to be a great hunter and fighter as opposed to being a nerd. I guess it kind of worked though, as the Night's Watch made him a man and helped him save Westeros from the Walkers. Task failed successfully there. Maester then spots Dunk peering into a hole just like the book. There's actually a great little line about how the seated man was aware he'd been there the whole time. Behind Dunk, we can also see a window in the shape of a star. I did wonder if this was the Faith of the Seven 7-pointed star, however, it's also possible that this is the House Ashford logo that we saw on Gwyn's dress. Especially as their motto is "Our sun shines bright." I do think it's a 7, but yeah, just in case it's not, before you start! Just like the book, Baelor then stops Maester from exploding on Dunk and says how they're intruders here. It's here that we can also really see Baelor's Hand of the King badge. Now if you're paying attention, this is the same colour as the one Tyrion was given when he was Hand of the Queen. The main show and House of the Dragon opted to use a gold version, but I do feel like the silver one here is done for a reason. To me, it subtly shows a difference in character. Tyrion is one of the most cunning hands we've ever met, and Baelor comes across that way as well. The shoulders on his outfit are also reminiscent of Daenerys and Rhaenyra's outfit from House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. I love how it then cuts to the Master of the Games, who looks petrified, and Dunk explains why he's there. Ashford then says, "Sword and shield do not make a knight," which is the same as this line in the book. He then tries to get some acknowledgement from Maester, who couldn't give 2 shits about him. Ashford in general is just no help, but a Hail Mary comes as Dunk asks Baelor if he knew Sir Arlan. In a miraculous bit of luck, Baelor does indeed know him, and he recites the same words from the book. And I guess the shooting star did bring him luck in the end. It also shows that Baelor actually pays attention and cares, whereas the other lords couldn't give a shit. And I'm sure he will make a great king one day. Now, we learn that though Arlan didn't win a tourney, he did have honour. He managed to get the best of Lord Stokeworth and unhorse the Grey Lion. The Stokeworths were mentioned in House of the Dragon as being loyal to Rhaenyra, and they did play a minor part in the Dance of the Dragons. In the book, Baelor then asks him what the Grey Lion's name was, and we get an insight into Dunk's thoughts as he, even though he's heard the story 1,000 times, he's just completely blank. Daemon Lannister is the character's name though, and he's actually taking part in this tournament. Maester then shows his horrible nature once again and asks how Baelor can remember a hedge knight in a contemptuous tone, which is just like the book. Now this is because Arlan faced Baelor in the tournament and he actually broke 4 lances against him. Baelor made it his business to know his enemies, and this really shows the difference between the 2 brothers. Dunk then goes to correct him and tell him that it was actually 7 lances that he broke. So brazen that even Maester laughs, but I really appreciate that Dunk's getting more and more confident. The book also gives us some insight into what he's thinking in this moment as it's all going down. No sooner were the words out than he wanted them back. Dunk the lunk, thick as a castle wall, he could hear the old man chiding. In the book and show, he then explains how Sir Arlan used to call him thick and compared him to an aurochs.
The old man, Sir Arlan, he used to say that I was thick as a castle wall and slow as an aurochs.
Which again, plays up the perception that he's dumb. Now an aurochs is an extinct type of bovine from which the cows of today are descended. Dunk then explains how Baelor gave Arlan back his horse and armour without any ransom, which shows how Baelor clearly cares about the small folk as well as the hedge knights. I think he sees the bigger picture and knows without the dragons they have to be more tactical. For example, if you keep mugging off your knights, then why would they come and fight and die for you? You've also seen a civil war firsthand and how people often side with those they favour most. Oaths are broken and people choose who they prefer, and in the end you get more flies with honey than you do vinegar. You can massively see Maester's disgust at Baelor's kind gesture though. He's shocked his brother would do something so nice, which probably also explains why Aerion's such a dickhead. Baelor then jokes and says he hopes he isn't king for a few years yet. And poor old Dunk, though, is just so nervous in this moment, speaking to the royal family, that he can't even joke with them. And again, all this sequence is right out of the books. Maker then tells him to fuck off, but Baelor defends his attitude and explains he's only being a dick because his sons are missing. Dunk then says,
"I trust they will not be found dead."
Which is a very awkward moment and is a little bit different to the book. Here he just says he hopes they'll not be found dead, which doesn't go down well. In the book, though, he says the rains have probably swollen up the streams and therefore they're likely just delayed. However, what Gwyn said to him before has clearly went into his mind, and yeah, adding her character in earlier and where she wasn't in the book, that changes what he says here. Baelor then tells him that he needs to go and get new arms, as you can only inherit a sigil through blood. Thus, he needs a new sign. Thanking him, Dunk then awkwardly leaves the castle, completely confused over which way to go. He tries to go back the way he came, which was the secret entrance, but of course he needs to go out the front door. And yeah, I just love the attention to detail in the show. In the book, he then compliments the Maester before leaving and says, "Thank you again, your grace. I will fight bravely, you'll see. As brave as Baelor breaks spear," the old man would often say. Now we then get Dunk watching his crush perform a puppet show named Florian the Fool. Florian was both a jester and knight whose stories told in the legends of the first men. Like Dunk, he was not of noble birth, but still made a name for himself. He spied on a woman named John Quill at a bathing site in Maidenpool, and Dunk is obviously sort of doing the same thing with Tanzel. The knight also didn't really have majestic armour, and it's kind of like how Dunk has to use a rope for a belt.
Your belt's made of rope.
Oof, still fucking hurts that one, mate. Dunk is obviously smitten with her though, and he comes to tip her for both the puppet shows. I love the way she's initially on a platform as well, so she seems taller than him, but then when she steps down, they're almost the same height. Egg then shows himself to be very, very smart, as he guesses that the fire trick was achieved by using pollen. He's clearly been educated and is just laying the groundwork for what he goes on to be. Now, she explains how her uncle builds the puppets while she paints them. He then goes on to ask her to basically paint his shield, and in the book he thinks about how Arlan's brown always seems so dull and he wants something more colourful, but isn't exactly sure exactly what the design will be.
All men are fools. All men are knights.
Again, he's absolutely dim, as she literally just quoted the play he's just watched. But I don't think he was focused on that itself. However, A Fool in a Night fits well for the character, and it's a play that plays into the show really well. He eventually says that he wants a field at sunset, and Egg suggests an elm tree. Dunk then finishes it off, saying that they also need a shooting star. It's of course just like the end of the previous episode, and it's something that can bring him good luck. If he needs some other stuff he'll look great in though, then he should definitely check out our merch store right below the video. There, we've just launched our t-shirt inspired by art from the book, and we have lots of other ones to make your nerdy dreams come true. If you buy more than one as well, you'll also get a discount, and it all goes towards helping videos like this get made. He then introduces himself as Duncan the Tall, and she gives her name, which is Tanzel Too Tall. So yeah, they're sharing some commonality. He then bumbles and says that she's just tall enough.
4.
It's a party.
Now they kind of combine a scene from earlier in the book, and there when he spoke to her, he talked about how he'd not have to kneel down to kiss her, which he blurts out. And my man must have been pitching a pavilion. It's through this that the book also reveals that Dunk is in fact a virgin, with the line, "Dunk had never been with a girl, and they made him nervous. Once 3 years passed when the old man's purse was full after half a year in the service of blind Lord Flornant. He told Dunk the time had come to take him to a brothel and make him a man. He'd been drunk though, and when he was sober he did not remember. Dunk had been too embarrassed to remind him. He was not certain he wanted a whore anyway. If he could not have a high-born maiden like a proper knight, he wanted one who at least liked him more than his silver." Luckily, Egg comes in a clutch with a save and says, "Puppets."
It's a puppy!
The pair then have a debrief like they hit the club last night.
Oi, 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 oi. Hold it down, boy. Your head's getting blurred. I know you can't stop thinking of her.
Dunk doesn't feel it went well, but Egg hilariously says that they're both gigantic, so it's gonna work out, mate. And yeah, it does kind of remind me a lot of Tormund being obsessed with Brienne. Albeit Dunk handles things like it's a bit of a Richard Curtis movie. Egg then asks him if he'll ever be a knight, and Dunk says, "Why not? You're a likely lad." Now this reminded me last week of the flashback where Dunk asked Arlan if he would ever be a knight as well.
Am I to be a knight one day, sir? As you are?
There, Arlan never responded, but yeah, Dunk's trying to be as good as the false memories of Arlan that he has. Also, in case you're not from the UK, a likely lad is someone who shows potential.
Bloody hell.
Egg then says he's small even for his age, but Dunk says he'll grow, and then says people tell him he's stupid, so it's not like it matters. But Egg, mate, you're supposed to say no, you're not stupid, you're very intelligent. No, you're not Dunk the Lunk. The banter between the two is really, really good though, and they're kind of like opposites, because obviously one's a giant, one's really small, one's Dunk the Lunk and stupid, and one's quite intelligent. So they work really well together as kind of an odd couple pairing. The strength is tested in the next scene though, when Lionel Baratheon requests Dunk help in the war. Well, tug of war that is. And the only tug Dunk planned was over Tanzel. Thank you, thank you.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Lionel then shows his true self and his nobility and says,
What is this piss froth?
Dunk will only drink the ale, cider or wine that he can get his hands on, while Lionel has access to the best drinks in the realm. It is important to pay attention to that, and this scene in general also foreshadows the battles that can be seen in the trailer in which they'll have to work together. Pull you bastard, Ned, you bastard, it's me, Robert Baratheon, Ned. Oh, Bessie, Bessie's tits. Whew, coughed up there, talking about Bessie's tits. If I die, I hope that's how I go. Now, this is of course peacetime, and thus all the knights are having to basically compete in jousts and tugs of war as a way to prove their strength. Lionel has to gain his honour and notoriety by engaging in a sport like this instead of on the battlefield. It reminds me a lot of something that Caitlin Stark said when she said that Renly's camp is just full of summer knights. These are people who are just performative knights and haven't really seen the battlefield, so they're not very useful in a real combat situation.
Come, let us gingerly touch our tips.
Now they're against a team that contains a Tyrell, and Lionel's once again the life of the party. Half his lines I can't even say here, lest we be demonetized, but the spirit of Robert Baratheon was running through me veins, Ned. It was running through me veins. Bessie's tits! Lionel then heads off to get a drink while the rest of his team struggles. It again shows his privilege as he's left the hard work to the lower born people and claims glory at the end. The show's of course added a lot more to his story though, and he's absolutely hilarious. He acts like a proper rugby lad and even slaps Dunk on the arse. The guy who plays Dunk is of course an ex-rugby player, and overall it's just a great way to show his strength. They were a man down for a bit, but Dunk as the anchor has kept them in the game. He also uses his footwork to win, which shows he's not as thick as people say. Later that day, he then goes looking for some armour, and we finally meet Steely Pate. Now, they did reorder this, and he should have appeared last week, but it's a great transition to have him here as we head into the night. The book describes the merchants, and even mentions the Tyroshi with a big blue fancy beard. They're all showing off though, whereas Dunk goes to the guy who's working on his craft, and it shows he isn't as stupid as they say, as he's going to the best there is. It's a great bit of casting, as Pate looks just like the illustration in the book. The dialogue's also exactly the same as the text, and Pate seems to doubt that Dunk will be a champion. Everyone here means to be the best of the best of the best, sir.
Because you're looking for the best of the best of the best, sir.
Or at least wants to be. But Dunk needs it more than most. He then says that you do good work, which is a line just like the book, and Dunk then asks for a gourd git, which is a thing that goes around your neck to protect the throat and chest, and I hope I've pronounced it right. He also needs greaves that cover his legs and helmet. Pate also explains in the book why he designs helmets the way that he does. There's no visor, Egg pointed out. There are air holes. Visors are a point of weakness, Steely Pate had said as much. If you knew how many knights have taken arrows in the eye as they lifted their visors for a suck of cool air, you'd never want one, he told Dunk. Pate is also impressed by Dunk's size, but mentions that he's armoured bigger. Pate references the other merchants from the book, saying that he has simple armour with nothing like gold or the like. Dunk's luck then hits again as Pate offers a discount, seemingly taking pity on the hedge knight. Well, as they say, good manners get you everywhere, but nice guys unfortunately often finish last. Unfortunately, his house and armour will be ransomed, and if he loses, there's no way he's going to be a knight after that. Even now, it's kind of contentious, as Lionel said last week that a knight without a horse is no knight, and thus he's playing the endgame for a short-term game. Dunk has a nice moment with her horse though, but ultimately he has to say goodbye. Kind of reminded me a lot of Sylvester Stallone, as he had to sell his dog to get the money for Rocky. However, after it was a big success, you know, Rocky's obviously a household name, he went back and bought the dog, but yeah, massive gamble. I think him selling the horse as well, you know, just makes Pate feel a bit more sympathetic, and in general, like normally hedge knights are quite looked down upon. The book describes how most of the merchants see them, but I think, you know, you just look at Dunk, you instantly warm to him because he's very sincere and has a genuine good heart. And it's kind of why, like, Lionel likes him as well. Hedge knights in general, though, have a very poor reputation, and they're often seen as little more than beggars with a sword. This has led to most merchants not trusting them, and it's why Dunk's looked down upon by everyone, from stable boys to horse. But yeah, basically he has to sell the horse, and then he pawns off some of Arlan's old gear to lower the cost. And I've been there, mate, playing Baldur's Gate 3. The armor's obviously one of the last things he has of the old man, and the horse in general has just been a bloody good friend, and I'm not crying, you're crying. I love the attention to detail on the fires though, as he says goodbye and we can see the moon and sun on them, which fits in really well with the son of House Ashford. It's a very tearful farewell though, and something that's unfortunately common in this land. Dunk had a massive love for his horses, and this was something that Sir Arlan actually warned against. He said that a knight shouldn't love a horse too much, as a few will die under you. However, the old knight also didn't take his own advice, and yeah, if you've got a pet, it's very difficult to not get attached. The old man always said that a knight should never love a horse, since more than a few were likely to die under him. But he never heeded his own counsel either. Dunk had often seen him spend his last copper on an apple for old Chestnut, or some oats for Sweetfoot and Thunder. But Dunk has to sell his friends here, and just like his former master, he spent coin on her when he needed all the cash he could. And it's kind of how I felt when I traded in my GameCube for my Xbox 360. Mario Sunshine for Halo 3 seemed like a fair trade at the time, but I still remember. In the book, they also have a scene bartering back and forth with the Horse Lord, where Dunk wants 3,000 stags for it, but all he gets offered's 300. Eventually, he gets the guy up to 750, which just about covers the armor. But there's the feeling that it was closer to the buyer's price than Dunk wanted, so yeah, it does still feel like it's a massive loss. In the book, he then promises that if he'll win, he'll come back and buy him. He then bites another gold coin, saying he's never tasted gold before, but you get the feeling that it's definitely bittersweet. As he says goodbye, he makes sure the horse gets some oats and apples, which is also a line from the book. And it's been a long day without you, my friend, but I'll tell you all about it when I see you with Egg. The videos are shit, to be honest. You probably should have chosen another breakdown, but he goes back to Egg resolute that the horse has gone, so there's no turning back. The pair then both sit down and have a drink, but Egg looks disgusted by the cider as there's a bug in it. Both he and Lionel did look down on what the small folk were drinking, which is a further tease to things. And I did say pay attention to that before. Doug then says that Sir Arlan lived for 60 years, but was never a champion. In the book, his mind then starts to wonder that even if he can become a champion for just an hour, Ashford might pay attention to him and finally employ him. Egg then makes fun of him by saying, do you really think the Dragon House employs many hedge knights? Dunk thinks he's got one over than the kid though by saying that Donald of Duskendale is the son of a crabber. And then Egg basically makes him have egg on his face, and we learn that Donald is in fact a Nepo baby. Dunk asks how he knows, but he just kind of shrugs and says he likes fishing, which is a bit suspicious that. And to be honest, it might be a bad secret at this point, but we will discuss things more in the spoiler section. I'm guessing a lot of you people know already though, because we've been shit at covering it up. Now, the reason they don't fight in the tourney is explained by the character in the book. It would not be fitting for us to ride against those we're sworn to protect. Luckily though, Duncan put it all out of his mind as the tournament starts up. Just like the book, Dunk then puts Egg on his shoulders to watch the festivities. It's one of the livelier tourneys that we've ever seen in the series, and it looks like it's a right laugh. I think in general it's just one of the best, if not the best, joust scenes that I've ever seen, and it's just really visceral throughout. This entire thing just kind of reminds me a lot of the Quidditch World Cup campsite, and I think this scene is a high point in the show so far. Now, let's talk about the rules if you ever want to play it. Okay, so Gwyn is the Queen of Love and Beauty, and 5 champions are charged with defending her. Other men then challenge them, and if you manage to defeat a champion, then you become one yourself. So to Dunk, that means that he may only be a champion for an hour, but if he defeats someone, he'll have an hour of glory. We also see the Baratheon flags and the royals sitting in the box, just like we saw in House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. Lord Medgar Tully appears wearing a cloak described just like the book, and then he Ozzy Osbournes off the head of a trout before throwing it into the crowd. The fish is on their house sigil though, and it's just kind of adding a theatrical side of the house. Kind of like all the apple puns last week. I think in general though, this Tully is fucking oozing aura, and he has much more charisma than the other Tullys that we've seen, like Blackfish, fuck the lad. We then see the Grey Lion Lannister being armed by their squire while the Tully gets his shield. Lionel Baratheon then gets up on his horse and wears a ridiculously large antler helmet. Then there's Sir Abla Hightower. We've of course seen the high towers in House of the Dragon, with Otto and Alicent coming from the house. You can see Shield as well, which has the high tower sigil, which is a tower with flame. Lastly, we have Prince Baelor, the son of Baelor, who in the book faced off against Sir Ablor. Now, Ashford, despite having loads of money and the Targaryens in his backwater village, is still disrespected by his subjects. They call him a sheep shagger basically, and I love the sly look that Baelor makes as well as the little chuckle that Maester does. It shows that money doesn't buy respect, and even though they're at the party, yeah, people fucking hate the lad. The fight then starts up, and it's shot so well as we fly behind the team and we get a satisfying smash of lance against shield. Lord Leo Tyrell Henry arms, and you can also see Sir Humphrey Hardying with his red and white diamond attire. The Hardings are a house sworn of the Vale of Arryn, and in the book he actually faced off against Humphrey Beesbury. It was known as the Battle of the Humphrey. You may recognise the Beesbury name as well, as Kristen Cole killed Lord Beesbury in House of the Dragon Season 1. Baelor then faces off against Ablor, just like the book. Dunk then thinks he could easily enhorse the prince, and thinks he may have been matched against easier opponents due to his title. We then see a House Ashford knight, which is most likely one of Lord Ashford's sons, either Andrew or Robert. The reality of the violence really starts to sink in for Dunk though, and he starts to have a panic attack watching it all go down. It's a tough fight, and yeah, you can even risk dying against a bad jouster. If their technique's off and they hit somewhere other than your shield, you know, who knows what's going to happen. I think he realises he's just out of his depth and starting to question if he's able to do it. We then cut to Egg playing soldier, all pumped up on the action. He's pretending to be fighting in the Blackfyre rebellion that Arlan also fought in, which is something else that might stick out if you're paying attention. Dunk then asks if great knights live in the hedges and die by the side of muddy roads. He then seems to come clean with himself about what Sir Arlan was really like, mentioning how he drank in Horde, had no friends, or was ever a champion. It seems that this basically destroyed his image of the old man. However, he also remembers that Arlan did what really mattered. He raised Dunk to be honourable and look after him more than most men would. It's almost personal now though, as no one remembered Arlan's name. Dunk wants to show them what Arlan produced and that he is a strong and chivalrous knight. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Spoilers are coming as we go back to Westeros as the Ashford tourney starts to get bloody. Though it's been all fun and games, this week takes a turn that's slightly less chivalrous. This week not only serves as a jumping off point for the rest of the season, but it also provides us with some goose eggs and some Easter eggs as well. And thank God, I don't need to tiptoe around Egg's real identity for 20 minutes in what's the worst kept secret in history. Egg is Aegon, and he's one half of the missing Targaryens. The other, well, I'm sure you can figure out, that was the guy who met at the inn who put down the dragon coin as payment. We really see through the common folk though how they view the family here, and Raymond, I was unfamiliar with your game, lad. Also, yeah, I am back in the costume. I know it looks bad, mate, but got nothing else. This is what I ordered, so just imagine I'm wearing that. Thank you so much for clicking the video, and with that out of the way, let's get into the breakdown.
You shall be king.
What?
Day 3 in the Dunk and Egg house. So, the episode once more follows the formula of a day in the life of, with us starting at daybreak and then ending at night. I love how we always begin with Dunk in some field or something, and it plays perfectly into him being a hedge knight. In the book, he passes people in their houses and wonders what it's like to have a nice roof over your head and wake up in the same place every day. This is something he just doesn't get, and the character still hasn't found a sense of place yet. Dunk is still asleep, and in an opposite to this, Egg can't sleep at all. And we've all been there at a festival, mate, which I shan't go into any more beyond that. It's a little bit different in the book though, as in that Dunk actually woke up Egg, and then we got the scene that follows on from this intro. For the show though, Egg wakes up, and we initially think that he's doing his job as a squire, but then see that he's actually training. Firstly, Egg leads the horse out to practice and prepare for Dunk's joust. This is Thunder, and we of course saw him sell Sweetfoot last week. Egg then says that his dad said that you shouldn't talk to horses as they're dumber than dogs and only understand pain. This is similar to what Arlan told Dunk in the book, and they said basically you shouldn't fall in love with your horse. He stated that a few will die in a battle or tourney, which is something that we see here. However, Arlan was just like Dunk and saying it should be like this, but even then he was still using like his last copper to buy his horses some apple and oats. But Maker, on the other hand, yeah, I do actually think that he meant what he said. Egg then says that he actually thinks the opposite of his father, and that horses probably like being bossed about as much as people do. It shows how much of an opposite to his dad is, and we see this in every single aspect. He then seemingly convinces Thunder to help as he tells him that Dunk will need him if he's to win. We then cut to him just having a shit though, which did feel like a reference to the hard cut to the opening of episode 1 where we have Dunk having a shit. But both have heart. Egg is attempting to emulate what he saw last night though, and in a tourney, the Squire's job's to hand their knight a lance and spur. This is something that we saw in the last episode, and it's basically kind of like your F1 pit stop. Now while he's well-meaning, he's still just playing at being Squire. For him, this is just a little jolly getaway from King's Landing and the Red Keep. He's kind of just cosplaying as someone poor, but to be fair, he's really taking on the role. Does end up going well, and though the horse craps all over his plans at first, we see as it starts galloping up and down the field. However, he's soon confronted by a barefoot dude with an eye patch looking like a younger Beric Dondarrion. Guy is very creepy and very accusatory, asking him if he stole the horse. This is a very severe crime, and the price for horse theft in medieval times was sometimes even death. We see as the horse though is very warm to Egg and aggressive towards the accuser, which does show that, yeah, this is Egg's horse mate. Egg also then stands his ground against him and shows he's a lot wiser than his years. Now this is actually Robin Rysling, who's a character in the book. House Rysling are from the Reach and loyal to House Tyrell. However, they have had their clashes, and both Robin and Lord Tyrell faced each other at the Ashford tournament. We also get a shot where we see how Robin lost his eye. This happened through a lance splintering, and I love the way this is done through flashback. In the book, Dunk just tells Egg directly that he lost his eye due to a splintered lance 5 years ago. But yeah, seeing it in a visual medium works a lot better, I think. Especially when he's like galloping along and his eye's still attached and just bumbling along too. Egg then calls him the maddest knight in the Seven Kingdoms, and to be fair, he does appear to be a religious nutjob. He says how he's a vessel for the warrior who's one of the 7 gods of the faith. The warrior grants strength and courage, and clearly those seeking battle think that he inhabits them. The knight also appears like a pious character, as here he's walking barefoot and using a stick. Now while he's a knight, he doesn't have the same smug nature of the other ones that we've seen, and is more akin to the future High Sparrow as opposed to like Lionel Baratheon. I'm not slagging you off, Lionel! I'm not slagging off the Baratheons! Oh, Bessie, you bastard! Oh, get out! Oh, I fucking hate when Robert Baratheon takes over in the video. But this scene is all brand new, and I did think it was quite cool how we're getting these knights expanded upon, as most of them are just names in the book. It's a great moment though, and yeah, Eggmate, you best stay away from that geezer. Arriving back at camp, Dunk looks fuming. Egg's been off missing for the morning, and he has a lot to learn and will need discipline in order to be a squire. This includes doing stuff like sewing.
Is that not my job?
You know how?
Again, for Egg though, this is just a bit of escapism to avoid being around his awful brothers. But Dunk, it's his only chance to make something for himself though, as he could lose his armour and horse. A squire needs to know how to craft and fix things, and Egg would have just never been taught these skills. Instead, he would have learned things like reading and writing, and because yeah, he'd never be a squire, so they'd never need to teach him it. Again, him not knowing how to do any of this shows how different he is, and the disguise is slowly starting to fall apart. He's basically like doing poverty cosplay and being like those celebrities that go and work in a coffee shop for a day or something. But yeah, this whole scene is just like the book, as Dunk told him to get on with his chores. He also turns his nose up at salt beef, which is the food that we saw Dunk and Arlan eat in the flashback last week. Now in the book, Egg was left at the camp at this point while Dunk went to register in the tourney. However, as we had that scene last week, the pair then go to the merchants together. Now Egg is then confused as he says,
"Is it odd that I have black hair growing out of my stones?"
Dunk has no interest in being that much of a father figure though, and doesn't want to know about what the kid's going through in that way. We then get some more gross out stuff, and Dunk vomits as he's so nervous. Now while we hear him chucking up his guts, Egg sings a song about the Blackfyre rebellion. This is known as the Hammer and the Anvil, and it is mentioned in the book, as well as a sample chapter in the Winds of Winter, which is it's definitely coming out, mate. I definitely think it's gonna come out. The song starts off with how Baelor was born first and how Maester was born last. They are the sons of Daeron II, who's the current king at the time of this show. He then says how Daemon was the bastard, so they kicked him out. Now Daemon was the son of Aegon IV, aka Daeron II's father. Daemon was knighted by his father and given the sword Blackfyre after winning a tourney. Blackfyre belonged to Aegon the Conqueror and was seen as being a birthright to the heir of the throne. Daemon also called himself Daemon Blackfyre after the sword. Now some saw him as being the legitimate ruler, as he was more like Aegon and even carried his blade. However, some saw him as an illegitimate bastard, and as Egg says,
Blackfyre's not a true born, he came from the wrong country.
Nearly got demonetised for the C word there, mate, but I'll let you off. He eventually made a play to usurp the throne though, which led to the first Blackfyre rebellion. The song then describes the green grass turning red when a rebel horse dies in battle. Now this song then goes on to discuss the Battle of Redgrass Field. I believe this has been shown in the Weeks Ahead trailer, though it might be something completely different. I will be keeping confirmed spoilers for the spoiler section at the end, but since that's just a theory, I don't know how much it'll ruin the show, but yeah, that's what I think. Now, it was in this final battle that Daemon was killed by archers who were commanded by Brynden Rivers. In the song, Baelor is also the hammer, while Maker is the anvil. Baelor used the Dornish spearsmen to smash the rear of Daemon's army, which then crashed into Maker's shield wall. Hence, the hammer smashed against the anvil. Him just rattling this off shows how much he knows his history, and in the book, Doug thinks, Egg chatted through all of their breakfast, talking this man and that man and how they might fare. He was not japing me when he said he knew every good knight in the Seven Kingdoms, Dunk thought ruefully. He found it humbling to listen so intently to the words of a scrawny orphan boy, but Egg's knowledge might serve him should he face one of these men in a tilt. Again, it shows that Egg isn't necessarily who he says he is, and he has a vast knowledge beyond what most little kids would. The song is cut short in the show though, as Dunk's done throwing up chunks and he's now ready to joust. It's supposed to be a badass moment in which he's going out to fight and he says, "Get my shield," which is when Egg says, now? As Egg explains, the right of the first challenge is only for knights of high birth and renown, which is right out the book. So he basically has to wait and won't be fighting today. Well, he will be, but not in that way. And I love how he goes,
"Then why have I been vomiting all morning?"
Honestly, that this whole show it's pretty much just a comedy with some fighting tacked on. And I have to say, I'm loving it. So instead of jousting, he heads off to the medieval Tesco Express to get some goose eggs. Now there's a bit of a language barrier, and he ends up making a fool out of himself in front of his love. My guy has got zero game as he asks Tanzel if she likes goose eggs. In the book, we also have Dunk and Egg just having goose eggs for breakfast, but I love how they added this scene in to show how they got them in the first place, and how he also fumbled the egg. The pair that make egg in a bacon roll that's as big as a kid's head. The whole scene is just so twee though, and I love the music here as it feels a lot less like the grand scale of the two other shows. The song is just someone whistling and playing guitar, and it makes it a whimsical adventure which really fits the book. We then cut to the pair standing at the front row having fun watching the day's jousting. There's a diamond shield and a yellow and black one, which might refer to this line about Sir Humphrey Harding's shield being tapped in the tourney. Also, love as Dunk says, "Why not?" when he's handed some very strong booze which he then has to spit out. The Knights and Squire then do impressions of each other, and it's great banter but also foreshadows the future reveal at the end of the episode. Egg is simply doing an impression of one of the common folk, and the fact he's mimicking him here kind of sets it up.
"Oh, I'm Egg. I can't eat hard salt beef, I just eat lovely food and grapes and ooh."
Egg also mentions the salt beef, and Dunk roasts him for only liking nice food like grapes and stuff. If he was truly one of the small folk though, he would be happy to eat anything he was handed, as you don't know where your next meal's coming from. Dunk then japes with him for not liking ale, and Egg calls it disgusting. Ale was absolutely integral to a medieval bloke's diet at this time, and was seen as being like bread in a cup. So in a way, it's good for you, but I shan't go on a massive tangent about that. Egg then says,
I think I could be quite happy in a place like this.
To him, it's an escape from the life in the castle where everything he does is picked apart. He's got massive expectations and is basically like Brooklyn Beckham for the Targaryen brand. So like Brooklyn, he wants to go off and do his own thing and live a simple life with a billionaire's daughter. Yeah, look, the metaphor doesn't really hold up, mate. Dunk then says,
"You're in a place like this."
And yeah, the fact he's saying he could be happy in a place like this hints that it's not really where he's from. Egg is so lucky that Dunk's as thick as a castle wall though, as anyone with a brain would have guessed that he's not really a poor kid. And I hope you did as well, mate, because we're bloody telegraphing the twist from the start. You piece of shit if you didn't get it, you piece of shit! Why didn't you get it, you piece of shit? Egg then talks about returning as a war hero, having married the second most beautiful daughter, as Dunk will have married the first. I love the little smile that Dunk gives here, and they're both kind of fantasizing about the adventure that awaits them. What happens eventually? Well, we will talk about that in the spoiler section, as things don't quite go this way. Egg dreams of leading a simple life of planting oats though and keeping cows, and it's a world away from the life at King's Landing. He's a total opposite of what his brother Aerion's like, and that waste of space, just loves being cruel to others and living off his family's past glories, which definitely is a family trait as well. I think we've seen throughout the franchise how when it comes to power, those who tend to get it aren't really those who deserve it. It's often the most cruel and violent who are willing to step up and stamp down their siblings who end up sitting on the throne. And Egg would obviously be a far greater king than any of the others. Will he get that opportunity? Well, you'll have to wait and see, but I love seeing a Targaryen who's just after the simple life.
Where the hell are we?
Dunk then says he's a good worker when he puts his mind to it, and I see them as being similar despite their differences in status. Both have their heads in the cloud, and Dunk has a romantic view of chivalry, which is shadowed later on, just like Sir Humphrey's leg. He's kind of like a bit like Sansa, who never believed that Loras Tyrell would cheat.
Sir Loras would never do that. There's no honour in tricks.
No honour, and quite a bit of gold.
Egg also wants to live a life of adventure despite being born into a life of comfort and privilege. We've of course seen that royal life isn't all sunshine and rainbows, but it's a hell of a lot better than what Dunk had growing up. Dunk would have loved to have lived in a castle, and it's kind of a tale about how the grass is always greener. Egg just wants to continue this life though, but in a way like an undercover boss. The whole dynamic's obviously going to change when Dunk finds out things later on, and this is essentially Egg's version of a gap year. The daydreaming is then cut short though, as Plummer appears to make Dunk an offer he can't refuse. I hate this lad, I do, mate. I fucking hate him. He's a great character, great actor, but it's the fucking constant spitting, mate. Churns me stomach. Especially like when he hocks one up and then we cut to him spitting it out. But yeah, it's here that we get a sort of deal with the devil and basically a mob boss going to a boxer. He knows how desperate the head knight is and would likely be a fix to the pickle that Ashford's gotten himself into. Plummer says that Ashford's overspent on the tourney, which is something that we suspected last week. Robert also spent a stupid amount of coin on tournaments, which led to the realm being in debt and him having to borrow from both the Lannisters and the Bank of Bravos, you bastard. Lord Ashford, though, has no such choice, and thus he needs to resort to cheating. Plummer mentions that winter has not long passed, and the story is obviously set in spring, with the opening line of the text even discussing the spring rains. As for the Ashfords, though, winter was very tough, they barely got through, and now spring's here, and they're having to basically put all their money into this tourney. Now, Dunk is at first confused and says that he has no money, but Plummer says he's simply here to reward the hedge knight. There's a plan to pit Andrew Ashford against Dunk, and it's implied that Ashford will take the fall, which will allow Dunk to win. He's so unlikely to beat the hometown favourite, and thus the odds and prize for him winning will be huge. From this, not only will he get some of the cash, but he'll get the prize and the dream of being a champion, if only for an hour, which is a line touched upon in the book. One victory was all needed. Then he could name himself one of the champions of Ashford Meadow, if only for an hour. The old man had lived nigh on 60 years and had never been a champion. It is not too much to hope for if the gods are good. In the book, Dunk then thinks about how even just this hour might catch Ashford's eye, and potentially he could get full-time employment as a knight. For the series though, Dunk is far too chivalrous and says,
I do not want a victory that I have not earned.
Plummer then appeals to his poverty and asks if he has not earned it yet. Sure, the battle itself may end up being a fix, but the journey there has been a battle itself. As you mentioned as well, Dunk has a romantic view of what a knight should be, so cheating to become a champion is something that he'd never do. Now if you're wondering why Plummer and Ashford, didn't just keep Dunk out of the plan and fix this, well, it's because of what we see later on. Knights can often choose their opponents, which is what we see when Aerion picks his. The book even outlines his strategy, and that happens when we first meet Stefan and Raymond. Should any man be wounded on the morrow or show signs of exhaustion or weakness, Stefan will be quick to knock on his shield. You may count on it. No one has ever accused him of an excess of chivalry. He then mocks how Dunk calls his home a tree, and I love how Dunk corrects him by saying,
It's a no.
No one talks shit about my tree. I love how Dunk also looks offended by the offer in general, and Plummer tells him to mind his pride. Going through his head, I can also imagine that he's probably now wondering how many famous knight victories were a result of betting scams, as it's likely a custom that constantly happened. Slowly, Dunk is seeing his worldview eroded and how no one's as chivalrous as they seem. Now this is especially true in the following scene. In the book, Dunk constantly questions why Aerion seems to be doing lots of dishonourable things, even though that's not really how knights are supposed to act. We then get into that moment with the jousting and sounds of horns, which is an image that comes straight from the book. Prince Aerion Brightflame then appears and his uncle gives him a nod. But also notice that Prince Maker isn't there though, as he's looking for his runaway children, which is something that Dunk notices in the book. One's been under his nose the whole time. The book and show also tells us that Aerion acts less than chivalrous when his dad's not around. I love the way that he rides around with his mask and visor up, and from a visual point of view, it creates the impression he's two-faced. As we see, Valar's just chilling outside his pavilion, which is something we see in the book. I love the carved dragon heads above it though, and it's clear the family is just trying to cash in on their previous glory. In the book, it's also said how he occasionally rose up to joust against knights who were pretty crap. It's really unfair, and basically shows how Dunk can't take a shortcut, while this prince is stat padding with absolute losers. And Valar's like,
get in there! Well done, he's 13.
Aerion's such a dickhead though, and he says,
not to worry, I won't embarrass you today.
Valar looks fuming though, as Aerion has properly mugged him off. His face does really say it all. Valar also doesn't have the trademark blonde hair, which does show that both Baelor and Maker's sons are a bit of a letdown. Now Valar's the son of Baelor, aka the heir of the throne, and he's also the eldest. So that means he is essentially certain to be king one day. Or is, we will not talk about it. Aerion bore a three-headed dragon on his shield, but it was rendered in colours much more vivid than Valar's. One head was orange, one yellow, one red, and the flames they breathed had the sheen of gold leaf. His surcoat was a swirl of smoke and fire woven together, and his blackened helm was surmounted by a crest of red enamel flames. But yeah, he's basically peacocking and mugging off a future king, and book readers, I can hear you smirking. The arrogant prince then chooses someone else to battle against and says this absolutely cool line.
Come out, little knight. It's time you face the dragon.
This is right out of the book, and all it shows is pure arrogance. He galloped to the north end of the field, past Lord Leo's pavilion and the laughing storms, slowing only when he approached Prince Valar's tent. The young prince rose and stood stiffly beside his shield, and for a moment Dunk was certain that Aerion meant to strike it. But then he laughed and trotted past, and banged his point hard against Sir Humphrey Harding's diamonds. Come out, little knight," he sang in a loud, clear voice. "It's time you faced the dragon." Sir Humphrey Harding then comes out, and as we've seen, he's been in a lot of fights. So he's likely very exhausted at this point. Aerion then drops his visor, and you can see his helmet is flame-like colours on the tip, referring to his nickname Brightflame. Even his horse has fancy armour as well, which makes it look like a dragon. In the book, we also get a look at his helmet, which has wings, but there it's more like Daemon's in House of the Dragons. Speaking of that scene in House of the Dragons Season 1, there's no favours given out here like that Tourney. They just kind of skip over it, and yeah, I did wonder why that was, but basically what it does is just throw us straight in the action. Everyone cheers Humphrey, and this is likely because most think that Aerion's a gigantic knobhead, which is touched upon by Raymond later. As they charge, Egg then shouts, "Kill him!" which is another clue to his lineage. He actually shouts it over and over and over again in the book, and Dunk does wonder which knight he's shouting at. A commoner shouting that at a place like this would probably get in trouble or be too scared to say how they truly feel. But Egg's gonna do this because he knows, if he gets caught or captured by the gods, he'll just be like, "I am Aegon, go fuck yourself." The scene's brought to life in such a good way though, and so far the writers have done a great job of expanding upon the work as well as sticking to the source material. After hearing this, Dunk then looks at Egg like, calm down mate. Aerion then dunks at the last second as the pair joust, which causes Humphrey to drop his lance. It's the first sign that he's not going to play fairly at all, and the prince then skewers his opponent's horse. This is something that Dunk predicts, as he says,
"It's too low,"
which is a line that he thinks about in the book. There he kind of questions if it's a mistake though, because surely a knight wouldn't do something so evil, mate. As we see though, Aerion's just sadistic, and he takes pleasure in being able to get away with murder. He's much more like Joffrey, and is someone who should never be near any form of power. He spears the horse right through the neck, and this is a very striking image that we get in the book. Humphrey then falls off and lies on the ground in agony, trapped by his horse. In the book it's explained that his leg got skewered, which is confirmed later on in the show. Now I did even wonder if Martin was doing this as a little nod to Henry VIII. In case you don't know, he basically threw a massive tourney and had a joust in which he was thrown from his horse. This fell on top of him, and with the armour and so on, it basically cut a massive wound into his leg. This never really healed, and apparently over the years it used to regularly ooze pus. He eventually is thought to have died from these wounds and was in constant pain from this point on. which apparently also affected his mood. So I did wonder if Martin was giving a nod to that, as he took a lot of inspiration from the Tudors. The small folk are absolutely furious though, and someone even throws something at the cheating prince. Although it's not the same, it did kind of remind me of Alicent and Helena being attacked by an angry mob in House of the Dragon Season 2. Joffrey also got hit in the face in Game of Thrones Season 6, and unsportsmanly things like this can show the peasants' true feelings. This is something that society has had to deal with a long time, and even the Roman gladiatorial games were intended to pacify the public, as there was always a need for bloodlust, and the rulers basically didn't want that turning towards them. Everything now restrains itself and anxiously hopes for just two things. Bread and circuses is a phrase that's often used to acknowledge this. The spectators are rightfully furious though, and they start a medieval pitch invasion. Aerion at first smirks, but then looks a little shocked. Speaks to what Raymond says later on, and in the book his rant's even longer about how much he hates the lad because he never hits a thumbs up. All hell then breaks loose as the Kingsguard come in to keep the peace, and Egg says that he doesn't want to be there, which is just like the book. Like the text, a man then comes in to put the horse out of its misery, and it reminded me a lot of the Grand National, where horses are unfortunately put down if they break their legs. Egg then realises, yeah, it's not all fun and games, and then the pair decide to leave. There he's worrying about what would happen to Thunder. He thinks about how a mishap like this may befall him, which is a line we get in the show.
A mishap may befall me.
There was no mishap.
This is then followed by Egg's line there, and basically this whole scene is saying that Egg needs to toughen up, as there'll be a lot of grim sights in the future. With the fun over, we then see Lionel's having a party at his tent about a woman named Alice. No, not that one. They're singing a proper cheeky song about a woman shoving her fingers up men's arses. And if you get her address, leave it in the comments. It's a very crude song though that I couldn't recall being in any of the books, but if it is, then let me know below. And I think that little moan by Lionel is going to send Twitter into an absolute frenzy. Manfred joins in as well, and you might remember him from episode 1. Now, contrasting the lewd song, Egg wonders if there was truly an Alice. She pleasured many men in their bums, but as he says, they couldn't be bothered to memorialise her true name. Many men throughout the whole saga have tried to do great deeds to be remembered, but how people talk about you in a song is important for your legacy. For example, Tywin was killed taking a crap, but people will forever sing about what he did in the reigns of Castamere. Egg finds a lot of inspiration in the story of a crippled woman's talents though, with what fingers remained. Such a weird but very deep conversation that's then bookmarked by Lionel singing the song again before they leave. And yeah, just absolutely hilarious. Dunk then asks if he ever knew his father, as he eats a sausage, which is something that Dunk bought in the book. The hedge knight then trauma dumps on Egg and mentions a pot shop in King's Landing. These pot shops would sell bowls of brown, which might be a take on the perpetual stew of the Middle Ages. That was a big pot that would be cooking day and night, every day non-stop, and just be topped up with ingredients. Dunk had friends in Flea Bottom, and he'd sell them all sorts of meats to the shop, along with the characters Ferret, Rafe and Pudding. Now the dialogue here is actually from the second book in the trilogy, the novella. This is all a collected version, but they sold them all separately. But yeah, that's called The Sworn Sword, which should be the basis for season 2. However, I do think that in this season, we might see Rafe at one point. Now, he goes on to say that he always wanted to go to the wall, as his father might have taken the black. But yeah, he never knew his mother or father, which is a world away from Egg's upbringing. Although, similarly, neither of their mothers is alive. Dunk then awkwardly looks at Plumber, who seems expectant of his decision, but that's a non-starter, especially with what happens that night. The pair then run into a fortune teller. For Dunk, she says,
"You shall know great success and be richer than a Lannister."
He kind of thinks that she's just doing the usual fortune-telling crap, so says, "Very good," and then says, "Do eggs next."
"You shall be king and die in hot fire, and worms shall feed upon your ashes, and all who know you shall rejoice in your diet."
Whoa! Fucking spoiler alert, love. Dear me. But yeah, we will talk about this in the spoiler section. This all plays into the idea of dreams, though, that have basically popped up constantly throughout the franchise. Prophecy has been a big part of the show and books, and whether it's Azor Ahai, the House of the Undying, or Bran's visions, or even like Melisandre's words, so much of this show is built around prophecy. Even though this has been a very grounded take with Dunk and Egg, it is hard to avoid magic, and I love this little bit of foreshadowing. Egg's obviously shaken up though and asks why she would say that, but Dunk just brushes it off to the side because, you know, to him it's just a fortune teller talking crap. Obviously though, to Egg, he knows he could be in line to be king, so her saying this has definitely rattled him. She also tells him that he should buy a t-shirt at the merch store below, and there we have our dragon skull one inspired by art from the book, along with this blatant Baratheon crown one that we've just launched. We also have our Cyclops design on there too, and the more you buy, the more of a discount you get. Now the pair then run into Raymond, who invites him for a cup of cider. Egg would prefer to watch the puppet show though, and comes up with the idea that he could also get Dunk's shield. Raymond then looks at Egg, very confused as they depart. He clearly knows that the kid is just not some simple squire, but we then cut to the tent. Now in the book, Raymond asks why Dunk didn't sit in the viewing gallery. It turns out that all the knights get VIP access, but Dunk just prefers being amongst the small folk. Sticking with the apple theme, there's 2 trays of apples and Raymond pours some cider. And their seat is also called Cider Hall. Dunk then asks who his cousin Stefan wishes to challenge. Raymond mentions that Stefan would challenge anyone who's wounded, as he's not chivalrous, which builds off that line in the book before, and is something that foreshadows an event later on. In the text, Raymond then also says he might wish to challenge Tybalt Lannister. Dunk then lays the seeds of his jousting against local favourite Andro. If this were WWE, he'd be playing the heel, which I think would have been a fun story to see. We then learn that Aerion seems to have gotten a punishment, as Lord Ashford's give Humphrey Aerion's horse. In the book, this was explained a lot more, and then it was decided that they were declaring Humphrey the victory, which was kind of a disqualification for Aerion. The kind of thing where, like, if you use illegal moves, you get disqualified, that sort of thing. Now, it turns on that they also decided to carry on with just 4 champions instead of 5. The next lines are then a bit of a departure from the book. Raymond says,
"They're incestuous aliens, Duncan."
"As the bright prince is not," Raymond laughed. "Don't look so anxious, Sir Duncan. There's none here but us. It is no secret that Aerion is a bad piece of work. Thank the gods that he's well down in the order of succession." He then says how the Targaryens have blood magic and are tyrants. They've dragged the Westeros natives into war and have not cared for their customs. He says each king has been madder than the last, which is a line foreshadowing the Mad King himself, and part of that fortune teller scene. However, though Aegon did invade Westeros, he did this to unite the kingdoms due to a threat coming from the north. That, of course, was all part of Aegon's dream, which is a massive part of House of the Dragon. Now, those forces coming were, of course, the White Walkers, and this dream and warning is passed down from king to king. However, that's the secret, and to Raymond and the others, they're probably wondering why they're following these weirdos and allowing them to rule, especially when they don't have their WMDs. Pieces of shit! Blonde motherfuckers! Fucking their daughters! Actual motherfuckers! Fuck their sisters! Motherfucking shits never hit subscribe!
I got a bit carried away there.
Raymond's treasonous talk is done though, as we then cut over to the puppet show. It's a repeat of the Serwyn of the Mirror Shield story, but this time Tanzal's playing the role of the knight. She then kills the dragon puppet, which obviously doesn't go down well in front of a Targaryen. This is something that enrages Aerion, and I do wonder if Daron had told him about his dream of Dunk in front of a dead dragon. Or he's just a dickhead. We'll go with that one. Raymond then says that Aerion is all smiles when his father's watching, which is something that he says in the book. There he also says the whole affair might have gone differently if Maester were there. Raymond then explains that Maester's out looking for his 2 sons, and I love how Raymond doesn't say Aegon's name, as I think even Dunk the Long might have worked it out at that point. What do you mean you didn't work it out, you piece of shit? It's Egg and it's Aegon, you piece of shit! He then wonders why Maester even cares about his sons when they're awful. We also get a reference to Aemon, the future Maester of the Night's Watch.
The third's so useless, we're going to ship him off to a citadel to make a Maester of him.
He was actually the one who gave Egg his nickname, and we do meet him in the second novella, The Sworn Sword. Again, Raymond doesn't mention Egg by name, as they're interrupted by Egg saying that Tanzal's in danger. This moment's pulled right out the book, including him bursting in on the pair. Like Ned, Dunk's urge to do the right thing is almost his downfall here as he kicks the shit out of Aerion. He forced open her hand and seized one of her fingers. Dunk stood there stupidly, not quite believing what he saw. Then he heard a crack, and Tanzal screamed. Showing no honour, Aerion tries to grab his dagger, only to be kicked very, very hard. Just like the book, Aerion's also bloody and asks why he threw his life away. Also thought the tongue popping out even looked a bit like a snake, and almost might have tied into it being like him being a dragon, what I'm trying to say. In the book, Aerion then says he recognises him, and Dunk says he mistook him for a stable boy. "You took me for a stable boy," Aerion smiled readily. "I recall. You refused to take my horse. Why did you throw your life away for this whore?"
Why did you throw your life away for this whore?
Aerion then mentions how the dragon ought never lose, which is a line that comes from the book. Now, this scene is pretty much line for line, including the prince mentioning that one of his teeth's been loosened. This then leads to him saying they'll start by breaking Dunk's, and yeah, brought it perfectly to life as they make him almost bite the curb. American History X scene still living rent-free in my head every time I walk past a fucking curb, and seeing it here as well, I was like, fuck's sake, that's it burned into my brain. Beyond that, in the book, he then says he'll cut him open and show him his entrails. The guards then grab Dunk and are about to take his teeth out when Egg saves the day. It's all exactly how it plays out in the book, including the guards initially warning Egg off. However, a guard then recognises him and he demands that the guards unhand Dunk, just like the book, and the Hedge Knight looks very, very shocked.
Impudent little rat. What's happened to your hair?
I cut it off, brother. I didn't want to look like you.
We then end with a line about why he cut his hair off, and this is because he didn't want to look like his brother. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. 7 above, what an episode! Gets me hyped, mate! When that theme kicks in, whoosh shit! Super Bowl Sunday has rocked the schedule, so we're back early with our breakdown of episode 4. We get epic speeches and some arm-chilling moments, and this really feels like the calm before the storm. Or well, during it, as we have Rain constantly beating down on Dunk. However, come the dawn, he emerges as a new man and also gains some unlikely allies. Throughout this video, we're going to be going through the episode and also discussing the book alongside it. Anyway, not going to waste any more of your time, let's get into the episode. Now, we open with Dunk locked up in his cell, but still dreaming of the world beyond. Initially, the oppressive walls resemble the stars, and it's something the character often looks up at when falling asleep. This, most notably, is something which he looked up as he slept under his elm tree in episode 1. There, Dunk saw a falling star, which apparently brings good luck to all those who see it. Throughout his life, he's also wondered what it's like living in a house and having a roof over your head. And the transition here is just so symbolic to show how his freedom's now been restricted. The book also touched upon how he hoped to stay in a castle, and it's the first of many be careful what you wished for things that we see throughout the episode. Like, sure, he's staying at a castle, but it's not really in the way that he wanted. I did also wonder if this was intended to resemble a constellation. There's a fair few mentioned in the book, such as the Crown and the Crone's Lantern, and yeah, great slow reveal. As the camera pans down, we come to the realization that Dunk's in his cell, and we find him sitting on a stool. I also love how small it is compared to Dunk's large frame. Throughout the season, we've had the constant theme that Dunk's out of place, and this really just adds to that feeling. This moment's the lowest point for the character, and it reminds me a lot of Ned in the main show, as well as when Jon was locked up after killing Dany. We then see the window, which looks a bit different from the illustration in the book. However, the text does talk about it being there and how it's even facing the wrong way, which just makes things worse. We can also see that it's pouring down outside and the storm sort of beats on Dunk throughout the episode. Finally though, it clears up for the day when things seem more helpful. But right now, this sums up the atmosphere. Dunk thinks about how due to the clouds, the armor won't glisten like how it did and everything's lost its shine. The second day of the tourney was overcast with a gusty wind blowing from the west. The crowds should be less on a day like this, Dunk thought. It would have been easier for them to find a spot near the fence to see the jousting up close. Egg might have sat on the rail while I stood behind him. Instead, Egg would have a seat in the viewing box, dressed in silks and furs, while Dunk's view would be limited to the 4 walls of the tower cell where Lord Ashford's men had confined him. It's all him just realising the glitz and glamour isn't what it was cracked up to be, and everything has basically faded into being shit. The timeline is also a bit different as well. In the novella, as mentioned, it's the second day, and this episode mainly takes place overnight and into the morning. In the book, he also spends all day in the cell, even to the point that he thinks he might just be left there until he dies. But yeah, that's all being condensed down. You know, we've talked in our other breakdowns how they've shifted stuff about, and yeah, it's very, very, very shit start to the second day. Dunk then strokes a wet rat, showing how kind he is. He's the kind of guy who always hits the thumbs up, and it's something we've seen with his horses.
Are you talking to your horses? Yeah. That's fucking mad.
In the book, he also worries about what's happened to his horses and hopes Raymond's taking care of Chestnut and Thunder. He then thinks that Egg might have as well, which is when his mind wanders to the reveal. Had a knight ever been made such a fool? Arlan's voice then rattles through his head about how he's Dunk the Lunk and as thick as a castle wall. However, he remembers something that Arlan said which basically inspires the speeches he gives in the episode. A hedge knight is the truest kind of knight, Dunk. the old man had told him a long, long time ago. Other knights serve the lords who keep them or from whom they hold their lands, but we serve where we will, for men whose causes we believe in. Every knight swears to protect the weak and innocent, but we keep the vow best, I think. He sends soon alerted to the guards and Egg entering the cell. Again, it's a little bit different in the book, as Egg's holding the lantern here as opposed to the guards, and kind of just showing that he's leading the way. The book also talks about the meal he's getting and it being like a proper feast. There's well-charred meat and a skewer of roast onions, which I think was given by Egg because it's kind of like, sorry mate. However, you might also notice that Dunk's eating with his hand, and the book says that it's because there is the worry that Dunk might use a knife and fork as a weapon. Now Dunk is still shocked that his squire is really a Targaryen, but mate, like, the clues were there. You piece of shit! The guards are then told to leave the food and go, which is similar to the book. Now it might seem dangerous, but Baelor has the measure of Dunk and knows that he's not going to hurt Egg. Dunk then tucks into his food right away, sparing no time, which is like the book, as he didn't realise how hungry he actually was. Egg's clothes are also a bit different here, as he was described as having a Targaryen sigil on his doublet in the book. Here though, it's more in line with the Targaryen dragon riding dress. We saw Dany wear this as her final costume, and Rhaenyra wore it a lot throughout House of the Dragon. It's made for like specifically riding dragons, but its usage here in the show I think it's a bit performative. They obviously need to remind the small folk that they were once powerful and rode dragons, and this is one way to do that. I think it's kind of like when you see the royal family wearing military dress, even though a lot of them have never seen service. It's a big world away from the glorified potato sack that he's worn so far though, and shows the vast difference between the pair. Despite being Dunk's squire, Egg is highborn, wearing fancy clothes and standing over his knight. It shows that despite Dunk's size, he's still smaller than someone who's highborn. Now you wouldn't think Dunk would be able to be alone with the Targaryen again, but yeah. Now Baelor has sent Egg to apologise, which is a line that comes directly from the book and kind of speaks to Baelor's character. Baelor is a very fair man, as we see in the episode, and it's clear that, he doesn't think that people are below him like the other Targaryens do. Dunk asks how many Aegons there have been, as well as asking if it was all a prank bro. Egg says there's been 4, with this making Aegon the 5th, if you will. These are all lines that come from the book though, including the line that he never meant to lie.
I never meant to lie.
Yeah, but you did.
All this stuff about it being some jape to fool a hedge knight, all that stuff comes directly from the book too. Makes this scene feel really authentic, and it's probably the most accurate show that we've had so far.
So why'd you do it? Was it some jape? Make a fool of the stupid hedge knight?
It's at this point Egg explains he was supposed to squire for Darren. However, he's a shit knight, and he wanted to hide until the tourney was over. Egg was still desperate to do this duty though, and in Dunk he saw his best chance to achieve it. Dunk looked at him thoughtfully. He knew what it was like to want something so badly that you would tell a monstrous lie just to get near it. And this might kind of play into how Dunk's not really a knight. Now in the book, Egg explains how once Darren left Summerhall, Darren lost their escort. Egg then explains everything and that they were meant to lay low at the inn. As Dunk says though, it wasn't Darren that made him say he was a stable boy or keep up the ruse longer than he should. This is the angriest that we've seen Dunk so far, and his speech at the end is really, really impassioned. I know the guy was a rugby player before this, and you can often be like, the fucking sportsman can't act. But yeah, the range that he goes through in this episode's really, really incredible, and we just see that anger slowly coming to the surface. At the core of this is a man's dreams who are crushed, and this was also Egg could go an undercover boss. Dunk is then rude to him, and it shows his contempt for the highborn status of Egg.
We can't have the little prince being disappointed now, can we?
Despite everything though, Egg still calls him sir, and Dunk says it's bad luck that they found each other. I mean, yeah, it is bad luck that he's locked up in the cell and has to take part in a trial by combat, but he might make a name for himself after all, and get the glory that he wanted.
Sir Duncan the Tall. 4 pages for Sir Duncan. He must have been quite a man.
So they say.
Sadly, the show does cut out a bit where they kind of talk about living in King's Landing and how different their lives have been. The series does start in at this point though that Dunk might not have been knighted, which the book also alludes to, but we'll discuss that in more detail later on. Like the novel, Dunk's then told that Baelor wants to meet him after he's eaten. Dunk doesn't want to wait around though, and to be honest, I'd rather just get it over and done with as well. We then join Baelor in what looks to be a library with him poring over books. In the novel, we're just told it's Lord Ashford's chambers, and the picture's pretty vacant, but I love that they added this here. As we know, he's not only the hand of the king, but is also the next in line, and I'm guessing there's this pressure to be as knowledgeable as possible. Whereas a lot of the Targaryens either hang out at brothels, get drunk all the time, or go around being cruel, Baelor is one of the good ones, and you could say he's got a good egg on his shoulders. Now Dunk's definitely expecting a tense dressing down, or worse, but Baelor just tells him to rise. The Lord even asks Dunk to get him a cup of wine, which is something right out the book. Fire and Blood also goes into how the royals often start off as cupbearers in meetings, and we saw Rhaenyra doing this in episode 1 of House of the Dragon. It's a way they can get used to the councils and also fill out a humble service. Dunk knows that he's gonna be good at it as well, because he's a fucking good squire who intended no harm.
One need not intend harm to do it.
Alright, mate. In the book, Baelor then says he might even done the same thing in his position, and this kind of speaks to why he does what he does at the end. The right thing is tough to do in Westeros though. Dunk was of course right to stop Aerion from hurting Tanzel, but in this world, the gulf in their social status could not be any wider. Both Egg and Dunk have an airy, fairy idea of what's right and wrong, and life as a knight. Egg's upbringing made it so he was blind to class, while Dunk believes that knights will always do the right thing. And we haven't necessarily seen that that's the case. The combined effect of this has led to Dunk being where he is, and there's even a threat that he could have his hand and foot chopped off. Baelor tries to be fair as well, as Aerion wants his head, although in the book he mentions how it's preferably without the teeth, which calls back to the prince having a loosened tooth after the fight. But yeah, Baelor in the book talks about how he talked about them taking his head, but the punch and kick could mean that those limbs have to go. Now the Targaryens in general are just worried about an uprising, so any dissent must be squashed. And it would be terrible if a commoner stood up to a dragon. Right now, there's a lot of people suspecting that they might not be as powerful as they seem, and basically having the idea of what we saw in the play hammered home by a commoner doing this and standing up to a dragon would just make people very uneasy at King's Landing. Egg then blurts out that he wishes Dunk had killed his brother, which is also a line in the text. Beyond that though, kinslaying is one of the biggest sins in Westeros. To kill family said to curse you, and it's why Aemon doing what he did at the end of House of the Dragon Season 1 was seen as such a faux pas. Egg's then dismissed and the pair talk about the punishment. They also can't really trust Egg at the moment, because the guy's been basically lying non-stop for 2 days. Egg will tell him, I have no doubt, said Prince Baelor, but the boy has been known to lie too, as you have good reason to recall. Which son will my brother believe? As for the matter of these puppeteers, by the time Aerion's done twisting the tale, it will be high treason.
It will be high treason.
Treason.
The dragon is the sigil of the royal house. To betray one being slain, sawdust, blood spilling from its neck, well, it's doubtless innocent, but it was far from wise. Aerion calls it a veiled attack on House Targaryen, an incitement to revolt. Maekar will likely agree.
A veiled attack on House Targaryen, an incitement to revolt.
In the book, we then actually get insight into Dunk's thoughts, as the words won't escape his mouth. "Aye," said Dunk. "Aye, your grace, I meant no treason, it was only a wooden dragon. It was never meant to be a royal prince," he wanted to say, but his words had deserted him once and all. He had never been any good with words. Baelor then asks Dunk how good of a fighter that he is. He's going to need to be, as another charge of kidnapping is about to be added to Dunk's rap sheet. Daeron lied to his father by saying that Dunk stole Egg from the inn they were staying at, so now he's on the hook for that as well. In the book, Daeron actually appears at the hall and the whole trial thing, and later japes he'd been looking for Egg at the bottom of his wine cart. And honestly, yeah, if you don't hate the Targaryens enough at this point, burn them all! Baelor understands though that they rule the house based on their history, and it's the sons like Daeron and the awfully entitled ones like Aerion that will cause their house's downfall. Dunk then gives a rousing speech that's new for the show, with him talking about knights doing the right thing. It's all something that comes full circle at the end, and it is such a great moment. Dunk is then taken to his trial while Aerion just sits there and obnoxiously eats nuts. Again, Daeron's there in the book, but I do actually prefer that they saved his return for the tent scene. Maekar also looks visibly disgusted at his son, and they're kind of turning the house into a spectacle. It's at this point that Dunk then demands trial by combat. We have of course seen them in the series before, and Tyrion famously had one in the main show. Also love how the Ashfords are pushed down the bottom of the table, and we get some hilarious moments with them picking things off the floor. Everyone fucking hates the Targaryens, but like we see here, no one's willing to stand up to them. Aerion then refuses the trial by combat, which angers his father. He's a total coward despite being trained by the best of the best of the best, sir. He's scared of a simple hedge knight who grew up in Flea Bottom and thus goes for a trial of the 7 for a number of different reasons. If 6 knights fail to join, then he's cast as guilty, but even if they do, Aerion's gonna have better fighters on his side. The book explains how the Kingsguard have taken an oath to protect the royals, and thus he'll immediately have these knights in the ranks. The novel also explains that luckily the best are at King's Landing protecting the king, but still there's some quite good fighters here. Aerion seems to relish this technical win over Dunk though, as there hasn't been a Trial of the Seven since 42 AC. Lionel even says in the book that it's been 100 years since the last one. Most have no idea what it is. Now, the Andals believe that if there was 14 knights in a game of life and death, then it was more likely than not that the gods would punish the guilty party.
Oh, if it was the Andals.
Like, the whole thing is such a spectacle that they may even arrive and take part. They do sort of change up the scene, as in the book, Maker knows what the trial is, and Aerion in the show basically takes his father's lines there. Dunk is also very at his depth, and Maker is furious. He asks if his son's hiding behind this technicality because he's afraid. His excuse to his father, though, is that Darren has been apparently slighted and also needs to get justice. In the book, Darren later renounces his claim against Duncan, but there was still a one from Aerion, so the fight still goes ahead. However, this is why the drunken prince is then forced to join Arion's side. Darren's charges being a lie kind of also foreshadows the end of the trial as well, which is something we will talk about in the spoiler section. He then goads his father by bringing up the topic of honour. This is something his dad knows all about, as he took part in the Blackfyre rebellion. In this scene, Arion's just a total dickhead, and the nut-smashing thing just completely shows his arrogance. At this point, no one really believes they can do anything against the Targaryens, but we are starting to see those seeds of dissent popping up amongst the people. I think as well as an audience, we've kind of been sold like the Targaryens kind of being lovable anti-heroes in a way. Like Egg is difficult to hate, but even in the main show, I think Dany was pretty much always presented as likable, and even when she went bad, people just seen it as being out of character. Because she's so nice, like that little egg. House of the Dragon, though, that definitely whitewashes the Targaryens, and in the book, it's a lot more balanced, whereas the show just has, like, Rhaenyra and co being the nice side, even though Daemon's having kids murdered in their beds. We obviously have heard about the Mad King as well, but it's rare that we get massive scenes with Targaryens who are just being complete dickheads, especially just like this. So I love this performance. Dunk also needs to find 6 of the blokes to fight and potentially die for him, and considering the first part of the season was people saying they didn't even know about Sir Arlan, it is going to be hard, but he has to do this or he will be found guilty. It's like some sort of medieval Survivor series. Baelor then shoots his nephew a disgusting look, and Mako grabs him and calls him an idiot. Also love how Lord Ashford bangs his head in his kneeling, showing how desperate he is to climb the ranks. Bro is in so much debt that he'd even need to go on Sir Caleb of Hammer. Returning to the elm tree in the rain, though, it's a far cry from the glorious UK weather that we've seen in the previous episodes. Dunk had never felt so alone as he did when he walked out of the gates of Ashford Castle and heard the portcullis rattle down behind him. A soft rain was falling, light as dew on his skin, and yet he shivered at the touch of it. Across the river, coloured rings haloed the scant few pavilions where fires still burned. The night was half gone, he guessed. Dawn would be on him in a few hours, and with dawn comes death. The book also has him thinking as well that they might as well have just told him to get 6,000 knights, because he's got no fucking chance of getting 6. It's hopeless. He also contemplates fleeing, but realises he'd rather die a knight than live as an outlaw. It's here that he then returns to Chestnut and Thunder. In the book, the horses were already at the Fossaway Pavilion, but I think it works better just dramatically having them here in the rain. It's a very, very sad scene. Just like the book, Raymond then reminds poor Dunk just how bad the situation is, as real lances and more will be used.
Duncan, that means battle axes, morning stars and lances of war.
Stefan then reminds his cousin that he's just a squire and has no skin in the game, but the riper apple chooses to fight for Dunk. But yeah, at this point in the book, Stefan even calls him Raymond the Reluctant. New for the show is also Stefan's rant about how the Targaryens are colonizers. He also seems like a really nice guy and even echoes Dunk's words from before.
All knights vow to protect the innocent.
Now, the Fossaways were in Westeros before the Targaryens arrived and will likely be there long after they're gone. Which is right, as he fought in the wars in the main series. He then also asks where their dragons are. It's just like Raymond's outburst earlier in the season, and clearly a sentiment shared amongst the family. To them, these dickheads came in with dragons, forced their laws upon everyone, and subjugated the entire land. Aegon is kind of basically Aegon the Conqueror, and these Westery are the Anglo-Saxon. Stefan at this point seems virtuous though, and he asks why tragedy so oft follows honourable men. However, as we learn, his rebellious chatter and talk of honour is all bluster as he bends the knee for a lordship. This was foreshadowed last week as well, when Raymond said he was far from chivalrous. Darren in the book at one point also says, Dunk counted on his fingers. That makes 6. Who is the 7th man? Prince Darren shrugged. Aerion will find someone if he needs be. He will buy a champion. He has no lack of gold. Which foreshadows the bribery afoot. At this point though, Stefan says he knows people that he can recruit for the team. In the book, he then mentions Lionel, Lord Lannister and Ser Otho. We never actually had met Lionel in the book before this point, and then he just randomly showed up at the tournament. So I did appreciate that the show handled things differently and actually introduced the character before he just shows up ready to die for Dunk, who he's never met. Stefan is very intense in these parts though, and a part of me did even think they were changing things up from the book. However,
I fight with Prince Aerion and the accusers.
in the book, Raymond was also unsure whether his cousin could get them on his side. Dunk then says that he thinks that this is God's punishment. He thinks this is all happening because he didn't know his place. It's a hint that maybe he wasn't actually knighted by Sir Arlan and just made it up and tied it in with the Robin story. Which, In episode 1, Dunk did say that Arlan always meant for him to be a knight, but we did see that he was silent in the flashback. Later on, he also hesitates when he has to knight Raymond, as deep down, I think he knows that this wouldn't be legitimate, which then leads Lionel to doing it for him. Arlan also then shrugs in a flashback to Dunk's own knighting, which seems a bit suspect. So while I never suspected it in the book, I feel like the show is leaning into the idea that Dunk was never actually dubbed by Sir Arlan. They're then interrupted by Egg, who's come to say that he will still squire for him. The reunion turns very sour very quickly though, as Darren comes in as well. I much prefer how it's handled in the show though, because it's weird seeing him at the table and then having Dunk give this massive reaction to seeing him again when he'd already know that he'd already seen him through the day. Not content with attacking just one prince, he then holds a knife to the throat of Darren and implies that he'll stab him in the neck. It is different to the book, as Zeri said he might stab him in the belly, and we are being thorough. He's very cowardly, just like Aerion though, and a total waste of space. Did make me laugh as well how Dunk says,
"They can't kill me twice."
Now while Maester is joining the accusers to try and win some honour back, Darren's dishonourably taking a fall. It's kind of building off the match fixing from last time, but we see a big difference in Dunk. There he was against it, whereas he's seen the shades of grey now and is willing to accept it. It's here that they also touch upon the Kingsguard. And Dunk is quite literally royally fucked. Aegon is happy for Aerion to die though, as Maester will be well protected and Darren is taking a fall. So Dunk at least stands a chance. In the book though, he thinks how Darren might be playing him and this could be another Targaryen trick. They then touch upon the past and what Aerion used to do to Aegon, which is straight from the book. And Aerion, I remember when I was little, used to come into my bedchamber at night and put his knife between my legs. He had too many brothers, he'd say. Maybe one night he'd make me a sister, then he could marry me. Yeah, it is pretty funny to be fair. Even through Egg's cat in the well as well, apparently. The guy's a fucking dickhead in a nutcase, and Aerion believing he's a dragon in human form could also be something else that we will talk about in the spoiler section. But yeah, as we know, the Targaryens have this generational madness, and this is why he was so offended by the play.
A pity he wasn't born a Fossaway. Then he'd think himself an apple. We'd all be a deal safer.
Darren then asks Dunk for a private word, and he then explains his dreams. He has the Targaryen trait of visions, while Aerion has the cruelty. Now, visions are a big part of the story, and it was Daenys the Dreamer who predicted the fall of Valyria. You also have Aegon's dream, which has been passed from king to king. Helena predicted a lot of things in House of the Dragon, and Darren is cursed with his sight as well. We even had the vision last week, and shoutouts to everyone who pointed out the birthmark on the face of the seer, which could be a nod to the three-eyed raven, which we will talk about more in the spoiler section. Darren then says that in the dream, a great big dragon fell on Dunk, and the beast was dead, but Dunk was still alive.
Did I kill it? That I could not say.
Darren then mentions how they used to be masters of the dragon, but they're all gone. Again, this vision, major foreshadowing that we'll discuss in the spoiler section, especially as it works twofold. Despite being a waste of space though, Darren doesn't want to die just yet and apologises if he's killed Dunk with his lie. He also touches upon being damned to some kind of hell with likely no wine, which is a line directly from the novel. Dunk then heads towards the puppet show tent, which is in disarray since the scuffle. He recalls the play with Tanzel, saying, "You are no knight." This once again highlights that Dunk may have not actually been knighted. In the book, he just looked at the space where the puppeteer's wagon was, but I love this bit of subtext. He then looks at the severed head of Florian the Fool. Dunk is kind of Florian the Fool himself, as both were not of high birth and had tatty mixed clothes. This scene also visually looks a lot like the legendary lines in Hamlet. In it, Hamlet is holding the skull of his father's former jester, and it works here as the Fool is another name for a jester. Here Dunk is lamenting the loss of his crush though, and in the book he's also worried that he's lost his shield, but luckily she left it with Pate. The book then says that he can spot his wagon instantly as it has the sword and anvil, which makes it easy to distinguish. They then sit in his wagon just like the book. Dunk asks where Tansel went, and Pate mentions that they left for Dawn. In the book, it's also explained that her uncle didn't want her to see Dunk die, and Pate says, well gone is well forgot. This is basically playing upon how the dragons may forget about her, but that she may also forget about Dunk eventually and be spared the pain of seeing her hero die. Pate then gets the shield out, which is expertly painted and has far more detail than a sigil usually has. Pate's also replaced the steel around the shield and added straps, all for the low price of a copper. Dunk then says that it's painted up like death, and in the book he thinks about how it looks like the stars falling, so it's a bad omen. However, Pate says the elm tree's still alive, and the shooting star of course brings good luck. Does it? Does it really? Because his life's fucking ruined. In the book though, he does think he should have stuck with the chalice, as that had wings. Pate then talks about how it'll be heavier but stronger, which is also a line from the novel.
Oaken iron, guard me well, or else I'm dead and doomed to hell.
This rhyme is also something that Arlan taught Dunk, and in the book it stirs up memories of the old man. Dunk then departs for the tourney grounds, and the rain has faded to usher in some hope. The book even shows this change by highlighting that all the rain had stopped. Now missing from the show are the small folk who come up to wish Dunk luck, and it kind of plays into how everyone hates the Dragon Lords. They were impressed with him though, and how he was a knight who remembered his vows and basically stood up for them while others wouldn't have. An old man stepped up to take his hand and said, "May the gods give you strength, sir." Then a begging brother in a tattered brown robe said a blessing on his sword, and a maid kissed his cheek. "They are for me." "Why?" "Yes, Pate, what am I to them?" "A knight who remembers his vows," the smith said. They basically help him armor up, and if you want to upgrade your wardrobe, mate, then why not check out our merch store right below the video. There we have a whole host of Knight of the Seven Kingdom inspired shirts, including our swords one, dragon one, and a lot more. We also have Fallout inspired stuff as well, and the more you buy, the more of a discount that you get. Now we then see Sir Humphrey Harding, Robin Rysling, Humphrey Beesbury, and Lionel Baratheon, you bastard, waiting for him to come. "Oh, you bastard, Ned. Oh, you bastard." Dunk then thanks him for coming, and Humphrey says that the debt is Aerion's and they've come to collect it. Both Humphreys have turned up as well as their brother by marriage, which it gets very confusing, I can imagine. "George, mate, you need to learn some new fucking names. I'm sick of everyone being called Aerion or Humphrey or some shit." The line about the broken leg is also straight from the text, but he's got to stay on his horse the whole fight, if that's even possible. Robin's lines are new for the show though, and they play off the scene last week with Egg. He says how he'd usually die a king's servant, but when the crown goes against the gods, that's when he has to go against the crown. He's very pious and would probably join up with the Faith Militant if he was born in another time. Now we learn that it's Egg who's brought these lords, not Sir Stefan, as Lionel explains.
The fuck is Sir Stevron?
As Raymond mentions in the book, the lords are unlikely to know who Stefan is. He doesn't really have the friends he says he does, and wouldn't have been able to get them. By the sounds of it as well, he didn't even try, and probably just went straight to make the deal instead. Just like the book, Lionel then explains that there hasn't been a trial of the Seven for 100 years, and this is the chance to put his name in the history books. He hasn't really had the chance to prove himself, and it all kind of plays off his speech at the party. The houses, in general, are like they're all kind of in this weird place at the moment, where everything's peaceful, but they desperately crave death and battle. Glory, dying, fighting, that's the only way people get remembered, and people obviously don't sing songs about how boring that someone was, or how you made a great YouTube breakdown that day. But this trial of the Seven could be something that people remember. We then see Dunk face the small folk audience. Aerion and his father then arrive in the finest armour. A roar went up from the crowd. At the north end of the meadows, a column of knights came trotting out the river mist. The three Kingsguard came first, like ghosts in their gleaming white enamel armour, long white cloaks trailing behind them. Even their shields were white, blank and clean as a field of new fallen snow. Behind rode Prince Maker and his sons. Now in the book, they then talk about how there's only 6, and wonder if Aerion's not been able to make up his 7. Stefan arrives though, and yeah, you're like, oh, nice one, Stefan's here, but then quickly realise that he's become the accuser's 7th. Now he's a fucking dickhead, hate the lad, never hits a thumbs up, and his words here are laid out a bit differently in the book. "I shall be more than that before this day's done. Lord Fossaway, I like the sound of that." There he just switches sides and says he has allegiance to his lord before later saying that Lord Fossaway sounds good. Yet the backroom deal is more explicitly talked about, and he taunts everyone a lot more. His armor also looks really cool, with it being adorned with apples and branches. Raymond is shocked though and says,
"You traded your honor for a lordship."
Stefan, of course, fucking hates the Targaryens, but the reality of the situation is that, like it or not, they're in charge and time to lick some boots. The Dragon Lord of course needed more men, so Stefan saw an opportunity and took it. At some point, Cider Hall also lost its lordship and Stefan intended to restore it via this deal. Raymond is furious though and tells his cousin he has to get his horse himself and then asks to be knighted, which are both moments that come from the book. As Lionel says,
any knight can make a knight.
But yeah, Dunk's hesitation here makes it seem like he isn't a knight and thus cannot make a knight. If he knighted Raymond and that was then exposed somehow, then he's really screwed over his new friend. Either way though, Raymond does become a knight, however, this is through Lionel. And I bet it's not the first time a Baratheon's had someone on their knees while they're waving their sword in their face. Ooh, Bessie! Ooh, Ned, you bastard! Ooh, Bessie, Bessie! Lovely tits, Bessie! Ah! Get out, Robert! Ah! Whew, Jesus, he nearly took over me forever there. This creates a new house though, which is House Fossaway of the New Barrel. Now to differentiate himself from Stefan, Raymond opts to have a green apple on his arm and for his sigil. This plays on the fact that Stefan kept saying he was still green, and it also subtly plays into him still being ripe and this being his first real challenge. I love the knighting scene though, and this is possibly one of the coldest scenes I think I've ever seen in Game of Thrones. The music, voiceover, and slow motion really makes it a cut above the rest. It was like this the whole time. I love the cut between Raymond and then Dunk imagining it's Arlan knighting him, and Arlan kinda shrugs as Dunk hasn't been knighted. Again, it's kind of the idea of being careful what you wish for, as he wanted to be a knight and have glory on the battlefield, but not like these. Not like these. Dunk then meets Lord Ashford and talks about how he's one person short for the trial. But this means we can get an insanely cool speech as Dunk addresses the knights. We see Gwyn, who looks down, and Dunk once again mentions Arlan of Pennytree. He appeals to the good honour and explains that knights defend the innocent and says that's just what he did.
I was not Sir Erland's blood, but I have followed his example, as your sons will follow yours.
Cuts to the crowd and we see what I think are Tybalt and Daemon Lannister due to their red and black clothes adorned with gold. Then some people are in gold colours specifically, one of which I think might be Lord Karen. In the book, Dunk directly addresses the Lords and Knights by name when trying to get someone else to join them, and he basically calls out all the great houses, and it kind of plays into how they don't really have honour. Everyone just sits there awkwardly before a dude then gets up and rips one hell of a fart. And that's my review of Ryan Airy. Nah, but this might be Sir Otho Bracken. This is because in the book, he's the only lord or knight to respond to Dunk before the next part of the Hedge Knight's appeal. He's a lot more classier than this though, but yeah, I appreciate that being the response. Dunk then says that his cause is just, and Otho basically says, yeah, that's a you problem, mate. This then angers Dunk though, who says,
"And there no true knight among you!"
Reminds me a lot of Tyrion Lannister's speech at the Battle of Blackwater Bay.
They say I am half a man. But what does that make the lot of you?
We then see one of the ladies of the night named Red. Maybe you should have listened to her advice, mate. These lords and knights, they think nothing of you. The crowd are all cracking up as well, the fart still, and all seems lost, but finally the gate opens and in comes a knight finally. And I bet they were like, "That's gotta be King!" In the book, Dunk actually thought it was Baelor due to the knight wearing his armour. However, Baelor reveals that he didn't bring his armour and thus has to borrow his son's. And I'll tell you what, mate, when the music kicked in, I started going mental. Turned up like fucking Stone Cold Steve Austin. Woo! I absolutely love how the theme kicks in though, as the show started with a bait and switch as it hit in the first episode. They saved it for this though, and just Dunk kicking the horse and then cutting to credits here is so good. He's now got his own heroic moment, which is underscored by the theme playing in full, and crank it the fuck up as we go to the credits. Baelor then says,
"This man protected the innocent, as every true knight must.
Let the gods decide if he was right or wrong."
Baelor knows that the Targaryens only rule due to their history of having the blood of the dragon. Now though, there are no dragons, so they must be careful. Aegon wiped out Harrenhal, and House of the Dragon showed us just how powerful the dragons are, and once the dragons returned to Westeros in the main show, they became immensely feared once more. But at the moment, they could be defeated by an army just like any other house. So Baelor Breakspear has decided to show the realm that there's still some good left in the world, and they can trust them as their leader because they're so nice. In the book, he also has wings on his helmet similar to Daemon and House of the Dragon at the Tourney in Season 1. You could even argue that this moment causes the events that transpire in the main series. Overall though, it's a great episode, and I've seen people like complaining about the episode's length. But we need to remember, The novella is only about 110 pages long, maybe longer with the illustrations, but not very long when you go by the word count. And I did even think that this could have been a movie. However, I think the writers have done a great job of turning this into fantastic episodic television. Now, I do think it's going to be a fair bit before we see the final fight, unfortunately. We know that there's 2 episodes left, and know from the trailers that we are getting a flashback episode. So I don't know if they're going to show that for the finale, and I think more than likely that it's going to arrive next week. As of making this video, I haven't seen the trailer for the next episode yet, but we might be over 2 weeks away until the actual showdown due to this airing on a Friday. Either way though, that's it for the spoiler-free stuff, and if you've either read the book or just are desperate to know some of the reveals, then the next part of the video is for you. Also, turn off now if you don't want to know, because there will be spoilers, heavy spoilers. Now, the vision is of course a major spoiler, and in the episode, Darren said, "A great beast with wings so large they could cover this meadow, it had fallen on top of you." Dunk then asks whether he killed it, which is ambiguous for a reason. In the book, Dunk wins the trial and forces Aerion to rescind the accusation, so it's a massive victory, but there is a little bit of sweet moment. During the fight, Maester struck his brother's head, and Baelor's helmet was basically just holding the whole thing together. Pate then removed it, and basically his head was completely crushed, and then he fell into Dunk, which proves that Darren's dream was correct. Baelor the dragon was dead on top of Dunk in the end, and the dragon died in a meadow just like this. But yeah, did Dunk kill him? Well, technically not from a certain point of view, but pulling him into this is what killed the character. But yeah, seeing all this shit as well, I think it kind of explains why Darren drank so much. Naturally, Baelor dying also destroys Baelor, and he says how his father would have been a great king. Baelor, or Baelor, however you pronounce it, he also dies the same year as the season takes place. Thus, the Iron Throne then ends up towards Aegon's lineage. We then end up with the Mad King being slain, Jon Snow being born, Daenerys getting the dragon eggs, and lots of things basically come out from this history-changing moment. Egg at one point in the episode also says,
"He thinks he's a dragon in human form. That's why he was so wroth at the puppet show."
Now this is a very interesting line for 2 reasons. Firstly, it refers to how Aerion dies in the book. Believing he could actually turn into a dragon, the prince drinks wildfire and dies a horrible and painful death. Yay! It is somewhat of a Targaryen obsession, and it is rumoured that Aegon himself used it to try and hatch the dragon eggs at Summerhall. This then led to him dying, which plays off the prediction from last time, and Dunk also apparently died in this as well. Though I do wonder if the show will play things beyond that and have them basically going off to go and live happy lives amongst the common folk. That's just me coping, but this sort of thing has happened before. But yeah, the use of magic and wildfire ended up wiping out a lot of the Targaryen line, and was a pivotal moment in the history of Westeros. One thing that was also spotted as well that we kind of touched upon before but need to expand here was how the fortune teller woman looks to have a wine-stained birthmark. Fans have pointed out that this might somehow be connected to Brynden Rivers. Now in the book, he was actually one of Aegon IV's bastards. He was a ruthless spy master, kin to Viserys, or even Littlefinger. During the first Blackfyre rebellion, he was loyal to Darren II and eventually became the Hand of the King and also the Master of Whispers. However, after the third Blackfyre rebellion and Maker's death, a great council was called to discuss who should sit on the Iron Throne. Safe passage was promised to one of Daemon I's Blackfyre sons, only for Brynden to execute him. Once Egg was made the king, he then sent Brynden to take the Black of the Night's Watch, and he became the Lord Commander, but then disappeared beyond the wall. As we learned, he was a 3-eyed crow, or raven in the show. So, at a total reach, this could be the Lord Bloodraven walking while in the past, or passing on a message to the past, but probably not. However, it's also important to note that this is actually the same actress as the innkeeper in episode 1, so it definitely feels like someone may be possessing her. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down A Night of the Seven Kingdoms.
May the seven bear witness to our solemn and bloody offering.
Blessed be the Maker. What an absolutely stellar episode. Not only do we get one of the best fight scenes in the entire franchise, but we got some major additions to the lore with Dunk's time in Flea Bottom. This alters the order of the book by quite a lot and gives us some things from the Mystery Knight. That comes available in this book, and look mate, he's even got little pictures for you. I know you love your pictures. Just makes reading easier if you've got pictures in there. But yeah, lots of things to talk about, and we also have our shirts inspired by the series below, including our Tourney one and also our Mace one based on this episode. Don't want to waste any more of your time though, and we pick up immediately from last week. There all seem lost until Baelor Breakspear joined Dunk's Survivor Series team. Sadly, he hits the dirt come the end of the episode, and we have this constant image of people lying in the ground while Dunk hovers over them. Now we open with Baelor issuing the orders to the rest of his team. The first shot is a god's eye view, which plays really well into the episode. As we've heard, the trial of the Seven is so earth-shattering that the gods themselves might even come down to change the events and decide the victor. We have 14 knights all in a battle of life and death, and see firsthand how this battle might catch the eyes of those above. Now they're also arranged in what looks akin to a 7-pointed star. This further plays into the religion and the beliefs that those in Essos have. Dunk is the warrior who protects the followers of the Seven, and Baelor is the father who's a bearded man who judges the followers of the Seven. Now you might have seen that there was a lore video included in the main show's Blu-ray where we can see the warrior on the top right. Keeping in line with this, Baelor is at the bottom, just like the stranger. This is the Westeros Grim Reaper, and it foreshadows Baelor's death at the end of the episode. Now though, he's giving a speech, telling them not to panic, hit the thumbs up, and keep formation. He's by far and away the most experienced on the team, and having the Hammer himself join them is a massive bonus. This is a lot like the novel, and on top of that in this, they also have a very cunning plan. There they opt to use the Tourney lances as they're longer than the war lances that the other side will use. By using longer lances, the other team won't be able to reach them, and as my wife always says, size matters, and I don't like you, I'm getting a divorce. Dunk at one point even remembers the instructions that Arlan gave him and how jousting is just pointing at your opponent. Baelor then says to aim for the helm or chest, as while it's gallant to aim for the shield and a tourney, this is a fight to the death. I love how Egg is just standing there as well with a massive lance. Overall, the whole scene feels very Saving Private Ryan-y, and this is mirrored in the vomit moment we get next. Cutting to Raymond chucking up, Dunk does the same like he did at the start of episode 3. Later on in the entry, we also see him vomiting after drinking dirty water as a kid, and again, it's sort of like poetry, they rhyme. The character vomits just before his life changes in a big way, and there it marked him just before he met Arlan. Now this vomiting doesn't happen in the book, but I think having it here, just more realistic. Dunk has of course never fought in a tourney, and Raymond of course is also a newly dubbed knight. And yet, Dunk might not even be a knight based off what we saw last week. I can't remember who posted it, but I saw a great tweet on the interpretation of the knighting scene and why we cut to Arlan shrugging his shoulders and basically being like, I don't know, mate. During this moment, Lionel was saying the words to Raymond, but Dunk couldn't hear them, and Arlan had never said it to him, so in the fantasy, he just shrugged as to what they were. Also, love how Humphrey Harding calls them green boys. This speaks to how they're ripe and actually plays into Raymond. Raymond opted to use a green apple for his sigil so as to not be confused with Stefan, but also for the fact that it was riper. In the book, Baelor then explains how the rules work, and hey, they skipped them in the show, so I might as well do it here. If Sir Duncan is killed, it's considered that the gods have judged him guilty, and the contest is over. If both of his accusers are slain or withdraw their accusations, the same is true. Elsewise, all 7 of one side or the other must perish or yield for the trial to end. Prince Daeron will not fight, Dunk said. Not well, anyway, laughed Sir Lionel. Fucking hell, mate, he's done you there. We then see Humphrey Beesbury, who's got the most orange moustache I've ever seen. This kind of plays into his house sigil though, which is orange and the tash has clearly been dyed. You may also recognise the name as Lord Lyman Beesbury was featured in House of the Dragon Season 1. He was the master of coin there and was killed by Criston Cole. A Beesbury bastard also took part in the first trial of the Seven, so this might be why he felt it was his duty to join here. We've not met him in the show, so you're kind of unsure why he'd risk his life for Dunk, but I think that and the notion of honour might push him to do it. As for that Beesbury, he joined the side of the Faith during the Faith Militant Uprising and was unfortunately slain. This acts as a bit of a bad omen as both the Humphreys die in the first charge. In the book, it was just Beesbury who died initially, with Harding dying of his wounds later. But yeah, don't know who these characters are really, they just kind of shove them in, just kill them, don't mention them again, that's pretty much how they're handling it. Baelor then says that he will handle the Kingsguard as their oaths forbid them from attacking a Prince of the Blood. My brother erred when he demanded that the Kingsguard fight for his son. Their oath forbids them to harm a Prince of the Blood. Fortunately, I am such. He gave them a faint smile. Keep the others off me long, and I shall deal with the Kingsguard. My prince, is that chivalrous? Asked Sir Lionel Baratheon as the Septon was finishing his invocation. The gods will let us know, said Baelor Brixpear. And yeah, obviously, the gods do let them know and decide that maybe Baelor wasn't honourable in doing this. Also, I hope we see what the Kingsguard are doing during this next week. I hope we get, a play of this fight from the different point of views. And I'm guessing they were probably like, I'll just die then. On the show, it's Rysling who says,
Is that honourable, your grace?
He's a stickler for the faith, just like the High Sparrow. As mentioned in the book, it was Lionel, but for the show, they give him this new line instead.
No man fights so fierce as one neglected by his mother.
This might refer to a line in the book where Egg mentions how Baelor favours his mother. However, it's also possible this refers to him having dark hair as opposed to the traditional white of the Targaryens. Now, he might have actually been closer to his mother due to her protecting him because at the time the public disliked all the Dornish people. The peace with Dorne was also met with the technicality that they had to accept them. Obviously, you know, when you tell people you have to like this, you have to do this, people are like, no, I realise I don't want to now. And that was part of the angry sentiment that basically led people towards supporting Daemon Blackfyre. We will talk about the Blackfyre rebellion more in just a bit, but the whole thing around hair has of course been massive throughout the House of the Dragon franchise, and even before that we kind of saw it in the main series. Jon had dark hair despite being a Targaryen, and Ned pretended he was his bastard. Catelyn hated him because of this, but it helped to cover up that Lyanna and Rhaegar were his parents. As such, he was sent to the wall, but he became the fiercest warrior in Game of Thrones. Dunk also never knew his mother either and fights fiercely here as well. Baelor's killed by his brother Maester, and thus their mother likely didn't prefer Maester to Baelor, so Lionel is correct in his judgment, and it all kind of builds out perfectly into this episode off this one little line. Going very, very deep there, but yeah, I couldn't help but read into that, and I feel like it just exemplifies how well written this show is. Dunk then asks for his lance, which is a bit different to the book. There's Steely Pate brought it, but Egg insists on handing it over. Egg is told that he had better be there when Dunk gets back, and it's a new line for the show that calls back to Dunk saying he'd hunt him down with dogs earlier in the season.
You best be here when I come back. Rob me, and I'll hunt you down with dogs. Oh! You best be here when I get back. Rob me, and I'll hunt you down with dogs.
Dunk then begins to ride to his position. We then see his scepter says a prayer. In the book it mentions how he calls out to the Seven specifically and talks about how they want the warrior to reveal the innocent. Daeron's also very nervous and we can see Stefan watching him. The apple must be thinking, why have I decided to put my lot in with this absolute loser? We also see Aerion lowering his faceplate, and I still love this dragon imagery that they've brought into the costume. We also see the Baratheon helmet too, which is antlers just like his crown. And there's always been a horny Baratheon about. Ned, you bastard. Oh, Bessie tits.
Gods for Bessie.
Back in our day, you weren't a real man until you'd fucked one girl from each of the 7 kingdoms in the Riverlands. Bow your shits.
Bessie.
Ooh, Bessie, start the damn joust before I piss myself. Get out, Robert! Fucking hell, nearly got me there. Unfortunately, we don't get one of the fantastic jump cuts that was used in the trailer. During the one for episode 5, Dunk picks up his helmet and then we cut to him putting it on in the future. Unfortunately, that's missing, but yeah, here I think they just wanted to stay in the moment. Unfortunately as well, we're gonna have to stray away from the moment to pay some bills, but we'll be back after a quick word from our sponsors. Now there's lots of big wounds throughout this episode that are a bit more than a flesh wound. Everyone seems like they're at their lowest point and not really feeling their best. If you're in a similar position where you're unwell or need checking over and you're based in the US, then definitely have a look at our sponsors ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free, game-changing healthcare platform that connects you with top-rated, in-network doctors in your area. Getting in touch with a doctor can often be a long, laborious process that means you have to fight like Dunk just to get an appointment. There's long calls, it interrupting your day, and often a long wait for a checkup. But ZocDoc stops all that. All you have to do is open ZocDoc, type what you need, and this will instantly bring up appointments in your area. You can read reviews, view open slots straight away, and book one that works for you with a real doctor in your area. It's no long phone calls, no hold music, and you can fit it around your schedule. Just click, book, done. Whether it's mental care, dental care, eye care, skin care, or beyond, ZocDoc has you covered. ZocDoc offers access to over 100,000 healthcare providers across nearly every speciality, showing real-time appointment availability so you can pick a time that fits your schedule. Most appointments also happen within 24 to 72 hours, and same-day visits are often available. Don't delay those doctor visits. Head to my link in the description at ZocDoc.com/heavy-spoilers. There you can find and book a top-rated doctor today across various specialities. Visit ZocDoc.com/heavy-spoilers to explore their free, revolutionary platform and find the perfect doctor for you. As we see, Dunk is panicking and we hear a horn like the book. In that we then get his inner thoughts and he thinks that he's forgotten everything. A horn sounded. For a heartbeat, Dunk sat as still as a fly in amber. though all the horses were moving. A stab of panic went through him. I've forgotten, he thought wildly. I've forgotten all. I'll shame myself. I will lose everything. Thunder saved him. The big brown stallion knew what to do even if his rider did not. Now the book outlines that though Dunk is ripe, Thunder's been in over 100 battles at this point. Obviously, he can't betray what he's thinking and how the horse is doing it for him, so they just have egg screaming, which I think works much better dramatically. I even wondered if Thunder moved because of the training that we saw the pair doing earlier in the season. The charge looks stunning though, as we basically golden eye it to see it from Dunk's point of view. The novel even says that Dunk's vision's limited, and you can really feel that in these visceral moments. Aerion's lance and breaks into Dunk's torso just like the book. Dunk's freaked out there because there's no barriers or lines, and people are just charging at each other like that new sport that's been going viral on Twitter. And looks just as mental. In the book, Dunk tries to put into practice what Arlan told him and how he should point the lance at the dragon like the one on his shield. But that quickly goes out the window. He's no match for Aerion on horseback or even when it comes to the sword play later on. Aerion looks badass as well as he drops the broken lance and then arms himself with a morning star. Seems all over for Dunk and he turns around and sees Harding knocked off his horse by one of the Kingsguard. In the book, Beesbury was killed by Donald of Duskendale, and I did wonder if Harding was just killed by either Willem Wide or Roland Krakenall. Now just like in the book, within the first charge, Dunk's precious shield's completely shattered, and this was a kind of reminder of Tanzel. That's why he's here in the first place, and it just shows there's no time for sentimentality or grieving about your broken toys in battle. It then goes from bad to worse as he's hit by Arion's morning star and knocked out. Though this happens differently in the book, and he's already on the floor there, I love how there's this constant repetition of characters being in this position. Happens with Dunk here, and then we see it in the wounded soldier that we meet next. Rafe also ends up on her back as well, while Dunk holds her in his arms, and we have him falling later while following Arlan. It's also how the battle culminates with him grabbing Aerion. Tragically, Baelor's left in this position too, and we have characters knocked down throughout. Dunk is the only one who manages to get back up on his feet, and it highlights that he's got strength in ways that the others may not. Except for Rafe, which is a bit shy on that. Anyway, we cut to a flashback of his time in King's Landing. It's new for the show, with the battle in the book just continuing unbroken. However, I really appreciate the fleshing out of Dunk's early life here, and again, it's based around the book The Mystery Knight, which comes in this collection. I'm not getting paid for this, actually. Fuck you, HBO. Here, we catch Dunk cutting a horseshoe off a downed horse near King's Landing, and I imagine that this is the Battle of Redgrass Field, which was the decisive final battle of the first Blackfyre Rebellion. However, it does throw up a lot of questions. The dying man has the Hightower sigil on his doublet, and there are Lannister banners around the battlefield. In the Sworn Sword, it said how the Hightowers played both sides in the war. The Lannisters were on the side of the Targaryens, but in the book, they're not present at this battle. And I hope someone got fired for that blunder. Now, but that's what makes me doubt that it might be Redgrass Field, but it's probably one of those things that's going to get corrected in the comments. So if you know it for definite, then either check the comments or look and write a comment yourself. Thank you.
The guy is shockingly still alive, and Dunk decides to put him out his misery as the soldier calls for mother. Dunk later thinks he's calling out for his mother, but I have another theory time that might tie into the Seven. Their mother is someone people pray to for mercy, so if he's a Hightower who backed Daemon Blackfyre, then he might want mercy. Or maybe even an end to his suffering. He's also a case of someone still being alive when by all rights they should probably be gone. That very much plays into Baelor's fate, and during the battle he gets his skull cracked, which would normally be a killing blow. However, his helm's holding everything in, and thus he leaves the fight thinking that he's fine. Dunk fails to suffocate the soldier, and he causes more pain in the long run. Kinda like how he's dragged everyone into this fight for him. We then meet Rafe, who wants to try and get a ransom for the soldier as he has the sigil. In the book, this was one of Dunk's mates from his time before becoming a squire. In the novel, we learn he was part of a ragtag gang of thieves who used to roam around King's Landing causing mischief. They were Ferret, Rafe, and Pudding, but it seems like only Rafe survived by this point in his story. They were basically little monsters in Flea Bottom though, and would try and steal and sell meat to the pot shops. They also stole a severed head from the spikes around the keep and chased people around with it until it fully rotted and decayed. However, the show portrays them in a much better light, especially Dunk. We only really see Rafe stealing from the Nasty City Watch member, and they're just a lovable group of cockney thieves. You're gonna pick a pocket or two. Now in the book, it's implied that Rafe's a boy, but I actually like that they changed it to a girl. Dunk later says that he loves her, and though for her it seems like their friendship's platonic, I wonder if he saw some of Rafe in Tanzel. She's played by Chloe Leah, and you might recognize her from HBO's Dune Prophecy. The pair then struggle to get the guard from under the horse, so their only option is to steal his gold teeth. Battlefield scavengers were quite common in the Middle Ages, even up to the Napoleonic Wars. This franchise has of course had massive fights in it, but we've never seen people just pickpocketing the dead, but you've got to pick a pocket or two. They're obviously living in poverty, and we've seen the effects of war in stuff like House of the Dragon Season 2, so, why shouldn't these kids plunder the spoils of war? It's not like these soldiers would spare them a thought. She then asks if he knows any words as the soldier dies, which is like a Christian last rites. There's no septon though, and thus there will be no last words, and it kind of sums up the show as a whole and how there's these rites and glorious things that should be in place, but no one really sticks to them. As we saw, Dunk also had no words when Arlan died in episode 1. He's clearly not learnt them between this scene and the present timeline, and it's just kind of drifted through life. Now in the franchise is of course also the Silent Sisters who prepare bodies for burial. We kind of had them touched upon in episode 1 with the Ladies of the Night, and I do expect that we'll see them in the next episode as we'll likely witness Baelor's funeral. Haven't seen the episode 6 trailer as of making this video, but I do imagine that's what they're going to do. Also love how she says,
"You see, when these bloody highborn spoil, you gotta say words for them."
It implies that the rich and noble will rule even in the afterlife, akin in the pharaohs and monarchs of old. They then steal teeth to sell to a witch and head home, and we can see Rafe's wearing a really interesting helmet. It has wings on it, similar to depictions of the Targaryens, but it's more like a Celtic winged helmet. Our editor Matt also pointed out that it looks like the helmet that Malenia wears in Elden Ring, which George R.R. Martin helped write. And it's his fault that I didn't pronounce it right.
Fuck you, asshole.
And then interrupted by a Stokesworth soldier carrying a dead body. This has got a neat connection to Arlan, as we learn that he unhorsed the Stokesworth in a tourney. This person is clearly bringing back a highborn person who fought in the Battle of Redgrass Field, and as Dunk says,
"The war's over."
He also reiterates that the Black Dragon is dead, referring to Daemon Blackfyre, and says that they'll get free bread. Well, that's what Ferret says anyway, which calls back to the Lodger gang. Rafe is right though when she says that nothing is ever over and recalls when Pudding had accidentally killed a little brother of someone called Cedric. Again, this is new for the show and we only really have the names of the childhood friends in the book, and that's pretty much it. However, what this touches upon is the constant back and forth and escalation of people stealing. The other side then want to get revenge, and so on and so forth. We've seen this in major ways in House of the Dragon, where the two sides are basically on a race to the bottom of depravity. However, we also witness it in some scale in the show. Rafe steals from Maester, and then he gets revenge, and then she steals again and loses her life. Maester is later killed because of this, and it's just a cold time in Flea Bottom. It's so cold in the Flea. Dunk wants to stay though, as he thinks things will get better after the war, but as we see, Flea Bottom is in a very sorry state. I think it kind of speaks to Dunk's optimism and the folly that comes with it in general. He thought Flea Bottom would get better, but it led to things getting worse for him. He thought the Knights and Elites were valiant, and then saw how they treated those beneath them. Dunk's life's just been one big reality check, and we get that ourselves when we finally hit the Flea. Rats are crawling over dead bodies, and people are being amputated in the street. And it doesn't look hygienic, that love. King's Landing's reeling from war and battle low, and we see that the City Watch is just as corrupt as they've always been. Alistair here clearly knows Rafe and Dunk, and at some point also lost one of his hands. Stupidly, Dunk lifts the bag and says it's just rats, but if you listen closely, it makes a little jingling sound. Luckily though, Sir Arlan drunkenly exits the building and distracts Alistair so the kids can run off. He ends up saving the character later as well, and it seems like it's fate intervening. Now, for as bad as they are, Dunk did think about joining the City Watch in episode 1.
Could join the City Watch? Stop raping, sir.
I think deep down he was put off because he knows how corrupt they are. Stupidly, Rafe steals Alistair's ale skin, and she kind of underestimates how bad he is. Ultimately, this leads to her death, and their rivalry causes both to die, much like those in the Blackfyre Rebellion. The City Watch armor also looks different in House of the Dragons and Game of Thrones, just like the Kingsguards did. They look far less armored than during the Dance of the Dragons, and the cloak looks a lot less golden. This is probably the worst of them that we've seen in the franchise, and it just plays in the tone nicely that the colours are muted here as well. Flea Bottom also looks absolutely awful and might be the best portrayal of it to date. It's just very claustrophobic and filthy, and I wouldn't want to spend the day there. They then go to sell their wares to a blacksmith who says they'll be plundering that tomb for a dragon's age. Dragons used to live for centuries, and this is referring to the dead on the battlefield and the abundance of riches waiting for the people to pillage. He also hands back the leather branded for the Blackfyre rebellion, as it will be impossible to sell now. They managed to obtain 2 pieces of silver though, which have a stag on them. And at a reach, I think this is foreshadowing his path to meeting his new bestie Lionel. Might be reaching, but throughout this whole journey, we do see lots of little things that actually play off down the line, which we will point out. But yeah, a stag is what they refer to as a card in the book, and I did appreciate that we got this detail here. Now the money is intended to leave King's Landing, and Rafe wants to sail off to adventure. Sadly, the character never gets to experience it, and this is something Dunk ends up doing after Rafe's death. They then hobble into a low cellar with just a candle to light them, and it's clear that all they really have is each other. The plan is to head to the Free Cities though, and Dunk asks what if they aren't any better than here? Well, there's slavery for a start, but I do wonder if they would have had a better life in Bravos of Atlantis. I mean, the area, the Iron Bank, looked pretty clean. I do think that when you're an orphan though, that most places would probably be shit. Dunk then asks what if his mother comes back for him.
You are fucking stupid sometimes.
Whoa! Now I did get a lot of flashes of Rey in The Force Awakens here, and I think in Rafe dying it cements that there's nothing really there for him. I did even wonder if he's just sticking to that story because here's the one place that they get to be together. If they go somewhere else, they might drift apart and she might meet someone else. Now that might be me reaching, and it is possible that he could be inspired by what she says next. She says that if you want a family, go out there and get one. It's something he does when he follows Arlan and then reluctantly lets Egg join him. How about his family? We'll save that for the spoiler section. The pair then say they love each other, but it's clearly one-sided as Rafe says she's going, so he best be coming with her. We then pan up to the sky and a new day dawns. It shows the hope Rafe has that they can escape Flea Bottom, only for it to end in tragedy. I love how Dunk also strokes the goat, which shows he's always been an animal lover. The book goes into it in a bit more detail and says that he looks after the horses because he has a genuine love for them. Rafe then looks at the coins and heads out to find the prices being upped. That's post-war inflation for you, mate. There's also a massive line of people who want to leave, who were no doubt soldiers who fought on the wrong side of the war. Now, in case you don't know, Aegon Rivers was one of Aegon IV's bastards, and he supported his half-brother Daemon. Despite taking out Brienne Rivers' eye, the war was lost upon Daemon's death. He took Daemon's widow and surviving children to the Free Cities, eventually settling in Tyrosh. He then joined the Sellsword Second Sons and went on to found the Golden Company, with most of the former Blackfyre loyalists joining him. The leader supported the Third Blackfyre Rebellion, but died having never taken Westeros. So no doubt a lot of these people are trying to get across the Narrow Sea. This stuff here and what they're doing is all integral to the third novel, The Mystery Knight, and I do wonder if we'll see more setup for it next season. As of now, they've only done the 2, we kind of know what next season's going to be, but then the 3rd season, which will follow after that, they might be laying the groundwork here. Rafe then says something she regrets as she's furious they can't leave. She does kind of bring up how there must be another way, and when I heard that, I did wonder if they were going to do something with the price doubling. Technically, if it's doubled, it means that Rafe can go on her own, and Dunk could have stayed to wait for his mother. But she decides not to, and this seals her fate. Now, they don't fully go into that, but it is something that crossed my mind, and yeah, I do wonder if Dunk might blame himself for Rafe's death because he could have been like, you just go, you take it, you go. Either way, the pair are cornered by Alistair and one of his colleagues. It's hinted that he's a former thief as he tells Rafe that he used to have quick hands as well. As a punishment, they used to cut off the hands of thieves, and that's likely how he got his wounds. He's come back for his aleskin though, but she said she sold it when really she just threw it away. The watch member then takes her silver, and again, Rafe stupidly steals his knife. Speaks to her story about how people just keep trying to one-up the other person, and that just leads to your own downfall. Also, just realised as well, this guy was in Dune Prophecy as one of the Harkonnens. So a bit of trivia for you there. Finally having enough, he then cuts her throat, which is absolutely brutal. I did wonder as well if part of the reason that Dunk jumps so foolishly into saving Tanzell is because of what happens here. He couldn't save Rafe when he was younger, but now he's bigger and stronger and could save Tanzell from Aerion.
Enraged, Dunk attacks him, and thankfully Arlan comes to save the day. He goes feral and fights in a way like his mother did favour him, which could tie into that line before.
That boy be!
So in a way, Arlan saying the mother here means a mother came back for him and saved him. Which we could be reaching, but it's very clever. He also stabs him in the leg, just like the wound he suffers in battle. We see how good of a fighter that Arlan is, and even when he's vomiting, he's still ready to show his drunken master skills. He beheads the one guy, and we see the pigs feast on it. Now this might be a reference to how Dunk was chasing a pig in the book when he met Arlan. All the while, Dunk is looking over Rafe's body, and now seeing his saviour as the next person he'll follow in life. He easily bests the one-armed gold cloak and then drunkenly makes his way out of Flea Bottom. Killing members of the Watch is of course frowned upon, but it shows how a hedge knight will always do the right thing. This is something instilled in Dunk, and he stands up to Aerion even though he really shouldn't. Now the Watch was actually somewhat reformed after Aegon IV. As the monarch, he'd use them to help him get to brothels or bring him women. When Darren II then took over, he cast out most of the bad ones in about the space of a year, but it is clear that some bad apples remained. We then cut to the next morning where Dunk stares out a grate like how he did during episode 4. Here he sees Arlan stumbling about the street and knocking over a basket of green apples, which is perhaps a reference to Raymond Fossaway, the green apple perhaps. The woman here calls him a stupid old man though, which is something he later says when he sticks himself with his dagger. Dunk then follows him because Rafe was his home, but with her gone, there's no point in staying here. You also see how he's still got that nasty hole in his leg. This likely comes to get infected and he collapses later on, much like how Arlan died from the wound on his wrist. Through a hole in the wall, he sees Arlan saying, "Miss me?" when talking to his horses, which is something that Dunk did. Cutting to the night, this is a constant thing that Dunk sees before he goes to sleep. Even the opening of episode 4 played with the imagery of that, and it's something that constantly brings wonder to Dunk. So far, he's lived his life being stuck in a cellar, but Arlan brings wonder to his world. Dunk following him here as well is also a lot like the scene in episode 1 where Dunk came across Egg in the night. Here he catches Arlan sleeping under a tree, and in the book he calls this his pavilion. It's something that he embeds in Dunk, who will also sleep under several trees himself. He then picks up Arlan's sword and holds it, which is similar to episode 1.
Fits my grip as well as it ever fit his.
He also looks at his shield with a sigil looking far brighter than the faded one it becomes down the line. We then see why Arlan's in such a state in this flashback. The camera cuts to a burial mound with flowers in a helmet. This is Arlan's nephew, Roger of Pennytree. He was Arlan's squire before Dunk and died in the Battle of Redgrass Field. We can see flowers that look like red wildgrass, which is something I think Arlan picked up due to the name of the battle. We didn't actually know much about him until the second and third novellas, however I think having this here is a really great addition. Now as for the kid, he was killed by Gorman Peake, who plays a major role in the Mystery Knight. That story deals heavily with the Blackfyre Rebellion and should be adapted for season 3. As the Battle of Redgrass Field only seems to be a couple days prior, it also makes sense to have him only recently buried. I did even wonder as well if him shouting "leave the boy alone" and defending Dunk was a way to make up for losing Roger. Much in the same way that Tanzal could be a way to make up for Dunk losing Rafe. When you think about it though, all these little moments are basically like the butterfly effect in full effect, and how a tiny little thing can change everything forever. At the inn, the keeper said that a joust never changed the price of eggs, but we've seen these constant tiny things have massive repercussions. If Gorman Peake never killed Roger, Dunk would have never been Arlan's squire. If that didn't happen, then Baelor wouldn't have died during the Battle of Ashford, and the Mad King would have never been, well, mad, or a king. With his family killed as well, Dunk follows Arlan out of King's Landing, and we see the Red Keep in the background. At night, Arlan's absolutely wasted, and I did have to pause for a second because I thought he was shouting Bessie. Oh, no, I didn't go there. Gods, I was strong back then. Dunk then follows him through a rocky pass, and it resembles the Vale of Arran, which does make sense as the area is located north of the Crownlands. Arlan's drunk as a skunk with a Dunk rambling in the background, and he still practices his swordplay while Dunk whittles his stick. Reminds me a lot of Egg practicing as well, and it's just a nice way to show the characters have this one thing they're trying to live for. Arlan also looks like he's in the God's Wood, but the tree there isn't a weirwood, so it might not be that, but yeah, just thought I'd include that detail. Now as Arlan carries on through the fields and woods, it kinda sounds like he's speaking a butchered version of High Valyrian. Valyrian. Always fuck up the pronunciation of that, but I'm trying my best. I even bought a costume for it that I have to wheel out every week, and I fucking hate wearing it. Dunk then desperately drinks water, which makes him violently sick. Arlan then passes out drunk and wakes up to find that he slept on his dagger. It's here that he sees Dunk for the first time, and the boy collapses, and Arlan shows his true nature by providing something to drink. Which I did wonder if it was like a strong ale or a wine. It's very similar to what Dunk did as the prince followed him though and helped him set up his camp. So it is kind of why he was sympathetic to Egg pre the big reveal. He's then told to get up, which is something he hears in the book, and I love this deep cut reference. Dunk then wakes up as mud's in his visor, just like the novel. We can see that his face is in a very bad way, and throughout the work they kind of talk about how much self-doubt he has, that his face has just been completely mangled. Interestingly as well, his helmet doesn't look like the one in the book illustrations, and actually looks a lot more like the Hedge Knight comic. The battle is absolute chaos though, and Aerion flails his morning star at Dunk, who struggles to get up. Like the book, Dunk then bowls into Aerion's legs and takes him down. Aerion then pulls out what I believe is a rondel dagger. This is a weapon that knights in the Middle Ages used as a backup weapon, and they could quickly yank it out, stick it in between the parts of an enemy's armor, and thus, as we see, Dunk suffers from a stab wound. Luckily, Dunk grabs the blade as Humphrey Harding saves him by knocking Aerion off him. The pair then try to clash swords, only for Dunk to be bested almost instantly. Dunk has the reach and weight advantage though, and slaps him down. Also, love it when Red cheers, "Come on!" as she ended up being nice to Dunk. They did have somewhat of a kinship as she compared both their professions because the lords used their bodies. Manfred then looks around and is like, "Can you not?" And we see that Dunk is on the back foot. You can also see the Kingsguard next to Aerion doing sod all, and it's an insane battle that just feels so chaotic throughout. I love how they also don't use any music either, and it's just the sounds from the grunts and metal clanging that get the focus. Also thought it was great how Aerion's helmet gets smashed down as well, and the flames on the top flatten throughout the battle. To me, he also very much represents the man that killed Rafe, and Dunk is getting the chance to avenge her in a way that he didn't with him, if that makes sense. Aerion then throws a Hail Mary as he launches his sword at Dunk. Like a badass, the prince then grabs the sword back and tries to hit Dunk in the eyes with the hilt. In the book, Pate said it was a weak point, and this is something Dunk remembered during this fight. We also see Aerion lift his visor, whereas it was Dunk who did it in the books. Dunk then takes off his helmet and slashes Aerion's leg, and the prince is very lucky that Dunk didn't slash an artery. Maker then shouts his son's name and tries to go and save him. But look mate, your son's a total dickhead and the realm will be a lot better without him. Lionel tries to stop him, which leads to his horse being killed and the antlers on his helmet snap off. And that has to be pretty impractical. At least he manages to stop Maker from reaching Aerion. Meanwhile, Dunk has run out of stamina and just sits down. In the book, it says how he hears voices from the crowd, but then all of a sudden, everything just goes numb. His face throbbed, and he could feel cold wet metal pressing in against his cheek and temple. He broke my head and I'm dying. What was worse was the others who would die with him. Raymond and Prince, Baelor and the rest. I failed them. I'm no champion. I'm not even a hedge knight. I'm nothing. This is also slightly different from the book, as there Aerion stands above and taunts him. 3 heads it had, and wings bright as flame, red and yellow and orange. It was laughing. Are you dead yet, hedge knight? It asked. Cry for quarter and admit your guilt, and perhaps I'll only claim a hand and foot. Oh, and those teeth. But what are a few teeth? A man like you can live years on peas porridge. Egg is screaming get up though, and I love how he can hear how Dunk's hearing shot to shit. And the guy's face looks worse than Rocky's. Egg saying this is also similar how he cheered for Aerion to be killed in the joust the day before. We also see Gwyn and her father, and honestly this has to be one of the worst birthdays of all time. We then cut to the Lannisters and to Dunk, urging Dunk to get up. Also, shoutouts to our editor Matt for noticing that the hair here looks just like Lancel's. One little touch I like in the set design is that there's also a tree to the left of Dunk. Roger was buried near a tree, and so was Arlan, and Dunk may also be dead next to a tree, but thank the heavens he survives. Aerion then says,
"He's dead! It's over!"
But you've been a total moron here, like make sure he's dead first before you say that. The battle is pretty much over though, and Ashford then gives the signal to blow the horn. Wait, the horn? Is that the horn from the Winds of Winter cover? Winds of Winter Shadow Drop, is it? Nah, of course not. We're all going to be dead before that comes out, and Dunk then stands up like he's the goddamn Undertaker. The crowd then chant up as Dunk gets to fight Aerion. Notably, the fancy people in the nice seats don't do this, whereas it's the ones in the crowds that do it. In the book, the public came out to greet him and wish him luck as he was a knight who didn't forget their oath. So here, we get to see that the public in the show do indeed support him. It's an omission that we pointed out last time, also seen a couple of people mention it on Twitter, and I agree that it should have been included. I agree with myself there. They all just kind of want to see Aerion killed, and it adds a nice detail to how they feel about the monarchy. Dunk then gets on top of Aerion like the illustrations from the book and hits the prince with his shield. There's also a major contrast between this royal shield, which is made of strong metal, and Dunk's tatty wooden one that shattered in the first charge. Also wondered what he intended to do after his first joust. Dunk flung the battered shield away and wrenched up the visor of Aerion's helmet. A visor is a weak point, he remembered Steely Pate saying. The prince had all but ceased to struggle. His eyes were purple and full of terror. Dunk had a sudden urge to grab one and pop it like a grape between 2 steel fingers, but that would not be knightly. "Yield!" he shouted. "I yield," the dragon whispered, pale lips barely moving. We see that happen perfectly in the show, and it's such a good moment. However, no one can really hear it, and we then see as the fighting's still going on. Aerion also needs to withdraw his accusation for the bloody fighting to stop. We can see the two apples going head to head with Raymond slamming Stefan to the ground. Looks like his shield also has a green apple like the book, but I couldn't 100% make it out. Maester then fights off Lionel and Baelor. Maester lashes out and smashes Baelor with his mace across the head, which seems like 'tis but a scratch. However, this is actually the killing blow that later causes Baelor's skull to be broken. So yes, Baelor, it was indeed your brother who dealt you the blow that would end up being deadly. Dunk then grabs the prince and forces him to repeat that he yields. The sound design is stunning here as we switch from the muted hearing of Dunk to what other people hear. Aerion then withdraws his accusation, which finally brings an end to the battle, just like the book. And I bet Gwyn is like, can I have some cake or something fun instead? R.I.P. Gwyn. You would have loved Taylor Swift. Peyton Raymond then helped Dunk, and I love how we get this quick cut. Kinda speaks to what it says in the text, as Dunk has no idea what happened. Afterward, Dunk could not have said whether he walked from the field under his own power or had required help. He hurt everywhere, in some places worse than others. Am I a knight now in truth? He remembered wondering. Am I a champion? Dunk even thinks he killed Aerion, but Egg has to remind him that he spared him. He needs to be cut out of his armor as well, which is just like the novel. Raymond tells him that both the Humphreys have died, however, we don't learn yet who killed Beesbury in the show, which I think will be revealed next week. The lance at this point though has pushed the mail into his flesh, and Pate's idea is to get him drunk and pour boiling oil onto him, which is straight from the book as well. Baelor though says to use boiling wine as the oil will kill him. Dunk then kneels in front of him and says, I am your man, and Baelor replies saying he needs good men. This is all pulled directly from the text as well, and it shows that even in this pain and carnage, he longs to be a knight. Sadly though, we see what happens, and yeah, Dunk's dreams of working in the castle are just dashed in this scene. Now in the book we get a bit of extra info here, and Dunk says that Baelor's speech sounds slurred. He even thinks that he might have bitten his tongue during the fight, and that he just sounds like he sort of like this. I think Bertie Carvel gives a great performance though, as his speech makes him seem like something's not okay. He then says this line that comes directly from the work.
My fingers feel like wood.
Raymond then asks for help with the visor from Pate, which is just like the text as well. Pate then explains how it's smashed, and Baelor suspects it was Maester. In something that's in addition to what's in the book, Baelor then says that Maester is strong. Pate then realizes what's happened, and Baelor touches the back of his head. In the book, Dunk says he notices something red falling out, and that he sees something inside his head that looks grey and blue. And yeah, in medieval times, they obviously didn't know about brains being where a person lives. A person lives... Why? I don't know what I'm saying. Your brain is where you are. Worded that terribly, but in the book, his last words are, oh so lucky. We then get an image just like the illustration, and sadly, Darren's dream has now come true.
A great beast, with wings so large they could cover this meadow. It had fallen on top of you, but you were alive, and the dragon was dead.
Baelor then falls towards him, and Doug says,
Get up, sir. Get up, sir. No.
Which is just what Dunk was screaming for him to do in the trial, and again is right out of the book, which is a detail that I love. I keep saying, this is from the book, this is from the book, you know, probably doing your head in, but this is probably the most accurate of the three shows when it comes to the book being adapted for the small screen. I've seen lots of people saying that's why it's so good, but I think it's also a testament to the actors and the directors. It has everything from comedy to tragedy and even a short-lived romance. The novellas are fantastically fun short journeys, and showrunner Ira Parker has managed to add some superb scenes to The Hedge Knight, which also really fit in well with the tone of the world. Dunk then apologizes, and we cut to silence and then a lone guitar. It was a very shocking moment in the book for me, and I think it works even better on TV, and it just hits you with a gut punch as we cut to the credits. In the larger scheme of things, Maester is now a kinslayer, which is a millstone around his neck. It's similar to Brynden Rivers, who is also called the same thing after killing his half-brother Daemon Blackfyre. That's someone who I hope we see next season, and considering how accurate the show is to the book, I expect we will. But as of now and where we leave things, Dunk is the champion, but it's cost more than he ever expected. The realm would have had the best king since Aegon the Conqueror, but now the die is cast and Westeros is on the track for what we saw in the main series. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Sorry, Knight of the Nine Kingdoms. In typical Game of Thrones fashion, we had a big penultimate episode and then a finale that's dealing with the aftermath. Though very little happens in terms of plot, there's actually a lot in terms of setup to unpack. We also have House of the Dragon Season 3 in the summer, and oh god, oh George, oh no! As always, we're going to get into the episode in just a second, but firstly, a quick word from our sponsors, Displate. Now, today's sponsor needs no introduction, and if you want some art that makes your kingdom look incredible night and day, then you definitely need to go to Displate. Displate has over 2 million metal print posters that feature a range of brands like Marvel, DC, Game of Thrones, Star Wars, and more. I was very excited unpacking the delivery, and I got this amazing Targaryen sigil, this incredible Invincible artwork, this phenomenal Fallout one, and also this custom print. Yes, that is correct. Displate even let you upload your own images now, and since we last talked about them on the channel, they've also created their texture finish. This gives the poster this amazing 3D feel. You can't really see it in the video, but yeah, lovely, love it. Displate is super easy to attach to your wall as well. They use a specialized magnetic mounting system to hang them on the wall, which means once the magnet's in place, you can swap out the posters easily. Not only is each display printed on demand, but they also come with a fast delivery system and are signed off individually by a master of production to assure quality control. Massive thank you to Displate, who are offering a great deal through the link in the description. If you buy one Displate using the code Heavy Spoilers, guess what? You get 27% off, and if you buy more than that, you get a 35% discount. So my link saves you way more than just going through Google or the website address. Take your kingdom to the next level with these amazing Displate posters, and check out my link for that amazing deal. Thank you. Now we open with Lionel and his Maester staring over Dunk. You might notice he's leaning on some antlers, with these appearing outside his tent and on top of his crown. And they also make a great walking stick here too. What I love about this moment though is how it makes it seem like this is a comedy or an old Tarantino flick. The trunk scene from Reservoir Dogs sprung to mind, and it's such a funny way to open things up after the battle. Dunk's at his lowest point literally, and he's lying on the ground slumped against the tree that we've seen him sleeping at throughout the season. His new shield's also there completely split, showing how his quest for glory has ended in despair. Lionel then offers the booze, and I love how we cut to him against the tree sipping it. This is all while the Maester's burning what could be sage. This might be why Lionel calls him a witch in the scene, as it's been associated with witchcraft. Lionel also says,
"It's been a wonderful tournament. Shame it's all over."
He's loving it and is a lot different to Dunk. To him, Baelor was a sham, and we'll talk about what happens to the kingdom later in the spoiler section. Dunk, though, is a complete opposite to him when it comes to attitude. 3 people on their team died, so half of them, and the most notable of these was Baelor. Described as the finest knight of his age in the book, it's been a massive loss for the kingdom. For Lionel, though, this was a total blast, as he says home's brutally dull. This is referring to the Stallmans in Storm's End, which we saw at the end of House of the Dragon Season 1. He then offers Dunk the opportunity to come with him to hunt, hawk, and sail. Lionel is just like Robert, and the Baratheons find peacetime is dull. And look, we're going to stop with the Robert jokes, yeah, because I know it's annoying people. I know it's annoying. I'll move on. Now, though Dunk is just a hedge knight, the lords have seen firsthand his loyalty and spirit to the knight's oath. Thus, they realize that he's worthy. Getting these opportunities was everything that Dunk wished for, but again, it's a case of be careful what you wish for. Dunk wanted to sleep in a castle, and he ended up sleeping at one in a cell. He wanted to be a knight that fought in a tourney, and he ended up in the Trial of the Seven. All his life, he's wanted to be a knight for a lord, but ultimately, he chooses life on the road. He's realized that Arlan's way is the best, and has decided to become a hedge knight by choice. Despite his low-born status, Baelor wanted, and now Lionel wants him to work for them. Even by the end, Maekar offers him a chance to stay at Summerhall, and it's a theme that comes into play later during the 3rd novella. That is the Mystery Knight, which I want to touch upon more in our Season 2 predictions video, which will be coming soon. Lionel then says,
"Have you ever been to Tarth?"
Oh, what a reference that was! I'm sure everyone, including me, sat about the mention of it, with Brienne of Tarth being such a big character in the main series. Now, I'm sure you've seen the theories that it's been thought that Brienne is one of Dunk's descendants. Tarth is an island off the coast of the Stallmans, and as such, it is loyal to House Baratheon. Tarth is a site of striking natural beauty, which is probably why Lionel mentioned it to Dunk. But of course, it does hold a deeper meaning. As we know, Brienne's the daughter of Lord Tarth. In A Feast for Crows, Brienne remembers seeing a shield similar to Dunk's in her father's castle. She remembered how she'd run her fingertips across the cracked and fading paint, over the green leaves of the tree, and along the path of the falling star. Which has meant that over the years, readers have assumed that Dunk is indeed Brienne's ancestor. George R. R. Martin has never out and out confirmed it, but he has teased that the connection will be revealed in the future. Now, due to the release of the novels as well, we have a pretty idea of what's coming. A Sworn Sword is next, which is then followed by The Mystery Knight, which should make up seasons 2 and 3. Season 4 is obviously, not being published. There's no story for that, so we don't know for definite, but I do suspect that it will follow the planned 4th story, which is the She-Wolves of Winterfell. So maybe in that story we will learn more, or we'll at least see the groundwork laid for Dunk to travel out to Toth. The Maester then says that Dunk is dying because his wounds are beyond his abilities.
An itchy arsehole is beyond your abilities, my friend. Be gone!
As we saw last time, Baelor offered to send his Maesters to him, but I guess that offer died along with the prince. So he's stuck with his absolute idiot. I do really like the prop design here though, as we can see the Maester's chain. It looks far more fancy and ornate than even Grand Maester Pycelle's and Maester Lewin's chains, as well as the other ones used in House of the Dragon. Each medal represents a different area of expertise, such as iron for warcraft and black iron for ravenry. Here we have the 7-pointed star, which might be referring to mastery of the 7. There's also the anvil, despite George R. R. Martin saying how the Maesters don't train in the art of smithing. Lastly, there's also what appears to be a dragon curled up. Only 1 in 100 Maesters master Valyrian steel, but this guy's a doofus, so I do wonder if it's meant to be like a super deep cut joke. Lionel then dismisses the Maester and says,
"Come with me to Storm's End, and I will love you like a brother."
It's very Robert and Ned, you bastard-esque. I don't know what came over me there. And it calls back to this line in Game of Thrones.
You were the brother I chose.
However, this isn't on the cards for them, and Lionel then says that he will hate him like a brother if Dunk declines. This foreshadows something in the future for both of these characters, which I will say for that spoiler section at the end, so make sure you stick around. Dunk is pretty much down in the dunks though about the whole thing and says that he only brings pain and suffering to those around him. Alright mate, chill out. It's clear that Lionel doesn't think that the Targaryens were all that though, and to him,
the only good bug is a dead bug.
Sorry.
The only good dragon is a dead dragon.
I love seeing how the Lords and Highborns really think, and they're all annoyed by these alien dragon lords that have subjugated them. Raymond and Sefin spoke words that would get their heads cut off, and it's clear that the sentiments shared by a lot of people. Even the puppet show was seen as something in the book that could stoke the seeds of rebellion, and we're watching things fall into place that will lead to the Mad King's death. We have somewhat dramatic irony here as well, as we know that Lionel's descendants will go on to destroy the Targaryens. Robert will be king, and he'll ride through the lands, fucking your daughters, and we're not doing it. Now, as much as Dunk is torn up about Baelor's death, he didn't really risk anything in Lionel's eyes. There were 3 Kingsguard who couldn't touch him, and the book says that he had the best training and gear, and if he went against the crown, there were going to be absolutely no punishments for him. Lionel theorizes though that Baelor died as the gods do not favour a fraud. This is something the book actually touches upon just before the tourney, where they question if Baelor's fight is honourable. Baelor even says the gods will decide, and thus it's clear that in Lionel's eyes they made their choice. I think you can definitely have that read on it too, but personally I wouldn't put Baelor on fraud watch, as he at least did the right thing. He talks about how the gods also don't favour a fool, which is what Dunk believes he is. But Dunk has showed bravery and a true heart, though he's not really gaining much from it. Lionel then says how Dunk's being mocked by the gods instead of being favoured. He looks half dead and his shield's in tatters. Plus, Lionel is thinking about the future.
There's a war coming. We could be a force, you and I.
Now, he doesn't exactly say what war's coming, and it is unlikely that it's Robert's rebellion. That took place in 2082 AC, which is about 70-ish years after this season. Instead, what I think he's likely referring to is the second Blackfyre rebellion. We obviously saw the aftermath of the first one last week, and the second takes place in 212 AC. This series takes place in 209, so that's right around the corner. It's possible they may even bring bits of this across to season 2, and Little Dex might have let it slip that Henry Cavill is in the season in some way. Now, Peter Claffey has come out and said it was a mistake, he didn't mean it. George put down the gun, and not to read into it, but we will see. If not that, I think it could also just be read as Lionel talking in general. I think he may even mean that the realm is slowly souring on the Targaryens and war is coming either way. Back in the day, you know, they had dragons and could do what they wanted, and having all this power gave them less than pleasant personalities. Now though, they don't have their greatest assets and are getting beaten in tourneys by hedge knights, who've not even been in a fight before. So I think word of that could spread and Dunk might be a face for it, even though he's protecting one of the Targaryen children, which I think could also add a lot of drama to it. He also refers to Raymond as the apple boy, which cracked me up, and how the Humphreys fought and died for him as well. The book touches upon how one died in the battle and another from his wounds shortly after, whereas the show just had it so they both died in the fight. Also cracked up when he said,
"Good. Caravan departs after the roast."
And we then cut abruptly to a roast. Other great houses might choose to bury their dead in the dark earth or sink them in the cold green sea, but the Targaryens were the blood of the dragon, and their ends were writ in flame. As we see, Baelor's on a funeral pyre, which was similar to Aemon's funeral in House of the Dragon. Usually a dragon lights it up, but as discussed, there's none around anymore. Also looks a lot different to the one in the book, where he's lying in the state on his pyre. That talks about how he has a thin sliver of a helm, which we can gather is holding his head together. However, there is a panel removed over his face so that people can at least look at him. Now you might notice that there's also 2 Kingsguard there, despite being 3 used for the trial of the 7. Might be because in the book, Willem was in a bad way after the fight, and yeah, I wouldn't want to be there neither, mate. I like to think the Kingsguard got an almighty bollocking when they got back, as they let Aerion get his ass beaten twice, and the heir to the Iron Throne has died on their watch. I did even wonder if Maker might be offering Dunk a job, just as a way to get rid of the others, but 'twasn't happening. The Septon then announces Baelor's titles as the Prince of Dragonstone, heir apparent to the Iron Throne, Hand of King Daeron the Good. This is just like the book, however their Dunk's also in attendance. We then cut to Baelor, who is now next in line to the throne. He's nothing like his father, and he's basically only ever fought against like people who are past it or really old men. So he's basically just like the equivalent of Jake Paul. Baelor, the young prince, stood vigil at the foot of the bier while his father lay in state. He was a shorter, slimmer, handsomer version of his sire, without the twice broken nose that had made Baelor seem more human than royal. Baelor's hair was brown, but a bright streak of silver gold ran through it. The sight of it reminded Dunk of Aerion, but he knew that was not fair. Egg's hair was growing back as bright as his brother's, and Egg was a decent enough lad for a prince. But there is very much the feeling that he could really go either way. We will save what happens to him in the spoiler section, and behind him is his wife Kira of Tyrosh. She has the trademark colourful hair which we saw in House of the Dragon. They sadly had 2 stillborn sons, and a preacher said how this was the work of Brendan Rivers, aka the Blood Raven, who was subsequently executed. There's also Manfred Dondarrion, who is absolutely on fraud watch at this point. He's related to Jenna Dondarrion, aka Baelor's wife, who died about 15 years before this show started. So that's why he's here. We then see Maker and Egg. We also see who I think is Aerys Targaryen, and next to him, what I believe is his wife Aelnor Penrose, who is also his cousin. In the book, the king wouldn't let Baelor be buried in his armour, and wanted to give him a funeral where it was away from the reminder of battle. They put Baelor's ashes in an urn, and you can see this at the bottom in the middle of the screen. Usually, Dragon House ashes are kept on Dragonstone, but sometimes they're spread much like real life. We have seen the Silent Sisters before in the show as well, and they prepared Jon Arryn for his funeral. It's here that Dunk then spots Baelor. We can see that he has a white streak in his hair, which is in the book, and I love this attention to detail. Baelor never had that trademark white hair, and he inherited his mother's darker hair. This is just a nice little character thing that's meant to make you question whether he's good or bad. Dunk then tries to offer his condolences, and Baelor says that Baelor died in his armor. This part of the scene is completely new for the show, and I believe it's intended to display how Baelor feels shame, or Valor, however the fuck you pronounce it. Now, during the Middle Ages, armor was usually inherited from the father. So when Baelor says how many fathers died and their sons, it implies that it was an unusual turn of events. Kind of like parents shouldn't bury their children, that sort of thing, but the reverse. He then says how his father was young and had it in him to be as good as King Aegon the Conqueror. He calls him Aegon the Dragon, which shows that they view their ancestor in a far better light than the other folk who call him a conqueror. In the book, it also says his age is 39, but yeah, we've seen throughout the shows how they constantly age characters up. Even Dunk and Egg are like older in this show, and Bertie was 48 in real life, so I think they just didn't include that line because of that, because it would have been a very hard paper round, especially since youthful me is only 1 year younger than 39 and you can compare me to Bertie. As always, it seems in Game of Thrones though, the ones who are meant to rule never seem to do so. Rhaenys was overlooked for Viserys, Robb Stark was murdered, and Jon Snow ended up back up north. Baelor also asks why the gods would take his father and leave Dunk, which is something the Hedge Knight has no answer for. The saddest thing on top of this as well is that Baelor was struck by Maekor's mace after Aerion had already yielded. He said he'd given up, but no one other than Dunk could hear him. So the trial was completely over, well, it should have been completely over, and Baelor died for nothing. The prince then tells him to be gone. Look mate, take it up with Aerion and Darren, those are the fucking reasons your dad's dead. Dunk then hobbles back to find the pavilions being taken down as the Born Day festival's over. Everyone seems to look at him and he's far too tall to keep a low profile. Also doesn't help that Raymond then bellows out his name. In the book he actually went back to his tree, which is where the Targaryen soldiers told him that Maekor wanted to see him. But I love this new scene. Dunk says that everyone blames him for Baelor's death and we get such a touching moment. The pair then hug and I love how Raymond just lingers for just a little bit too long. What an absolute bromance. Also love how Dunk's rope belt is held together with a horseshoe. Good God, man! Now it turns out that Raymond's been kicked out of Stefan's tent and so has a tiny new little one instead. It's a sorrier sight than some of the ones I've slept in, but he is the real winner here as he bested Stefan in the Trial of the Seven. And it was the first Trial of the Seven in 100 years. Also, as we find out, he's gotten another use out of his lance, so to speak. We also get a better look at his shield, which now has a green apple. In the book, he hastily changed this to have a green apple so as to not be confused with his cousin, but this happened right before the tourney. It was always weird to me when I was reading it because he joined really quick and then all of a sudden had a whole new shield and a green apple in the space of like 2 seconds. So yeah, I think this is them just fixing that logic leap and having it after the tournament, which is when people would actually have the time to paint it. He then says,
"Better to be an unripe green apple than a wormy red one."
This line is actually out of the book itself, but there it was said just before the trial. Then turns out that he spent the night with Red. He introduces her as Rowan, which is actually the actress's name. I call her Titanic, mate, because 1,000 men went down on her. Also felt that Raymond was similar to Podrick, and it sounds like he's more like him than I ever expected. Now she found him after the trial and helped him out his armor, but he didn't sheath his sword, so she believes she's with child. And he's like, the pair have got married though, and she's now Lady of the Green Apple Fossaways. And you have to respect the hustle. Red is a completely new addition to the show, and I feel like she's intended to mirror Dunk as she compared themselves jokingly.
Find a safer trade, lad. You'll be happier for it. One whore to another.
In the book, the title is Fossaway of the new barrel as well, and I love how Dunk pretends not to know her, and he just looks very awkward as they kiss. But careful there, mate. Now, he may be as thick as the castle wall, but he can recognise someone baby trapping his boy a mile off, and he obviously knows what she's been up to. The awkwardness is cut through though as the Targaryen soldiers arrive to take him to Maekor. In the book, he thought he might be killed for what happened, but Maekor was actually with them, and when Dunk was hesitant, he popped out from behind them. Yeah though, I can imagine Dunk's probably happy to get away from the newlyweds kissing. Like the book, Maekor then motions for his gods to go away so the pair can speak in private. He says that he's sending Aerion to the Free Cities, and I love how last week, Rafe and Dunk struggled to get enough coin to get there, but because these guys are rich, he's just being sent there very easily, just for being a naughty little boy. This happens exactly like how it is in the book, and we learn that Maekor exiled him to Lys in the hopes that he would become better. He kind of did, and at one point even joined the Second Sons. The character did end up returning to Westeros though, and he came back to put down the Third Blackfyre Rebellion. Aerion then married his cousin Daenora Targaryen, and the pair had a child. We've talked about his fate a lot in the spoiler section, so we'll talk about it more at the end, but that's kind of the path that he's on. Maekor then talks about himself and says that some will say he meant to kill his brother. The lines are a bit different here, as Maekor in the show is certain that he was the one who hit his brother in the head. Whereas here, it's kind of ambiguous, and he's trying to work out if he did it or if one of the Kingsguard broke their oath. Him and Aerion were like the only people with maces though, which did mean that it was likely him, despite not remembering delivering that final blow. Dunk clears it all up though and says that while Maekor swung the mace, Prince Baelor died defending him, so it's not Maekor's fault. He says this in the book as well, and even has some sympathy for the prince. However, being a kinslayer is a major burden to carry. It weighed heavily on Aemon Targaryen and House of the Dragon after Lucerys died, and Brynden Rivers was called a Kinslayer after killing Daemon Blackfyre. This was seen as a cursed position, and the gods didn't favour those who killed their kin. So it's gonna basically be a millstone around both of their necks. Maker then drops some lines from the book, including how when Daeron II dies, whoever comes next will run on hard times, and people will say Baelor wouldn't have let this bad thing happen. Dunk replies though, saying that if he hadn't fought, he'd have lost his hand and foot. They're silly laws, they're what meant that Baelor died. Like the book, Maker then asks how his foot could be worth a prince's life. However, in the book, he also mentions the two Humphreys as well. I do wish that they had added this here, as it adds even more weight to the outcome of the trial. Unfortunately, the Humphreys didn't get much development at all, and because of that, I don't think they've really added the weight to their deaths. Dunk then thinks it might be that the realm needs his foot more than a prince, which Mako kind of scoffs at. However, down the line he plays a crucial part and will eventually save Rhaella Targaryen at the tragedy of Summerhall. She then gave birth to Rhaegar, who then fathered Jon Snow, and Jon saved the Seven Kingdoms, so yada yada yada. The realm does need him, just not yet. Maker is clearly furious though, and after Baelor's death, he turns cruel and is a terrible king to his people. In the book, Maker also says, it may be that the gods have a taste for cruel japes, or perhaps there are no gods. Perhaps none of this had any meaning. I'd asked the High Septon, but the last time I went to him, he told me that no man can truly understand the workings of the gods. Perhaps he should try sleeping under a tree. Showrunner Ira Parker also recently did an Ask Me Anything on Reddit and explained that a few fan favourite lines were cut, which I think this section probably included. Asking if there are no gods kind of turns the whole thing into being in the realm of it all having no meaning, and thus potentially his brother died for nothing. All in all though, the biggest cut line for me was Steely Pate saying that Dunk was a knight who remembered his oath. Parker mentioned that was actually in the script, but was then cut, which I think is a shame. However, it is actually refreshing to have a showrunner speak with such honesty. Maker then says how Egg's grown fond of Dunk and won't squire for anyone else. Dunk just says he needs a stern hand, which is something that pays off later when Daeron discusses how his Aerion used to be a pleasant kid. It's the absolute best offer he's going to get as well. He can live at Summerhall, which is something that he dreamed of in episode 2.
If I could call myself a champion of Ashford Meadow, maybe some great house might take me into its service. Perhaps even House Targaryen.
So he is the champion technically, which is something he thinks right after the trial in the book. Maker then says how his master at arms will finish his training as he has much to learn. This is something that Lionel also offered at the start of the episode, and it kind of carves out two possible paths. For the moment though, he's done with princes, which Egg overhears, and Dunk then catches him. This is completely different in the book, and there he kind of accepts it like we get later on. Maker doesn't say anything when he offers to take him as a hedge knight, and he just stands there moving his jaw before walking out the room, which we'll talk about later. They also added a lot more in between these moments for the show, with it being clear that his dad has no idea he's gone, whereas in the book, it's kind of him accepting that that's the best way to stop Aegon becoming his brothers. We then join Dunk and Egg in front of a window, and it's shot a lot like the cell scene from earlier in the season. Here though, they're side by side and level, rather than being separated by class and name. He asks Dunk if he's in a lot of pain, and I'm surprised that he hasn't been given milk of the poppy. Upset at Dunk for not wanting the boy to squire for him, he then says,
Maybe you're not the knight I thought you were.
Bit of a privilege take there, mate. You almost died because you lied. And then he had to fight for his life, which is something given a lot more context a bit later when Egg is in Arion's room. We then cut to a flashback at a tree, which I believe is where Arlan was buried at. In the book, Maker and Dunk actually spoke at this elm tree, and the illustration looks similar to this shot. Dunk then remembers a moment just before Arlan died, and he asks Dunk if he ever heard the story of Pennytree. Dunk then says, yeah, I've heard it loads. You talk about all the fucking time. Like, it's like when we were doing House of the Dragon breakdowns, and we just kept mentioning blood and cheese all the time. It was like every fucking... Even my editors were like, I'm sick of fucking House of this blood and cheese shit. It's basically like that when you've been told the same story over and over and over again. But we as an audience haven't heard it. But yeah, Arlan is of course Arlan of Pennytree, and we see Dunk hammering one into a tree later to play into this notion. Arlan explains that when the Lord calls his banners, the men and boys would nail a penny to the tree in the square. When they come back, they remove it, and the moral at the end is how hard it is to find a spot these days, and it highlights how many people who went to war never ended up returning. His nephew Roger would have been one of these boys who never retrieved their penny. And I did wonder if you would mention the boy by name, but it just kind of gets skipped over. We of course visited Roger's grave last week though, and it's obviously a sore subject for Arlan. Dunk then asks why Arlan never knighted him.
Did you think I'd leave you?
Now, why I think it is because he lost Roger and he doesn't want to lose anyone again. We've seen how dangerous these tourneys can be, and not only could Dunk go off and journey alone, he could also die in the lists. I think Arlan did it as a way to keep him safe, as he's already lost his previous squire and family. He's seen all these men go off to war that didn't return and cared more about Dunk than he ever let him know. The reluctance to knight him also reminds me a lot of vampires and their familiars. Like the character who in What We Do in the Shadows who waited like 10 years to become a vampire. Dunk then says he wouldn't leave and that it must have been something else. Arlan is quiet, and I love the fact that we think he's dead before he then finishes his story. Arlan then says,
"A true knight always finishes a story."
Now I feel like this is a very cool meta moment. Dunk is thinking that he should carry on with Egg, which is why he does it, as the show needs to finish the story. It's also a big moment as it confirms that Dunk was never knighted. He hesitated when Raymond asked him to dub him, which left Lionel to do it himself. He probably also didn't even know the vow, as it was of course never said to him. I do wonder as well if it's going to come out down the line and we'll have it revealed that Dunk was on Fraud Watch and never a knight. I think we could also get a great moment when someone knights him for real, but yeah, let me know your thoughts on how you think this reveal's gonna go. Going for a drink, we then see how depressed he is. My guy is almost crying in the club right now as everyone's enjoying their last moments of the tourney. It's like when you're drinking your last beer and they start taking the tents down at the festival. You just feel like, oh, it's over. Raymond then tries to make small talk and ask how they get the bees to swarm like that. It's Humphrey Beesbury's casket, and we can see 3 holes on the side that look like his sigil. In the back, you can also see Maekar drinking with his Kingsguard. Rowan Krakenhall also has an almighty shiner. Rowan is then shocked as her husband asks if they used magic to get the bees to swarm. She says how they put the queen in the coffin so that the bees just clamber around it, and that the fights turned his brain into applesauce. Apple pun that. I think it kind of also plays the notion of how the queen, well, royalty have this vast swarm all trying to get to their position to please them, but all it really leads to is death, because it's a coffin which represents death. And yes, it is a bit of a reach, I will give you that one. Dunk is fed up of it though, and says he's not happy about his legendary status. We even hear the kids saying, showing how he's won the hearts of the common folk. We then get Darren daring to show his face in the tent. Dunk is rightfully furious as the prince is rude to his serving boy.
Have you no shame coming here?
He really is the worst, but he has a massive scar across his face. This scene then continues on the theme of the episode, which is Dunk asking why he was spared when Baelor wasn't. Here, the cruel fate is that the worst people survive, such as Darren. He's a drunken, useless, failed son who never hits a thumbs up and basically complains all the time about how his dreams upset him. Oh, boo-hoo, my dreams upset me. Dreaming of Lisa Ann last night, I'm so upset. Shut the fuck up and grow up. Darren then asks if he will take Egg as his squire.
My brother wasn't always such a little monster.
This is a callback to his line just after the trial was set. It's a classic case of nature versus nurture. Aerion would have been heavy spoiled and believes that he has the blood of the dragon. This has turned him into a creature who believes he's above all else and can do what he wants. It's a trait the Targaryens share and will ultimately bring an end to their rule. Darren then says,
no doubt we'll make a man of him too.
A wise witch also once said,
are people born wicked? Or do they have wickedness thrust upon them?
Now it's quite a nuanced take on the Targaryen madness and cruelty. He says that perhaps the seeds of madness are sown in the womb. From the horrible Aemon to Daenerys' sudden turn to madness, the Targaryens are cursed. The inbreeding may have been the cause, but the divine right to rule and privilege would have made him cruel as well. We often see in real life how people given power are corrupted by it, and I think it's a really great way to show what's driving Dunk to raise Egg right. Talking about how Aerion liked fishing as a child, we then cut to a fish with a knife through it, subtly playing in the idea that Aegon could drive a knife into him very soon. Egg looks sad on his bed and sees that his hair's growing back. It's not going to be too long before he'll look like a Targaryen once again, and to him, he'll be the people that he detests once more. However, he's got a chance to grow up and be unlike any other Targaryen. His adventures with Dunk do affect how he is in the future, and he tries to stop the family intermarriage and improve on the lives of the small folk. The hair, though, is the family's trademark, and having this back, it's like, I'm becoming a monster. They're like the people I fucking hate. He also, of course, has massive beef with Aerion.
Aerion used to come into my bedchamber at night. put his knife in between my legs. He had too many brothers, he'd say. Maybe one night he'd make me his sister, then he could marry me.
We then see the reverse of this with Egg now doing the same thing. Going into Arion's bedchamber with a knife, he wants to kill him, which as we mentioned would be regarded as kinslaying, which is a grave taboo in Westeros.
I wish that Duncan had killed him.
Aerion is your brother, and the Septons say we must love our brothers.
Baelor's words clearly didn't work on him, and we then see Maester catch him. He knows what it's like to have killed one's brother, and thus little Egg drops the knife. It's probably the only kindness that Egg's ever been shown by his father, and it's clear that he also sees him as his last son. The prince is then told that Dunk wishes to speak with him. Before they talk though, we get another meeting of Dunk and Gwyn. She doesn't blame him for ruining her name day though, as what they did to him was horrible, which is quite a departure from this.
You're making stupid.
Even this diva thinks he was right to do what he did, and it shows how this man has slowly changed perceptions in the kingdom. Though he would come to protect a Targaryen, he's also helping to sow the seeds for their fall, which is such a great way to take the story. Gwyn also probably just wanted a car or something, but she's been forced to watch people get their skulls smashed in. Yay! Maester then appears and Dunk tells him that Baelor told him the realm needed good men, just like the book. But yeah, like I touched on before, this scene in the books, it's all part of that one meeting, but they've just kind of spread it out into two. As we see, Dunk has decided to take Egg to Squire, but not at Summerhall. In case you don't know, this was also a castle that in reality was more like a palace. Summerhall basically plays in the Targaryen tradition, and the first prince was the Prince of Dragonstone, and thus the second was made the Prince of Summerhall. Dunk believes that he's better served away from the trappings of highborn life. He wants to give Egg the life he had with Sir Arlan in the hopes that it will humble him. Maester forgives it though, saying that he's the blood of the dragon and cannot sleep in a ditch or eat salt beef, which is also stuff that comes from the book. Like the novel, the characters then compare that to Aerion. That prince never slept in a ditch and only ate nice rare beef. To Dunk, it's not that makes the man, but the experiences that they go through. Aerion was spoiled, and thus he ended up spoiled because of it.
Manners maketh man.
Darren never slept in a ditch, I'll wager, Dunk said, very quietly. And all the beef that Aerion ever ate was thick and rare and bloody, like his nut.
All the beef Aerion ever ate was thick and rare and bloody.
Maester Targaryen, Prince of Summerhall, regarded Dunk of Flea Bottom for a long time, his jaw working silently beneath his silvery beard. Finally he turned and walked away, never speaking a word. Dunk heard him riding off with his men. When they were gone, there was no sound but the faint of a thrum dragonfly's wings as it skimmed across the water. In the show though, he says he's his last son, which you can take one of two ways. The first is that he's the last to be born, however I read it as him being the last one that he still sees as a son. The rest have all failed or turned into monsters, and thus it's quite a harrowing line. Alright love, chill out. Dunk then heads out and we see Sweetfoot once again. Dunk had promised to buy her back, but the ride or die Raymond bought the horse back instead. This isn't in the book, as Dunk and Egg actually head out right after the scene with Maester. However, as the show has expanded on the friendship of these two, we get a really cool scene. Raymond assumes that Dunk is going with Lionel, but he has plans elsewhere. We hear Raymond is thinking of expanding his cider operations, and he would go on to found Magna's Cider. That's a joke by the way, Dunk then suggests that Raymond take her to the Orchid, which will suit her best, and Raymond gives her a green apple. In the book, both Arlan and Dunk made sure their horses always got an apple, which is a nice touch from the writers. Dunk's influence is clearly rubbed off on Raymond though, who was surprised that Dunk spoke to his horses earlier in the season, showing that good men can make a difference in the world. Dunk then puts a penny on the tree, just like Arlan's story. I love how the penny also has the 7-pointed star on it. In episode 1, we saw how the gold piece had a dragon, so the Targaryens put their sigil on the most valuable coin, while religious symbols on the lowest denomination. This shows he favours the gods rather than the family who've put him through so much shit, even though he's clearly still fond of Egg. He's battered and bruised while leaving as well, but can finally call himself a knight. Speaking to Chestnut, he wonders where to go next as Egg arrives. Just like the book, he corrects him not calling him sir, and Egg says that his father said he's to serve him. However, in the show, Maester has no idea that Egg's gone and has wandered off alone. We have come full circle though, as the prince who is an Egg has followed Dunk again for another adventure. His traveller's cloak is very Hobbit-like, which makes sense as George R.R. Martin was heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings. Dunk also says Chestnut is his and not to sit atop Thunder. This calls back to when Dunk first saw him on the horse in the stables, and it's a great line from the book and just fills you with a sense of adventure. The road goes ever on and on down from the door where it began, and we watch as the pair talk about the 7 kingdoms. Egg corrects his knight by saying that there's 9 kingdoms, which is also a very funny moment. This has been like a constant thing throughout the fandom that we like. There's been constant conversations about it. And at the time of Aegon's conquest, you know, there were 7 kingdoms, which were the Kingdom of the North, the Kingdom of the Vale, the Kingdom of the Isles and Rivers, the Kingdom of the Rock, the Kingdom of the Reach, and the Kingdom of Dawn. Fuck. But yeah, everyone messes them up, and after Aegon united them all, the 7 kingdoms were born. However, since then, the Crownlands became its own place, and the Iron Islands were conquered in 2 AC. Dawn then became part of the kingdoms as well, after Prince Marin Martell married Darien II's sister Daenerys. Again, it's quite a long-running question amongst the fans, and it is funny how they made a new title sequence for it. And I do wonder if it's going to be Night of the Nine Kingdoms Season 2. Egg then suggests they head to Dawn, as he's heard they have good puppet shows there, which refers to the idea of Dunk finding Tanzell. This is the final line that ends the novella, and it's clearly showing that Egg will make sure they catch up with her. Dunk then thinks of her a few times across the next 3 novella, and Martin has given the showrunner Ira Park an additional 10 to 12 stories for Dunk and Egg. So I do hope that Dunk meets Tanzell in one of the unpublished ones. We then see Arlan right along with them, which was such a good moment. Dunk's now taken Arlan's place as he took Roger all those years ago, and we've seen the Squire become a knight himself. Great moment, great way to end the season, and we get a kind of mid-credits stinger as we see the Targaryens in Ashford. They're all leaving, and Darren and Aerion are a sorry sight as Maester looks for his son. It's very Home Alone-y when they realise Kevin's gone, but yeah, these guys are all on fraud watch right now. The show then plays 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie. It's all about the life of a coal miner and working hard only to get in more debt. It's a bit like Dunk and how he's worked hard for the Tourney and now he's back to square one. You could say Arlan was of penny tree and Dunk is now penniless. Thanks. Overall, I've loved this season, and while the episodes have been short, I feel like they've got a lot from them, and it's been a nice, quaint story that's focused more on storytelling and characters than big, bombastic, over-the-top stuff. Like, I remember when they announced this, and everyone was like, what the fuck is this shit? Where's the dragons at me? It's got no dragons in. And even I was like, oh, I don't know if this is going to keep people entertained, because it's quite a short story, but done a fantastic job and have proven me wrong. The show even managed to expand on certain parts of the story itself, and it's just really fleshed it out. The acting and cast are perfect too, and our Dunk and Egg couldn't have been better suited for the roles. So yeah, really enjoyed it, and there is some things that I next want to discuss in our spoiler section. Don't know when the next season will be, and there will be some of you that hear this and forget that you've learned all these spoilers, so why not treat yourself to a spoiler section that you've never seen before? If not though, thank you as always for sitting through the video, and I really appreciate you coming on this journey with us. It really means a lot, and we try and do these videos as in-depth as possible. I know the big meme at the moment is fucking Kevin spoilers. The videos are longer than the episodes themselves, but yeah, we're just trying to do as much as possible. Take you through the book so you learn to love that, take you through the show and just the history of everything, and thank you for coming on that journey. Cheers. Also, before I forget, Sheridan has done a fantastic job running the merch store over the last year. He's really brought in all these designs that you see behind me. They're absolutely brilliant. If you go to the merch store below the video, you can pick up one of the t-shirts inspired by the show, stuff like our Cyclops one, Fallout stuff. It's all there, and there's lots of discounts running at the moment. Just have to get that plug in before I forget. Now, the next novella is The Sworn Sword. It's a year and a half after the end of the Hedge Knight, and Dunk is working for Sir Eustace Osgrey. The Lord has a castle called Standfast, which can be found in the Reach. Dunk has to settle a dispute over a stream that's drying up, and it brings him into conflict with Lady Rohan. She is the first new character that's been cast, with Lucy Boynton playing the role. It's a fantastic story, and I'm very excited to see this brought across to the small screen. There's also theories as well that this is going to introduce Henry Cavill in some way due to what Dex said in that interview. Again, this is all being denied. Andrew Garfield is not in Spider-Man No Way Home. We did land on the moon, but yeah, it's all being denied. And it is possible that we may get the second Blackfyre rebellion, which took place in 212 AC, again, roughly 3 years after this story. Or they might save that for season 3. We also know that Lionel and Dunk actually come to blows later in the timeline. Once Egg becomes king, his son Duncan, who's named after his best mate, ends up causing a rebellion. Egg arranged for Duncan to marry one of Lionel's daughters. However, like Robb Stark, he broke the betrothal and married a commoner. This was Jenny of Old Stones, who's mentioned in the main series via Jenny's song. Lionel was then enraged by this and called himself the Storm King after splitting from the Iron Throne. The rebellion ended though after Duncan beat Lionel in single combat. To keep the peace, Princess Raelle was then sent to Storm's End to be Lionel's cupbearer. It was also promised that she would marry Lionel's heir Ormond Baratheon. This then meant that Targaryen blood flowed through the Baratheon line, which is why he had a better claim to the throne after his rebellion. This is bitterly ironic considering that Lyanna Stark was betrothed to Robert and he started a rebellion because a Targaryen stole his girl. Now regarding Baelor, he then dies of what's called a spring sickness, which leads to Aerys Targaryen taking the throne after Daeron II dies. His wife then married Maekor's son, Daeron the Drunken, and they had a kid named Baelor Targaryen. He dies after catching the pox off a hooker, and that's it, in a very undignified way for most of the princes in the show. As for Aerion, he also dies trying to become a dragon after drinking wildfire. Dunk and Egg then seemingly perish at Summerhall when a blaze is caused that the pair get caught up in. However, spoiler King Dex has revealed that George told them they in fact survive it, which was a theory that we had earlier in the season. Aegon stepping back then allows things to happen with the Mad King, and yeah, Robert Baratheon takes over. And imagine Robert Baratheon taking over or something. No, couldn't happen to me.
Get out! Your mother was a dumb whore with a fat ass. Did you know that? Gods are strong.
Ned, you bastard. I'm back. You heard the hand. The king's too fat for this armor. Oh, Bessie, your mother was a dumb whore with a fat ass. Did you know that? Go find the breastplate stretcher now. Paul is no more, you bastards. It's me, Robert fucking Baratheon.